Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the D in WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku rescued 3 lost souls. All credits for this video go to their respective authors. So please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku held on to the little girl and boy in his arms, protecting them from the onslaught of attacks. The girl whimpered as a bullet flew by. Kouta shrieked as it grazed Izuku. "Nai-san, are you okay?" She sounded panicked and he didn't want that right now. It was already difficult to run with all the injuries and 2 children holding onto him. He didn't want one of them panicking. "I'm fine, Eri." Izuku looked up and saw a high building. "Hold on tight, please." They tightened their arms around the boy's neck and shoulders as he started to scale the building from the fire escape. Izuku, he looked down at their faces with a smile. He had a split lip with blood running down his face, but he still smiled. "Are they still following us?" Before he could answer, Kouta lights rushed past them, followed by bullets. Izuku ducked and went back to running. Eri whimpered as Kouta hugged her closer and Izuku tightening his grip around them both. "Everything's going to be okay. I won't let them touch either of you." He kept running, adrenaline pumping through him and numbing the pain. "What about you? You're hurt and bleeding. If you let me, I know. I'm not letting you do that. Don't worry, okay?" He smiled at her while Kouta looked like he was going to cry along with her. It was interrupted by another bullet flying by and grazing his leg. After running and dodging for an hour, they had finally gotten some good distance. The only problem now was to find some place to hide. He kept running across roofs when he spotted an opening and looked to the 2 kids in his arms. "Eri, Kouta, I need you to hold on tight. This might hurt a little." She nodded her head and gripped tighter, with Kouta doing the same, even drawing a little blood, but he didn't mind. He ran until he got to the edge of where it was. He looked behind them only to see the group getting closer. He looked down again and took in a deep breath. He turned his back to the ground with the 2 on his chest. He looked down to them before jumping off the edge. He flipped twice before landing on his back, scraping it against the cement. He grunted as he landed before scooting himself against the wall. Eri was about to say something, but Izuku clamped his hand over her mouth gently as they all ran past them. Izuku waited till he heard nothing before letting her mouth go. "Nai-san, you need help. You're really hurt." She looked like she was going to cry as she held onto his shirt, with Kouta looking over his injuries. "Eri, I'm fine. I'm more worried about you. Are you okay?" "What about you, Kouta? Are you hurt?" She nodded her head slowly. Not believing it, he lifted her up and started looking her over. He noticed a few scraps. He gave her a look that made her chuckle lightly as he began to fix her up with the little first aid supplies they had. He did the same with Kouta and tried to clean them both of the slight blood he got on them. As soon as he finished, he stood up again shakily and picked up the 2 in separate arms. He began to walk out of the alley to see no one there. He walked around the city until he felt someone watching him. "Someone's watching. If something happens, run and don't stop." Both nodded their heads slowly with tears forming. They just got him back. They can't lose him again. Aizawa just wanted to go to bed. It was already almost 5 a.m. and he still had to teach in the morning to a bunch of stuck-up students that he would probably expel since he was in the mood. He was thinking about heading home finally when he heard gunshots. He perked up and called the police. "This is Underground Hero Eraserhead. Shots have been fired on 40th Street. I need backup." Luckily, it wasn't long till backup arrived in the form of Midnight, Ingenium, and a few police cars. "Eraserhead, what is it?" Midnight asked, already serious about the situation. "I heard shots fire over there." He pointed to where they were already heading. It sounded like they were chasing someone, and it wasn't normal gunfire. Sounds like there were quirks involved. "Are we sure it wasn't any police?" Ingenium asked as they saw signs of guns and scorch marks while they ran to the location. "If it was, they would have told me when I called." They finally made it to the area, seeing a group of men looking around widely before settling on the heroes. "Do they look like cops?" Midnight yelled as they began to take down the group with a little help from police. "Shut up." When they had finished taking down the group and tying them up, Aizawa began questioning them. "Who are you chasing?" Aizawa asked in a cold voice. One of the villains began to shack. He focused his questions on that one, getting a fast reply. 3 kids. "Why?" The villain tried not to answer as the others were being loaded into cop cars. "Why?" Aizawa asked again, this time almost yelling. "I don't know. All I know is that they escaped and the boss wanted them back." Aizawa glared harsher at the man as Midnight and Ingenium finally joined. "Do you have a way of tracking them?" The villain nodded his head and slowly pulled out a small phone-looking device. "Everyone that works for the higher-ups and watched them has one. The chip is on the oldest's neck." Aizawa took the device as the police began taking the man away. "We want to go after them?" Midnight asked, seeing the light not too far from them. "Not everyone. If these kids just escaped and got chased, they're not going to like a big group and think it's a possible threat," Aizawa explained as he began moving. "You want our help?" Ingenium asked this time. "Maybe. If something goes wrong, we'll have to knock them out and get them help. But Tensei, go home to you brother and get some sleep." The hero nodded before leaving them. The two soon made their way to where the tracker was. They perched on a building looking for the kids when Midnight gasped quietly. Aizawa. She slowly pointed to a slow-moving body. Once Aizawa's eyes adjusted, he saw 3 people, one bigger than the other 2 and carrying them, but that's not what made her gasp. It was the fact that the taller one seemed to be dripping blood on the concrete and not breathing properly. They got closer and saw the older lean down and whisper something before tilting his head slightly and then finally speaking. Hiding in the shadows isn't going to work. He set the 2 children down and turned to face them. I can see you. As he said that, they finally got a good look at him, and it wasn't pretty. He had a white button-up that almost looked red now, with a black vest, black gloves covering his hands, and black pants. But that wasn't what surprised them. It was all the bleeding wounds from his head to his legs and the now obvious scars littering his arms and a slash across his cheek. Once he admitted that he could see them, they jumped down, trying not to scare them, but failing, seeing as the 2 kids hid behind his legs with tears in their eyes. "We aren't going to hurt you," Midnight tried to explain, showing her hands in a surrender gesture. "That's what the last guy said. Now tell me who you are." Midnight was caught a little off guard, but Aizawa stepped up and noticed the boy's eyes immediately fly to him while putting a hand to his side, shielding the kids. "My name's Aizawa Shouta, otherwise known as Eraserhead. This is Kayama Nimari Aka Midnight. Now who are you?" The boy's eyes shifted across them before quickly going to the children, then back to the heroes. "So you're all pros." Hearing that, the little girl seemed to almost perk up while the boy seemed to glare a little and gripped onto the hand, the older boy's hand. "What do you want then?" "We heard gunfire and found a group of men." Aizawa noticed the slight flinch the older boy gave while the 2 others hid more. "We captured them and asked who they were chasing. They told us 3 kids and that the oldest has a chip in his neck. I took it out near here," he explained, rubbing his neck slightly. He pulled it back down to his side, showing more blood. "That explains why it didn't show you here." The boy nodded his head. He whipped the blood onto his pants before putting it back down for the little girl to hold. "Would you mind coming with us? You need medical treatment and we can help you." At that, the girl seemed excited while the little boy glared and tugged on the older one's hand. Izuku crouched down to be face to face with the 2 children and turned his back to the heroes, trusting that he would act fast enough to stop them if they tried anything. "Nice, and we can get you help. We could be happy and okay," Yuri whispered excitedly. Izuku only smiled. He only ever did with them at this point. "I don't think we should." He looked to Kauta while Yuri looked a little betrayed. "We just got you back. They want to take you again. What if you don't come back?" Kauta was close to tears at this point. "Kauta, what did I promise when I left?" Izuku asked, resting his hands on the boy's face. You promised you would be back, but you were gone for so long. I don't want to lose you again." Izuku silenced him by whipping his tears away. "Kauta, I made it back. I always will. But if they can help you and Yuri." Then he looked to both of them. Yuri nodded quickly, wanting the help, while Kauta did it slowly with a few more tears. He stood back up and his face went blank. "Hiding any emotion, fine, but you can't separate them and they get treatment first." Midnight was about to say something, but Aizawa beat her. "Fine." The boy nodded and leaned down to pick up the 2 before Midnight stopped him. "We can carry them for you. You're already injured. We don't want to worsen it." The boy glared at them until the girl spoke. "It's okay, Nai-san. She can carry me, right?" Midnight was a little shocked from the Nai-san but nodded her head. He turned to the boy, who shook his head. "No. You can carry her, but he wants to stay with me." He picked up the little boy, who clung to him like a koala bear. Midnight smiled as she picked up the little girl that smiled at her. "Okay, we can lead you to a place called UA. It's a hero school and we have a woman named Recovery Girl there that can help," Aizawa said as he pulled out his phone to tell them they had quests. "What's the fastest way there?" Izuku asked, looking at the buildings. "Well, normally by car, but we may have to go rooftops. Will you be okay?" Izuku jumped at the question and nodded his head, leaning down to Kauta. "I've got you. I'm not going anywhere." Kauta nodded his head but didn't loosen his grip any. Aizawa and Kayama climbed their way up. Kayama looked down, expecting to need to help the boy, but he was already getting onto the roof with ease. They started their way there with Izuku near Kayama in case something happened and he needed to grab onto Yuri. While they started running, Kayama began talking to the girl in her arms. "What's your name, honey?" she asked, looking down slightly. The girl thought about it for a second before answering. "Nai-san doesn't like us talking to other people, but he says to trust heroes, so my name's Yuri," she said with a smile. Kayama was a little surprised. The boy didn't seem older than 13-14. But he seemed smart for someone his age. Then again, with the scars, wounds, and men they captured, she could guess he had to grow up fast. "Your Nai-san sounds smart. Can you tell me his name?" The girl stopped smiling and looked down sadly. "He doesn't let us tell people his name, but he always says to call him Phoenix. They call him that too." Kayama nodded her head. "Then who's the other boy?" The girl perked up again. "He's my brother too. I'm allowed to tell you his name." "His name is Kauta." Kayama asked her a few more questions as they went, like what her favorite color was, if she liked animals, what she liked to do, and the normal, but her answers didn't help Kayama feel any better. For colors she said green and black because it reminded her of her brothers. But for animals she explained that she hadn't seen many, but that Phoenix had told her about something called a koi and had somehow shown her an image of it and she liked it. And for things she liked to do, it was watch Nai-san and Kauta try and create things which didn't make sense, but she figured it was their quirks. When they finally made it to the school, Aizawa entered the code that let the other three in without setting off the alarms. He saw the oldest freeze for a moment and stare at the figures in front of them. When he saw Detective Tsukachi, he sighed, not surprised that Nenzu had called the man, though he seemed to not mind Recovery Girl. "You always bring the troublemakers, don't you, Shouta?" Recovery Girl teased as she got closer. Kayama had handed Eri back to the boy, who seemed to calm down now that he had both of them. My dearie, you're hurt, aren't you?" she asked, getting closer to the three. The boy looked down at the woman and nodded. "Help these two first," was all he said, meeting eyes with the woman. "I can do that, no problem. Follow me." The boy followed without protest as Recovery Girl led them into the school. "Do we know who they are?" Tsukachi asked the two heroes. "The little girl's name is Eri. The little boy's is Kauta, but she wouldn't tell me the older one's name, only that they called him Phoenix," Kayama answered. "How'd you figure that out?" Aizawa asked with a lifted eyebrow. "Eri told me while we came over here. She looked like she wanted to say his name, but she didn't. They're also apparently brothers and sister. They don't look alike," Tsukachi commented. He would be correct. They likely adopted each other from wherever they came from, Nenzu explained as they started making their way into the school as well. When they made it back into the infirmary, they saw Eri and Kauta both sitting on the bed in a few bandages with some gummies, while Phoenix stood in a corner watching them before his eyes shifted back to the heroes. "Eri and Kauta will be all better. Just a few scratches and bruises." She turned to Phoenix, getting his attention by pointing at him with her cane. "But you, young man, you need medical treatment now, so sit down." He looked to the others first before walking over and sitting down on one of the beds, the two others almost immediately going over to him and sitting beside him. Recovery Girl sighed as she looked at them. "I'm sorry, sweeties, but I need room to work on him." The two looked at her. Eri looked worried while Kauta glared. "Why don't you go with them while I help him?" "Okay." Kauta glared harder while Eri seemed okay to move. Phoenix smiled a little and tapped them both on the shoulder. "It's okay, I'll be fine. Go with them for a few, and if anything happens, scream and I'll get you out." He signed. The group was a little surprised to see the boy use sign and for the other two to understand him. They nodded their heads and jumped down, walking up to the heroes. "How about we get you some food, okay?" Midnight asked, leaning down to be at their eye level. The two looked back to Phoenix, who nodded his head. "Okay." Soon it was only Recovery Girl and Phoenix in the room. Recovery Girl turned back to the boy. "Can you tell me of any injuries you might have?" She could already see the blood, but the boy seemed smart enough to know of more. "Sprained ankle, bullet straight through the shoulder, head wound, bruised ribs maybe broken, and bullet grazes, possible quirk injures." Recovery Girl nodded her head, writing down the information. "I see. Can you take your shirt off for me?" The boy seemed a little hesitant but slowly took off the vest and button up. He seemed to be in pain taking it off but continued. Recovery Girl was shocked by what she saw and a little horrified. The boy seemed to have lost a lot of blood and looked pale. But what shocked her was the scatter of scars all over his chest and uncovered arms, and what really did it was the glowing veins on his chest. She quickly went back to her job and started cleaning the wounds, trying to finish as fast as possible so the boy would be comfortable. The group made it to the lunchroom where they grabbed some pre-made lunches and sat down to eat. Eri and Kauta seemed to investigate their food before deciding it was safe to eat. "Did someone put something in your food before?" the detective asked. The two seemed caught off guard as they were about to eat but answered anyway. "They would put things in Nai-san's food that made him feel bad," Kauta answered while Eri looked sadly at the food. "It would make his chest and back glow before he would struggle to breathe. Eri took a deep breath, he would be weak, and then they would take him away for a while." The adults were shocked. It sounded like they used quirk suppressants that had a horrible backlash. "Do you know what they would do to him when he left?" The detective didn't like to pry, but he needed to before they went back to the other for more questions. "No," Kauta answered, this time a little angry, but when he did come back he always looked awful and wouldn't talk for a while, then he would just burst. Tsukachi was about to ask what that meant before Nenzu stopped him. "Let's have them eat so they may see Phoenix again." The two children looked to him, finally noticing he was there. Kauta looked at him with confusion while Eri gasped in surprise. "Are you a mouse?" she asked excitedly. "Am I a mouse? Am I a bear? I am the principal." Eri giggled and clapped her hands while Kauta continued to eye him suspiciously. After that they all began eating their food, though the adults began to panic when both children started crying. "Are you okay?" Aizawa asked softly, to the surprise of the others. They both nodded before scarfing their food down quickly. "It's really good." Recovery Girl finished wrapping his head wound when she stepped back, looking at her work. His entire chest, arms, and legs were covered in bandages and had been cleaned. He didn't make a noise the entire time unless she asked a question, though she didn't get much from him other than he had a very high pain tolerance and knew a lot about medical training. Okay, I've treated what I can without my quirk, but I need to use it to make it heal quicker. Okay. Do you know what my quirk is? The boy nodded his head. Recovery Girl speeds up the person's normal healing process by kissing them on their body and using their energy to heal them. The person loses energy and can possibly slip into a coma if too much energy is used. She nodded her head, a little surprised. It sounded like he had done research on her. Correct. Would you like to wait for your siblings to come back or now? Phoenix thought about it for a minute before answering. Now would be best, but can I have my shirt back? She shook her head no, but walked over, grabbing an extra shirt for him to use. He thanked her, putting it on along with the extra pants. Okay, I'm going to use my quirk. You might be out for a few hours. He nodded his head as she kissed him, allowing him to fall asleep on the bed. It wasn't long until the others walked back in. When Kauta and Eri saw him asleep, they panicked a little and jumped into the bed, with Eri checking his breathing and Kauta checking his pulse. Once they were sure he was okay, they nodded their heads and leaned against his side with one of his arms draped across their laps. He should wake up in a couple of hours, 1 or 2 if we're lucky. Aizawa dragged a chair near the bed so he could watch the kids and make sure they were okay. Is he okay? Midnight asked, looking to the three. Well, he's no longer as bad as he was when he came in, but he's far from okay. He had many injuries, but he was covered in scars, signs of malnourished and dehydration, as well as what looked like quirk suppressants with a terrible backlash due to his quirk possible. As Recovery Girl explained, Tsukachi took notes to put in the case file. Eri, Kauta, the two looked to the principal, who was smiling. Can you tell us your quirks? The two couldn't have been a little more than 4, but with the situation it was likely their quirks were forced out. Oh, mine is called Rewind. Nai-san named it when it first appeared. He said it allows me to bring someone's body back to a previous state. Eri explained excitedly, with confirmation from Kauta as she did. I can create and manipulate water. I got mine recently, so he hasn't named it yet. He doesn't know about it though, since he wasn't around when it happened. Kauta explained while Eri smiled sadly at him. That is quite impressive. You both have very strong quirks for someone your age. Do you know what Phoenix's quirk is? The two looked a little scared to answer. Izuku hadn't actually fallen asleep all that much. He had mostly been relaxed to the point it seemed he was asleep. He was glad that Eri and Kauta had remembered to always make sure he was alive if they found him laying down with his eyes closed. When they had started asking questions about the two's quirk, he was surprised to hear that Kauta had a quirk and was sad that he hadn't been there to see it or help him name it, but he knew he would somehow make up for it. Then he heard them ask about his quirk or quirks. He knew the two wouldn't answer unless given permission from him. He heated up his arm, letting them both know he was awake and that it was okay to answer. He has two. He is a lot better at explaining how they work though. Eri explained, leaning into Izuku's side. One is he can control and create fire. Eri perked up as Kauta spoke. Yeah, it's really pretty too. He can change the colors. Kauta smiled at her before continuing. The other one he just calls survive. He says it lets him take care of us better, but he uses a lot of words we don't quite get yet. Can you say some of the words? Aizawa asked. He was a teacher after all. One of them was infrared, insomnia, and pack bonding. Eri explained with the help of Kauta. Well, infrared lets people see heat signatures. Insomnia doesn't let people sleep well, and pack bonding is when someone forms a relationship with something like family. Aizawa explained, making sure to get nods from the two, confirming that they understood. Can you explain it better now? Midnight asked. Maybe. It lets him see in the dark. Heat signatures. He doesn't sleep much to make sure we're okay when we sleep. It makes him be able to last longer in most places and situations. Kauta explained while Eri nodded her head along. It sounds like Phoenix cares about you two a lot. Nezu added, with the two agreeing. He's really nice. He always makes sure we get whatever we need. Eri praised. Izuku shifted his arm slightly in the form of a hug to both of them. The two leaned into his side more. Aizawa noticed it and had a slight smile on his face as he watched. Izuku finally took the chance and sat up, letting them know he was awake. The two perked back up, seeing him awake. You should have been asleep for at least another hour, Recovery Girl said, walking over and giving him gummies. He looked at them for a moment before eating them, with a nod from the two next to him. Survive, was all he said, letting them know it was because of his quirk. I see, so you were awake the entire time? Nezu asked, a little impressed. Izuku nodded his head, sitting up more and getting comfortable. How are you feeling? Recovery Girl asked, looking him over a little to make sure he wasn't bleeding. Fine. He looked to Kauta and Eri and lifted his hands. Are you both okay? Yep. They gave us food and asked questions. Eri cheered as she moved to sit in his lap. He looked over to the boy and signed again. I'm sorry I wasn't there to help with your quirk. Kauta glared at him but sat next to him. I don't care. Izuku smiled and ruffled his hair before going blank and looking to the heroes and detective. Do you have any we understand sign if it's easier? Aizawa interrupted. Izuku stared at him for a minute before nodding his head and signing. Okay, do you have any other questions that I can answer? Yes, can you tell us your name? Izuku stared at the detective, trying to think if he should tell the man their names. Midoriya Izuku, Kauta Izumi, and a re. He spoke since it was easier to answer rather than finger spelling. Can you explain your quirks in more detail? He nodded his head, lifting one hand up for them to see, the teachers noticing the cuts and scars on his palm. He then lit it on fire before moving his other hand, making it turn into what looked like a koi on fire. Yuri smiled at it as it swam around her in Kauta. I can create and manipulate fire, pyrokinesis, but it works more like a phoenix. I have wings that I can make appear. All I have to do is form them in fire, then they appear. They are pretty much invisible and non-existent otherwise. That sounds interesting, Midoriya. Would you mind showing us? Nezu asked, a little curious about the sight. I would have to do it with more room. It scares them sometimes. Okay, what about survive? It allows me night vision, infrared, higher senses, more agility, better reflexes, higher stamina. I need less sleep, and my eyes change color depending what I use. If I use infrared, my eyes turn red. If I use night vision, they stay green, but they tend to glow. I see. Do you know how old you are? Izuku stared at the detective again and narrowed his eyes before going blank again. No, I think I am 13 though. Aizawa wasn't surprised that he didn't know his age. If anything they learned was true, then the two kids had been there for maybe 2 years and he was likely way longer. Okay, thank you so much. We'll do some research and tell you what we find. Nezu, have a nice day. Sukachi stood up and left, Izuku watching him as he did. Well, it has likely been a long night for you three. Why don't you all get some sleep and we'll leave Aizawa with you in case you need anything. Nezu said, getting up along with the others and leaving Aizawa with the kids. Iri and Kauta both got comfortable on Izuku, who just smiled down at them while they drifted off to sleep. He was used to them falling asleep on him since he had a high body temperature. He looked to Aizawa, who sat in the chair near the bed, almost like he was waiting for an attack. Aizawa looked back at him. Do you think you could sleep? Izuku was caught a little off guard, making his eyes widen, but he nodded. He could always sleep. He just needed to make sure that they were okay first. Okay, then get some sleep. I'll make sure that they're okay, so sleep. Izuku stared at him before nodding his head and laying down, getting more comfortable. He wasn't used to a bed, and letting the two lay on his chest. Izuku hadn't slept long. He could still feel the others on him and the sun slightly peeking through, but it had taken him a minute to actually open his eyes. After shifting the two children to the bed and not on him, he sat up and looked around the room. It was silent, only hearing the quiet snores of the two next to him. H saw Aizawa sitting in the chair with one eye open, looking at him with a quirked brow. You didn't sleep long. Izuku just shook his head. Do you want food? You probably haven't eaten in a while. Izuku looked to the two next to him before shaking his head and signing. I'm fine. Aizawa looked at him unimpressed before standing up. No, you're not. What do you want? I can grab it and come back. Izuku's eyes widened. I'll eat anything. Just make sure there's enough for them. Aizawa sighed. Kid, there's enough food to feed them to with you getting a good amount, okay? Do you have a favorite or something? Izuku was still confused as to why they wanted him to eat so badly. No, I don't. You can get me anything. Aizawa sighed again but left to get food. Izuku watched as the door closed, then looked down to the two sleeping bodies. They had a few bandages on them, but it seemed they were all healed for the most part. Izuku looked at his ungloved hands. It had been a while since he had them off for so long. Silently tracing the scars with his eyes, he wondered if they would let him have his gloves back. He always thought his hands were horrible to look at after the incident. It's okay, Izuku. Mommy still loves you. This isn't your fault. We love you, Izuku. He shook his head, making the memories to leave from his head. He turned his hands, tracing the scars with his eyes. When he heard Aizawa getting closer, he stared at the door, waiting for the adult to enter, shoving his hands under the blanket. When he did, he had a small tray of food and set it on the table for Izuku to grab. Izuku was a little shocked when the hero didn't just hand it to him, but he didn't think anything of it. Thank you, he signed, grabbing the tray and eating some of the food. No problem, kid. Izuku looked at him a little surprised again. What did you call me? Aizawa lifted an eyebrow. Kid. Izuku nodded his head before going back to eating the food on the tray. Do you not want me to call you that? Aizawa asked, a little confused. Izuku shook his head. No, you want me to stop, or no, you don't mind? He held up 2 fingers, letting Aizawa know he meant the second one. Aizawa nodded his head and leaned back into his seat, relaxing slightly. He was also surprised to see that the kid ate silent. He didn't make a single noise when he ate. He didn't question it as he sat, at least until his phone started going off in his pocket. He saw Izuku jumped a little, but he lifted his phone, showing him what it was before stepping out to answer it. What is it, Zashi? Aizawa asked, a little pissed. He wanted to have the kid calm down, not get more riled up. Sorry, Shouta, is it a bad time? Aizawa sighed. He couldn't blame the other man for not knowing. Sorta, but what's up? Them told me you had 3 kids with you and I wanted to see if I could help. I know you don't always do well with younger ones, so I wanted to make sure you were doing okay. Aizawa thought about it for a minute. I know Tsukachi wants to do more questioning later today. I might be able to calm down the oldest, but the younger 2 I might need you on. Of course. Should I bring stuffed animals for the younger ones? Aizawa opened the door and signed to Izuku. My husband wants to know if he can bring stuffed animals for them. The boy looked for a minute before answering. Eri likes koi, Kauta likes bunnies. Aizawa nodded his head and closed the door again. If you want you can bring a stuffed koi and stuffed bunny. Oh, were you talking to them? I didn't hear it. That's because the two youngest are asleep and the oldest seems to be selectively mute and only talks when he needs to. Oh, okay, I'll remember that. See you soon, show. I love you. Aizawa huffed out a laugh. Love you, Dazashi. Aizawa hung up and walked back into the room to see Izuku looking confused. Right, that was my husband. He's better with kids than I am, so he asked if he could come help with your case. Izuku nodded and looked to the two still sleeping peacefully. Before anything happens, do any of you have living relatives you know? Aizawa asked, getting the boy's attention. Eri doesn't. Kauta has an aunt, I think. I don't have any blood, but I do have an aunt, uncle, and someone who was a brother to me. Aizawa nodded his head, though he seemed angry about Eri. Do you want the people you know to know you're alive? The boy looked taken back at the statement before looking to the two sleeping. If they're okay with it, then I will. Aizawa nodded his head a little weirdly. Why would they care if he talked to someone he cared about? Okay, we'll talk about it more later. Try getting some more rest at least. Izuku just nodded his head and laid down again. He didn't expect to actually sleep. Izuku didn't know when, but he had fallen back asleep apparently since he was being woken up by Eri and Kauta whining. Nai-san, let us go, we can't get up. Eri whined, trying to move his arm. He opened one eye and smirked down at them before tightening his grip on the two next to him. Eri shrieked and giggled while Kauta just smiled at him. Izuku, come on. He smiled and moved his arms for them to get up and move. He sat up slightly, seeing two other adults in the room besides Aizawa. His eyes widened a bit before he went blank. Good to see you awake, kid. Izuku looked down a little, trying to hide his blush at being called kid. This is Yamada and Kayama. Izuku lifted his head again and nodded. He remembered Kayama from that night, but she wasn't in her hero costume anymore. I remember her. He then pointed at Yamada before signing, and that's present Mike. That's correct, little listener. And I brought gifts. Yamada then showed the bag he had and pulled out two stuffed animals. A little birdie told me you liked bunnies and koi. The two kids beamed at the presents before taking them and hugging them closely. Glad you like them, Kayama said, squatting down. I helped pick them out, she declared, getting an eye roll from Aizawa. What? No, you didn't. Eri and Kauta laughed while the two adults fought. Aizawa walked back over to his chair and sat down near Izuku. You and the kids need to take a shower. Do you want to wash them yourself or do you want help? Aizawa asked as the two started playing with the heroes. Izuku watched them, thinking about it for a second. I can get Kauta and myself, but I think Eri would be more comfortable with Miss Kayama. Aizawa nodded his head before standing back up. Eri, Kauta. The two children looked at him. We're going to go to the showers to get you both cleaned up, okay? Both nodded while Izuku stood up and walked over to them. Miss Kayama is going to make you all pretty, okay, Eri? The girl smiled and nodded, letting Kayama pick her up. Izuku picked up Kauta and followed the heroes to the showers they had on site. Once they made it there, Kayama took Eri into the girls while Aizawa double-checked with Izuku. You sure you got it, kid? Aizawa noticed the slight blush this time, but Izuku nodded his head and went in. You're such a dad, Shouta. Yamada cried as he draped himself on his husband. Aizawa blushed and shoved his husband to the ground. No, I'm not. Shut up. He started walking away with Yamada following and laughing. Izuku, the boy looked to Kauta. What should we name my quirk? Kauta knew that would get the other boy to talk more since it was only them. Well, you said you can create and manipulate water, right? Kauta nodded as they got undressed. So you have hydrokinesis, pretty much the opposite of my pyrokinesis. So why not? Izuku paused for a minute and turned back to Kauta. Do you remember your parents, Kauta? The boy looked caught off guard but nodded again. Kinda. I remember they were really nice to me and always tried to protect me ... like you. Izuku smiled and led the boy to the showers. Well, your parents were heroes, remember? Kauta smiled. Izuku made sure to tell him a lot about his parents. They were the heroes' water hose. What if you named your quirk after them? You don't have to, of course. We could always think of something else if you don't like it, but Kauta stopped him, knowing the other boy would ramble sometimes. I like it. Izuku smiled down at the boy as he started washing his hair. I'll name it Water Hose then. It wasn't long till both boys were done and getting dressed. Kauta still had to get dried though, since Izuku just raised his temperature and the water turned into steam. When they walked out, they were greeted with Eri and Kayama standing by the door. When Eri saw them, she launched herself at Izuku, who caught her with ease. Nice-san. Miss Kayama made me all pretty, but I didn't let her do my hair cause I like it when you do it. Izuku carted his hands through her wet hair. He was glad the gloves Aizawa had given him earlier let him use his quirk on his hands still and let him dry her hair. Of course, Eri, I'll make sure to do it. Eri smiled wider, hearing Izuku talk again and sounding more relaxed than before. Kayama noticed that the boy talked in front of her but didn't say anything. They walked back into the nurse's room, seeing Yamada and Aizawa talking while sitting on the other bed. The two other adults looked up at them and smiled, though you couldn't tell with Aizawa hiding his face in his scarf. "Nai-san, can you do my hair now, please?" Izuku was about to respond, but Yamada gasped and stood up. "Hold on, I have hair clips that you can use." He ran out of the room, leaving the kids confused before he busted back in with a small box and set it in front of Eri and opened it, letting the two youngest look inside it. "You can pick out some to use." "Wow, Kauta, help me pick some." Both of them looked through the box as Kayama handed a brush to Izuku to use. Izuku smiled as he heard Kauta, Eri, Yamada, and Kayama pick ones out and decide if they should use it or not. "You're pretty good at that, kid." Izuku looked to Aizawa and then the hair in his hands. "Where'd you learn to do that?" "My mom taught me a while back. Guess I just remembered." Aizawa was shocked that Izuku had spoken instead of signed, but nodded like it was nothing. He started braiding it sort of sloppily till Aizawa sat next to him and started showing him how to do a tighter braid. Nedzu had been talking to Detective Tsukachi in his office on what they were going to do with the children in Recovery Girl's office. "We obviously can't separate them though, since the three are already so close to each other. If we did, it could affect them mentally." Nedzu agreed with the detective. "Even though Kauta seems to have an aunt in the wild pussycats that would like to see him again, we wouldn't be able to let them have all three, since it's likely Eraserhead, Present Mike, and Midnight have bonded with the group. Well, I have more questions to ask the oldest, since we don't know much about what happened to him or the little girl. Then we can talk to them about what they want our last step to be." The two left the office and went to the nurse's office to talk to the group. When they opened the door, Nedzu smiled, seeing the group all somehow fit on one bed. Aizawa and Izuku were both doing one braid, giving Eri twin braids, while the other four looked through a box and pulled out mostly flower and cat clips that the other two were putting in her hair. "Well, this is a surprise." Everyone looked to the two standing in the doorway a little surprised, except for Izuku, who had likely seen or heard them coming. "Nedzu, detective." Aizawa nodded to them as he went back to braiding the hair in his hands. "It's good to see you three doing better. Do you remember me from last night?" The three nodded at him. "Good. Now this won't be as fun as what you're doing, but I need to ask more questions, okay?" The other two nodded their head while Izuku only glared at him with untrusting eyes. "The questions are going to be a little difficult, possibly. I'll be asking about your time at the place, okay?" Both Kauta and Eri flinched a little before Izuku put his arm by them to hold. Otherwise they seemed fine. But Izuku glared more, and he could feel the warmth in his body getting ready to attack. "First things first, how long were all of you there?" Eri and Kauta looked to each other, not knowing what to say. They hadn't known how long either were there, just that it was a long time. Eri was always there. Kauta was there for 2 years. The adults noticed how he didn't answer for himself. They would have to ask him about it later. "Do you know why you were all there?" "Eri's uncle was one of the people keeping us. Kauta was kidnapped when his parents were killed." Izuku made sure that they couldn't see what he was sighing, but that the adults could. "Was there a reason that Eri's uncle kept her?" Eri answered it this time. "He hates quirks. Mine is able to get rid of them." Izuku tightened his hold on the little girl, letting him know he was there for her. "Did they ever do anything to you or Kauta?" Eri and Kauta shook their head. They never really bothered the kids unless they did something they weren't supposed to. "Okay, thank you, Eri and Kauta. Why don't you two go with Kayama and Yamada?" The two looked to Izuku, who smiled at them. "Don't worry, I'll catch up with you two once we're done, okay?" They both smiled at him and followed the two heroes out, leaving the principal, Aizawa, and the detective. "Okay, Midoriya, we need you to tell us about what happened while you were there and how long you were there, okay?" The detective said, leaning forward a little. Izuku looked to Aizawa, who nodded and sat closer to the child. "What do you want to know?" Izuku didn't remember what it was like outside of the cage. The only thing that hadn't broken him yet was his mother and father there for him, and the thought of seeing his best friend again. His mother said that he was 5 now, meaning he had been there for a few months. They had taken him and his parents when his quirk manifested. Apparently it was powerful, and they wanted him as a soldier for them. "Hey honey," his mother spoke quietly to wake him up. "Happy birthday. I know this isn't the best situation, but I'm happy that you aren't alone." He hugged his mother as they both silently cried before his father woke up and hugged them both. "That was the day he stopped talking and lifted his hands. That was the day they began training me in my quirk. If I didn't do what they said, they would punish me or my parents." Aizawa's eyes widened. He didn't know what to do, so he lifted his hand and placed it onto the boy's head. He jumped at first, but then leaned heavily into the contact. Every day they would drag him out of the cage away from his parents and would make him overuse his quirk to exhaustion. He hated it. If he didn't have a quirk, he would be fine and still at home where it's warm. "Get up, Brett." They were coming for him again. Great. He stood up tiredly, still feeling the ache and pain in his bones. They dragged him over to an open area. Last night they had separated him and his parents. He hoped that they were okay. He walked into the open area with the people leaving him. He looked around the room and saw blood and scorch marks. "Good evening, Midoriya, Izuku." He turned to see a man with a metal beak on. "Your parents will be happy if you do this for us." He nodded his head numbly as they walked out of the room. He looked around, expecting someone to come in and attack him again. But this time a green mist seemed to fill the room. He watched it confused until he breathed in. When he did, his lungs felt like they were on fire. He began to scream, making his quirk activate and burn the gas around him. When the gas stopped burning, he felt something on his back. He turned and saw a pair of ash-gray wings on him. That was when I first got my wings. They were testing something new and wanted to see how I reacted. They didn't know it would activate my quirk more. Aizawa began running his hand through the boy's hair. It seemed to calm him down as he started to lean on the adult more. He lowered his hands and started speaking. For a while they just did the same things over and over again, hurting me or my parents if I didn't kill someone. All the adults looked in shock for a second. I never did kill anyone though. Aizawa let a breath. He didn't know he was holding. They ended up trying to destroy my hands once they realized none of the threats worked on me. The boy looked at his now shaking hands as Aizawa tried to comfort him. At some point they brought in another boy, a little older than me. They called him Dabai, but he said his name was Taoya. Aizawa recognized that name. It was the missing Todoroki. He had a fire quirk and they would always have us fight each other, but we never really did. He made it out around the time I was 10, I think. That meant the older Todoroki was running around still kicking. At some point they brought in Eri. Apparently they had wanted me to be her keeper, make sure she stayed in line. I listened to them but made sure Eri was taken care of and got as much of a normal childhood as possible. He took in a breath and lifted his hand again for a while. After she came, they started training me more, knowing I wouldn't let them get near her. They didn't threaten to hurt her though, she was too important. At some point they also threw Kauta in. When he came in he was crying and covered in blood though. His parents had just been killed in front of him. Izuku sighed sadly before continuing. After that they continued with the training. Izuku said, finishing his story. "And what of your parents?" the detective asked. "They killed them." Aizawa's eyes widened. The way the kid said it sounded so horrifying. Like it was a universal fact, that his parents dying was just something that happened. "I see, thank you Midoriya. We'll leave you alone now." Netsu and the detective walked out of the room, leaving Aizawa alone with the kid. "Kid." Izuku turned his head to the adult, looking tired. "You okay?" He looked Aizawa in the eyes before looking down at his lap. "Okay." "You're not." The kid began to shack and hyperventilate slightly. Hey breath, it's okay. Can I touch you?" Izuku nodded his head, letting Aizawa wrap his arms around him and run his hands through his hair. "It's okay kid. Breath with me, in and out, in and out." He kept talking until Izuku's breathing started to even out. Good. Few more breaths, okay. Right, sorry." The boy seemed to calm down but didn't move away from the adult. I don't know. "Sorry." Izuku slowly started to sit up, but Aizawa could tell that he didn't want to. He held on tighter to the boy, who fell onto the man's chest. "Don't worry about it kid." He slowly laid down onto the bed, letting Izuku get comfortable. "Take a nap kid. I'll wake you up when the others get here." The boy nodded his head slowly, already falling asleep. When Hazashi, Nimuri, and the kids got back to the room, they expected to maybe see the two talking or sitting silently. What they didn't expect was for both of them to be asleep, with the younger laying on the Aizawa's chest. "Oh my god." Both adults pulled out there and started taking pictures. "He's such a dad," Yamada whispered, trying not to wake up the two. "Miss Kayama." The woman smiled and looked down at the two children. "Why is he holding Nyai-san?" "Well, your Nyai-san holds you when you're upset and sleep, right?" Both of them nodded their heads. "Shouta is doing the same for him." "Is Izuku okay?" Kauta asked, a little scared. "I'm sure he's fine, just a little tired is all." Yuri and Kauta nodded and sat on the edge of the bed, not wanting to wake up their brother since he didn't get much sleep in general. "Kauta." The boy looked up to the woman. "We heard you have an aunt that wants to see you. Would you be okay with seeing her and her friends?" Kayama noticed. The boy looked to the sleeping figure on the bed before looking back to them. "Will they take me away from Izuku and Eri?" After saying that, Eri looked scared and grappled onto the other boy. "They can't take away Kauta." Izuku had woken up slightly when the group walked in. He didn't open his eyes, already knowing that he would end up falling asleep again with how comfortable he was at the moment. He hadn't heard most of the conversation and didn't find it important until he heard Eri. "They can't take away Kauta." Hearing that, he shot up, grabbed the two holding them close, and raised his arm, letting small flames dance around it. He glared at the shocked heroes that were now standing, with Aizawa sitting up looking shocked at the scene. "Izuku, calm down. What happened?" Aizawa asked, looking at the group, trying to find a way to calm down the boy. They want to take Kauta away." "They can't do that, Nyai-san," Eri yelled, still holding onto the younger boy. The flames on Izuku's arms grew more, and he hardened his face, looking like a cornered animal. "Eri, Izuku, we don't want to take him away. He has an aunt that wants to see him. We asked if he wanted to see her. We wouldn't let them separate you, okay?" Kayama tried to calm them down by explaining everything. "But what if they try?" Izuku lowered his hand, letting the fire burn itself out, and slowly let go of the two children. "Eri, it's okay. We won't separate you and your brothers, okay?" Yamada added, squatting a little to get to eye level. Eri looked at them before turning to the two boys and held on tighter to Kauta as Izuku hugged them both to his chest. "Oh, okay." Izuku looked down to Kauta and nodded his head slightly, letting the boy know it was okay. "So if they do see me, they won't take me away?" All three adults nodded their head. They wouldn't be able to take you unless you wanted to, and I'm assuming you don't want to," Aizawa said, getting a head shake from Kauta before continuing. "So they would only keep in contact with you and visit, but otherwise they wouldn't do anything you didn't want." Eri looked nervous but still held on to Kauta while looking to Izuku for confirmation. "It's okay, Eri," he signed, leaning back a little onto the bed, trying to relax his body a little. "Speaking of, Izuku, do you want to see the Bakugus?" Izuku jumped a little and looked to Aizawa a little surprised. "Nedzu sent me a file of who they were while you slept." Izuku nodded his head slowly before lifting his hands. "Would they even want to see me?" All of them froze before Kayama and Yamada stood up. "Okay, Kauta, Eri, let's give them some time to talk while we talk about you seeing your aunt, okay?" The two children let their eyes drift to the other adults and nodded before following them out the door. Aizawa turned back to Izuku and tried to look the boy in the eyes even if the boy wouldn't meet his. "Izuku, why wouldn't they want to see you?" Aizawa waited for Izuku, letting him think of an answer. If they were important to Izuku, he assumed they would be ecstatic to see the teen. Because they knew me when I was a kid, when I hadn't been with villains for almost 10 years, when mom and dad were. The boy trailed off, now looking at his gloved hands with silent tears rolling down his cheeks. "Kid, I might not know them personally, but you care about them and what they think, and I'm gonna go out on a limb and say they care about you. So of course they'd want to see you." Izuku let out a shuddered breath before whipping his eyes and lifting his head, still not meeting the other's eyes. "Okay, I'll see them. God, I miss them." The boy whispered out the second part. Aizawa assumed he wasn't meant to hear, so he didn't comment on it. "Okay, I'll tell Nedzu. In the meantime, let's talk to the others about meeting Kauta's aunt and re-meeting the others. After all, you're a package deal." Katsuki sat in his room reading a book. He thought about his plans for the rest of the week. On Sunday he would have therapy, not that he was looking forward to it. Ever since his aunt, uncle, and best friend disappeared, they all went to therapy, but he wasn't sure it was working. It didn't help that the people at school treated him like a feral animal and he didn't really have anyone. But it didn't matter to him, he just wanted Izuku back. He was even starting to believe that the other boy was dead like people told him, but he never listened before, so why would he start now? He put down his book and put his head in his hands. He promised that when he became a hero he would find them, and he would. He stood up and put his book away when his door burst open, revealing his dad. "Jesus, old man, knock." "Katsuki." The boy stopped and finally took in the state of his father, looking happy but tears rolling down his face. "They found him." Katsuki stood there as his book fell to the ground, with his body soon following. His mother ran into the room and the adults hugged their son as they all cried. "When can we see him?" "They said later today, but they warned us. They said he was different than he used to be and that there were 2 younger children with him." Katsuki stepped away and rubbed his face. "I don't care if he's a fucking chameleon or got 2 other people now. He's still my best friend." The two smiled at their son and nodded their heads. "We know, Katsuki." Izuku sat on the bed watching as his fire danced around his fingers and arm. Kauta and Eri were out with Kauta's aunt. The group had met and talked with the 3 a few days before and decided that Eri and Kauta needed to get out and see what the world was really like, not inside a cage. And going with the wild pussycats seemed like the safest and most ideal for them. Sure, he was anxious about Eri and Kauta not being in running distance, but he didn't think the group would take them away or hurt them. But it was just a thought he constantly had when he couldn't see them. Aizawa and the other heroes had been nice enough to get them some actual clothes to wear for a few days before they would actually go out and pick their own, so Izuku was in a black hoodie and sweatpants with some gloves. Eri had gotten a white dress while Kauta was in a polo and shorts. "You okay, kid?" He jumped a little, burning his sleeve slightly, not realizing that Aizawa walked in, but turned to the man and nodded his head. "Nervous," was all he said as he conjured more fire and moved his hand with it. "Kid." Aizawa sat down next to Izuku and turned the boy's quirk off so Izuku would focus on him. "I'm not gonna tell you to not be nervous, but they care about you, okay?" Izuku nodded his head and leaned against the other male who simply messed with his hair. "Aizawa, they're here." Nedzu spoke over the comm, letting the other know. He stood up, letting his hand rest on the boy's head before walking out of the room into the main gate. When he got there, he saw the 3 standing there, with the 2 adults looking happy but the youngest looking scared. "Hi, we're Mitsuki and Masaru Bakugo, and this is our son Katsuki." Both adults offered their hand while the boy nodded at him. "Nice to meet you. I'm Aizawa Shouto, or Pro Hero Eraserhead." The 2 nodded at him before he started leading them into the school and talking. "I'm assuming that Nedzu has already told you that he's not the same." He saw Mitsuki nod out of the corner of his eye. "He also doesn't talk much, usually uses sign, which you probably don't know." "Actually, Mr. Aizawa, we do." Mitsuki interrupted the man. "Our son is hard of hearing due to his quirk, so we know it, just not super fluent." Aizawa nodded his head and continued walking. "Well, due to his mental state, we'll let you in one at a time unless he says he's okay with having all 3 of you together. I'll be right back." Aizawa walked into the room, seeing Izuku looking at him. "Do you want them one at a time or all together?" "One at a time." Izuku was nervous knowing that they were actually there. He had honestly expected for them not to come and want nothing to do with him. He was messing with his gloves a little when Aizawa had come in to ask if he wanted to see them one at a time or not. He waited for the first one to enter and he wasn't surprised to see Mitsuki first. Hey Squirt, he figured Aizawa had explained he might not be the same to them, so he opened his arms letting her know it was okay. She almost knocked him over when she hugged him. I missed you so much, kid. He held her loosely, still not used to the contact, and tried not to flinch too much when she hugged him. He looked to Aizawa where he could already see the worry and signed to him that it was fine. I missed you too, Aunt Mitsuki. She jumped a little but still held on to him, looking at him surprised. He figured it was his voice since it was still rough, but she only smiled and hugged him again. I'm sorry I was never able to help you. I'm sorry you lost your parents, Izuku, but we'll always be here, okay? Never think otherwise. Her voice still sounded stern, but he could still feel the love she was trying to sending him. I know, Aunt Mitsuki, so how are you, Kaken, and Uncle Masaru? The woman then began talking about all the things they had done and different stories that happened. One thing though is, I haven't seen Katsuki actually smile since you've been gone. Izuku looked to his hands almost angrily. It hit him the hardest, but we're more than happy to have you back, Squirt. I'm gonna let your uncle take over. He hugged her one last time before Masaru walked in. The visit with Masaru was about the same as Mitsuki. He was still quiet and as nice as Izuku remembered. Izuku was terrified though. The two had talked about Katsuki a lot to tell him how things had changed, and he didn't think Katsuki would actually want to see him. Aizawa, can you not be in here for this one? The man stared at him for a second, looking for something before nodding and sending in Katsuki and closing the door. Neither teens looked at each other, not wanting to meet eyes for different reasons. I'm sorry. They both spoke at the same time, making them look up and meet eyes. They both looked terrible, eye bags and red eyes, looking shocked before Katsuki started laughing. You look awful. Izuku was a little taken back but smiled, remembering the bluntness of his best friend. Yeah, well, you don't look good either, Kaken. He watched the blonde freeze at the name, but before he could apologize, the other spoke in a cracked voice. It's been so long since I've heard you say that. Katsuki took a few steps forward before hugging the other tightly like he would disappear again. I'm sorry I never saved you, Zuchin. Izuku gripped the other just as tightly as he felt tears coming to his eyes. I'm sorry I ruined your life, Kaken. He felt the other try to speak, but Izuku didn't let him. Your mom and dad said that when I was that you didn't smile anymore. You closed yourself off, and that you didn't make any friends. Izuku buried his face into the other's shoulder. Please don't do that again. I'm not worth it. The hell you talking about, Zuchin? Katsuki shifted so that Izuku's face was now in his chest. I stopped because there wasn't a reason to smile. You're my best friend, and I lost you, and I didn't want to go through it again, to lose someone or even think of you as gone. So I'm sorry that you are worth it. Katsuki grew quiet at the end, still holding on to Izuku. The boy felt like crying, but he couldn't right now. Thank you, Kaken. I missed you. Aizawa was standing in the hallway as the other two adults talked to each other with small smiles on their faces. Suddenly the woman turned to him a little confused. You mentioned 2 other children. Where are they? He was a little surprised. He didn't think they would want to see them. Only Izuku. They're out with one of the kids' aunts. Why do you ask? Well, we were just curious. We figured they must be important to Izuku and we wanted to meet them. Masaru explained, his wife nodding along. Well, they'll be back soon. As soon as he said that, he heard giggling down the hall and looked to see the wild pussycats messing around with Kauta and Eri. Hey, Eraserhead, we're back. How's the other kitten? He's fine, talking to one of his friends. He moved so they could see the other 2 adults. This is Mitsuki and Masaru Bakugo. They were close with the kid. Both adults stood up and introduced themselves to the others while the 2 other children stared at them in curiosity. Hello there, you must be Eri and Kauta. Mitsuki offered her hand to the children, who looked at it before shaking it slowly. I'm Izuku's aunt. Well, honorary aunt, and this is my husband Masaru. The 2 looked to each other, then back to the adults. It's nice to meet you too. But where's Nai-san? Eri asked a little nervously. He's talking to our son Katsuki. Don't worry, he's a little rough but would never hurt Izuku. Mitsuki assured, seeing the 2 relax a little. They've been quiet for a while. I'll check on them. Aizawa walked over to the door with the other 2 children following close behind him. When he walked in, he saw the 2 huddled together sleeping. Eri and Kauta walked into the room and got on top of the bed, looking at the other person on the bed a little confused. They're asleep. Well, it was fun hanging out with Kauta and Eri, but we need to head out. The pussycats said goodbyes and left, leaving Mitsuki, Masaru, and Aizawa with the kids. They look rather peaceful, Masaru commented as he sat down on one of the chairs in the room. Eri and Kauta went over to the side that Izuku was on and started poking him. He opened his eyes quickly before he spotted the 2 kids and smiled at them. Nice, and who's that? Eri asked, still whispering to not wake up the other boy. Do you remember me telling you about someone named Kaken? The 2 nodded, remembering that he would tell stories sometimes when they had trouble sleeping. That's him. Eri gasped in amazement while Kauta looked surprised. Can we talk to him? Izuku nodded and shifted his weight so he was sitting up, making the other boy wake up. What is it, Suchin? Katsuki opened his eyes more and saw the two children pretty much sitting on Izuku's lap. What the hell? Izuku glared at him and flicked his ear. Don't cuss. This is Eri and Kauta. I told you about them. Katsuki sat up more, letting go of the other finally. You're Kakin, right? Does that mean that you're Nai-san's brother? Eri asked excitedly, bouncing on Izuku's lap. I guess. As soon as he said that, Eri tackled him and hugged around his neck. That makes me your little sister. But I can't call you Nai-san too, so I'll call you Katsu Nai. Katsuki was caught off guard while Izuku only smiled at them, with the adults looking surprised too. I told them about you, Izuku said, getting their attention, and Eri decided that if she ever met you that she was going to be your little sister. Katsuki looked down to the girl that was still hugging him and smiled slightly, hugging her back with one arm. Look at you, brat, you didn't scare her off, Mitsuki teased, letting the others know of the group's presence. When the hell did you get here? Izuku rolled his eyes as the boy cussed again but didn't say anything, wondering when the others got there too. Usually his quirk would have told him they were there. When you two were asleep, the others wanted to check on you, Aizawa explained, nodding at the two children sitting with the teens. Izuku nodded his head as Katsuki continued fighting with his mom while his dad looked slightly disappointed at the two. Aizawa, Mitsuki, and Masaru had left the room to talk about what would happen next with Izuku. Katsuki was supposed to go with them but had decided to stay with Izuku, Kauta, and Eri. Eri had asked Izuku to do her hair again, so she was sitting in front of him facing away from him while Kauta and Katsuki kept staring at each other. Why are you two staring at each other still? Izuku asked, not even looking up from Eri's hair. We're having a staring contest to assert dominance, Katsuki answered, still glaring at the small child. Why are you establishing dominance? Izuku finally looked at them, confused. Eri looked at them too, interested but not enough to mess up her hair. Because you're my brother, Kauta claimed, still not looking away from the blonde. Kauta, you're both important to me. You don't need to fight for dominance. Izuku tried to reason but neither listened and only stared at each other more intensely. Do I have to compete too, Nai-san? Eri asked, looking worriedly at the teen behind her. No, Eri, they're just being silly, Izuku said, smiling fondly and rolling his eyes at them. Nice to finally meet you, Mr. and Mrs. Bakugo. I'm happy you were willing to visit Midoriya after we told you, Nezu greeted as they entered his office. Of course we were going to. We missed the little squirt, and if we didn't, Katsuki might have killed us, Mitsuki joked, lightening the mood a little. Ah yes, of course. Your son, speaking of him, what does he wish to be when he is older? Nezu asked. The two adults looked at each other, then back to the principal. He's always wanted to be a hero. At first it was to be like All Might, like every kid, but when Izuku disappeared it was to save him, Masaru answered. It wasn't really a surprise to Aizawa or Nezu, and I assume he was going to apply to UA, Aizawa asked, stepping closer to Nezu's desk. Yeah, the brat has an amazing quirk and decided to apply here when he was done with junior high, Mitsuki asked with pride in her voice. Fantastic. Then I trust it would not be a problem then for Midoriya to apply here either, Nezu suggested to the surprised Aizawa, Mitsuki, and Masaru. You want Izuku to apply here too? Well, yes, of course. He's very protective of Kauta and Eri, so why wouldn't he want to protect them and others? Unless you know something we don't, Nezu asked with a glint in his eyes. Of course not. It's just when they were younger, Katsuki and Izuku both wanted to be heroes or a hero duo, Masaru explained. Ah, I see. Kauta and Katsuki had finally stopped staring at each other and now were simply laying around on the bed. Zuchin, Izuku turned a little to face Katsuki, who looked serious. Do you still want to be a hero? Izuku's eyes widened at the question. You don't have to answer now, but I want to know. Izuku thought about it for a second, just staring at Katsuki until he answered. Yes, a lot had happened in the last 2 years of Izuku, Kauta, and Eri being with the heroes. For one, Eri and Kauta had opened up more and played all the time, finally able to be kids. They trusted all the heroes that worked there, the wild pussycats, and the detective that visited them to update them on the case. Second, they had all gotten to a normal health. Well, as normal as they could get after everything, but they were doing good, and Izuku had started to sleep more with random naps during the day. A lot of the time teachers would find him under Aizawa's desk, under Nezu's desk, in empty classrooms, and anywhere else he had passed out at that was hidden. He still seemed always on edge though. If someone moved too fast while he was asleep, he would wake up and have flames on his arms ready to attack. If someone saw him eating, he would have trouble continuing. And if someone touched him that he didn't see, they would end up on the ground in seconds. When school had begun again after they first arrived, it had been hell trying to deal with him. He didn't sleep as much, or at least they didn't see him. He didn't eat, didn't let Eri or Kauta out of his sight, and almost always had his quirk activated in some way. The only students that had actually helped him get a little more relaxed was a group of first years that would watch Eri and Kauta if they knew he needed sleep or needed a minute to get some emotions out without scaring the two younger ones. The way they had met was a little strange after all. Mirio, Tamaki, and Nejire were walking to the teacher's lounge looking for Aizawa. They were the only 3 left after he had expelled everyone else, and they wanted to know if they had any other work to do other than train. They had knocked on the door once before. Mirio opened it with his usual smile. "Mirio, maybe we shouldn't be here. I don't want to be here," Tamaki clarified as he followed behind the blonde. "Come on, Amejiki. If he isn't here, we could find out something fun," Nejire tried to encourage as she closed the door behind her. They looked around the room but didn't see anyone. "The teachers must be having a meeting. We'll wait here then," Mirio declared as the three walked to the couch and sat down. What they didn't notice until now was that someone was under Aizawa's desk. It looked like a student, but he was too young to be a student at UA. Mirio stood up to wake the person up, but when he did, the kid jumped up into a fighting position low to the ground with small flames on his arms. He swept Mirio's legs out from under him, making him fall, and the kid jumped on him with a flaming hand near Mirio's head. "Who are you and why are you here?" he asked, still sounding tired. "Well, hi there. My name's Mirio Tagata. This is Tamaki Amejiki and Nejire Hado." Mirio was still smiling even though he could get hurt. "We're here because we were looking for Aizawa-sensei." "Why are you here?" he asked, still smiling. The kid looked at him for a minute before putting out the flames and getting off of Mirio and going back to sitting on Aizawa's chair and not meeting their eyes. "I was sleeping," he answered, looking up a little with a glare. "But why under a desk?" Tamaki asked. Sure, he was a little scared, but the kid seemed rather nice and more scared than he was. The boy moved over a little, showing a blanket and pillow. "Do you just sleep there all the time?" Nejire asked with a smile just as bright as Mirio's. He nodded his head before she started asking more questions. "Why though? Are you Aizawa's son? What's your quirk?" She kept asking questions, with him answering a few until the door opened, revealing Aizawa and a few others walking in. "What are you three doing here? Shouldn't you be working on the packet I gave you?" he asked, sounded a little irritated with the boy moving out of his seat and just standing there until Present Mike gave him a chair. "Oh, we finished. And we wanted to ask if there was anything else we could do. Then we ran into him." "Well, more like he tackled Mirio," Nejire explained quickly, but Aizawa was able to understand fine. "Fine then, go change and meet at ground beta. We'll train some more with special moves," Aizawa said, starting to stand up. "The boy following you coming with?" The boy nodded his head and followed their teacher out the door. After that, the three would watch Eri and Kauta or let Izuku randomly appear and fall asleep near them. Turned out he liked being near other sources of heat when asleep or in general. Nedzu had even turned an old classroom into a sort of nap room that had black curtains, fair lights, coffee, and the entire room was like a nest. Usually if you needed to find Izuku, Eri, Kauta, Aizawa, Mirio, Tamaki, or Nejire, they would most likely be there, either sitting on a couch with Izuku near or laying down with him. Anytime Katsuki visited he would be found there with the two holding onto each other like they might lose each other. No one ever really questioned it or bothered him about it either. "Hey kid, do you want to be in the hero course this year?" Aizawa asked, looking under his desk slightly. He had to deal with the forms for the recommendation students, and if Izuku wanted, then he would recommend him. "Yeah, I should be in the right age to do so, since Kaken is." Aizawa still couldn't get over the fact that he had such a cutesy name for the explosive blonde and vice versa. "Okay, Nedzu and I are making you a recommendation student then. Less work and people for you to deal with." Izuku nodded his head, shifting a little under the desk before they continued on in silence. "So Midoriya has decided to go the recommendation route?" Nedzu asked, looking at the forms with Aizawa in his office. "Yeah, he should be able to do it easily from what we've learned. He's been trained well and can fight a pro hero and win, so I don't see why not," Aizawa answered. You are correct. I just worry about Endeavor's son." Aizawa quirked an eyebrow at the principal. "His son has a fire and ice quirk, but only seems to use his ice side. If his father sees another fire user and decides to try and use Midoriya, it will not go well for anyone. If he tries to touch my kid, he's gone," Aizawa said without hesitation, making Nedzu smirk. "So he's your kid?" Aizawa blushed a little and hid in his scarf. Izuku already didn't want to be here. He had been with Kauta, Eri, and Katsuki, but then Aizawa had gotten him and told him to wait in this large room for the others to appear. He hated it. There was only two other people and they were both glaring at him. And of course it was one of his least favorite heroes, Endeavor, and his son Todoroki Shoto. Of course Izuku knew who both of them were after his run-in with Dabai, or better known as Todoroki Tauya, but it didn't make him any more comfortable. So he just kept his head down and did the counting exercises Kayama had taught him. It wasn't long till other people started to come in. Now there was a girl with a black ponytail and who Izuku assumed was her mom, a boy with black hair that he didn't recognize, and another man following him, and some other people Izuku didn't look at, with Aizawa following in after them. "My name is Aizawa Shouta. I'll be your teacher this year if you get into the Wanna Hero course." He side-eyed Izuku for a moment, waiting for a nod from the boy that he was okay. "Your parents will be following me into an observation room. You'll have time to all talk to each other, and then you'll hear a buzzer when it's time to start." All the adults walked out, with some of the kids looking around nervously. Though Izuku, Todoroki, and the black-haired boy all seemed fine. A few of the possible students flocked to Todoroki, at least until he glared at them all and walked away. Then they all went to the girl Izuku knew as Momo Yaoyorozu and began talking to her since she seemed nice. That guy is such a dick, like his dad. Izuku looked to the person now standing next to him against the wall. My name's Inasa Yurashi. Who are you? He asked, a little too loud for Izuku's taste but seemed nice enough. Midoriya Izuku, he said back, still not looking up to meet his eyes. Oh, what's your quirk then? Mine's whirlwind. Izuku could assume that meant he could create tornado-like wind, pyrokinesis, and advanced senses. Izuku still didn't meet his eyes but could tell the other was getting super excited. Wow, another double quirk user. That's quite impressive, my friend. I'm passionate about this kind of stuff. To be a hero you have to put your full heart into it to succeed. Izuku listened, finally looking at him, as he continued on a tangent about passion, though Izuku was a little confused by the end. That was long, Izuku said with a dead tone. Haha, yes, I do happen to go on tangents a lot, it seems. He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly with a laugh. It's fine, doesn't bother me, I don't really like talking, he explained, seeming to make the other relax a little. That's perfect. I happen to talk a lot if you haven't noticed. Izuku listened as he talked more about anything that seemed to come to mind. Izuku felt a little weird about it. He remembers when he would talk like that to his mom and dad. Maybe he would be able to talk like that again soon. Before Inasa could continue though, there was a loud buzzer making all the teens look around. The test is an obstetrical course, Izuku remembered as he took of sprinting with Inasa and the others behind him. The course was simple, to him anyway. They had to get up 5 walls that all varied in height, get past a few small robots, go over, under, or in a huge tunnel that led to the end of the course. They had said that there were other traps not known, but Izuku couldn't sense anything until he looked on an infrared and saw small objects he recognized as mines. Once him, Inasa, Todoroki, and Yaoyorozu all got over the walls and the other 2 were jumping onto the ground, Izuku stopped Inasa. Mines, watch where you step. Inasa smiled and nodded his head as they both finally jumped down, joining the other 2 that had been caught in a mine. Inasa followed after Izuku with him giving a warning where mines were as they made it to a few of the robots. Inasa took care of the robots while Izuku made sure neither hit a mine during the fight. Once they finally got to the tunnel, they were by themselves with the others still on the other parts. What now? Inasa asked, catching his breath. Izuku looked with night vision, seeing more robots hiding in the tunnel with other traps around them. Going over or under will take too long. We'll go through, but stay behind me. Inasa nodded his head as he followed after the smaller teen, going through the tunnel with ease. Izuku let the other keep a hand on his shoulder so that he would know where he was going since he couldn't see in the dark like Izuku. When they came across the robots, Izuku decided to finally use his fire quirk and lit up the tunnel, taking down the robot in front of them by melting it. When the tunnel was lit up, he heard Inasa gasp. How have you been able to not hit anything yet? He asked, still shocked as Izuku started leading them again, not wanting to fall behind. My other quirk is called survival. I can see in the dark, infrared, and my senses are dialed up to 11, you could say. He explained, making Inasa dodge another robot, allowing him to hit it without hurting the other. That's quite amazing, he praised as they finally made it out the other end of the tunnel. Unsurprisingly to Izuku, they were the first ones out, though Inasa seemed super happy about it. Izuku and Inasa walked closer to the group of adults that waited there for them. Izuku sent a nod to Aizawa and Nezu while Inasa smiled and waved to the person there for him. You two cheated. Izuku looked over to Endeavor, who had shouted, with some of the others nodding along while Aizawa and Inasa's person looked pissed. And how did we cheat? Izuku asked. People bigger than him may make him go quiet, but when he's pissed he won't hesitate to defend someone else. You worked together and got him through there without him doing anything himself, Endeavor declared as he stomped closer to the 2 students. Aizawa looked ready to step in, but Nezu stopped him with a smile. I've read the rules of this exam. There is none saying that we can't work together, Endeavor. Inasa defended, stepping in front of Izuku a little. Izuku noticed that Endeavor's hands were on fire now and he was getting too close to Inasa for Izuku's comfort. Izuku stepped forward a little and put his hand near Endeavor's before taking control of the flame and pulling it towards himself to extinguishing them in his hand while glaring at Endeavor. Endeavor, I believe that the 2 are correct. It doesn't say you can't work together in the rules, and it's even better if they work together. It means they have the capacity to work with a stranger. That was the reason we give them time to talk to each other. I think you're all just angry that they did better than your own children. Nezu finished with a glint in his eye that made Endeavor back up and the other adults leave the 2 alone. Izuku nodded his head in thanks while Inasa smiled and thanked him loudly. The 2 walked off more to the side, waiting for the others to finish the course. When the others did finish the course, many of them were looking at the 2 angrily, likely seeing them work together. Todoroki walked up to the 2 and Inasa tried to be nice but was ignored. I'll beat you. Izuku looked up slightly at Todoroki but didn't answer. Somehow Izuku saw something that set him on edge. Not about Todoroki, but something emotionally that looked raw. After the exam, most of the people left except for Izuku and Inasa. The 2 were walking down the halls when they heard someone shout behind them. Nai-san. Izuku turned around just in time to catch both of his little siblings running at him. He stayed upright and smiled at them before ruffling their hair. How did you do? Kauta asked, looking serious. Inasa decided it was time for him to speak up. Your brother did fantastic. If it wasn't for him, I don't think I'd be able to have passed. The two looked at the taller boy with wide eyes before Eri smiled and jumped into his arms. Hi, my name's Eri. Did you help Nyai-san? She asked, looking at him with puppy eyes. Inasa smiled and ruffled her hair. If I could. Your brother helped me if anything. You don't have to say that, Yurashi. You did well too. Inasa only smiled and shook his head. Oh no, Midoriya. You're the reason I did good. But I must be leaving soon. Inasa pulled out his phone and handed it to Izuku. Put your number in so we don't lose contact. Izuku looked at him weirdly. If they both passed, then they would be in the same class, but thought nothing of it and put his number in. The school had been kind enough to get Izuku a phone so he could call or text anyone, but he barely used it unless to talk to the big three, Katsuki or Aizawa. The school was working on getting Eri and Kauta a phone for emergencies, but they hadn't yet. Sure thing. Inasa smiled and waved goodbye as he left. Now, how did your teachings with Nezu go? You don't want to go to UA? Izuku asked over the phone as he laid on the couch in the nap room with Eri and Kauta laying on him. No, sadly not, but don't worry. I'll make sure to keep in contact. I just don't think I can be in the same class as that Todoroki kid or I'll explode. Izuku hummed in understanding as he looked down to still see the two sleeping. I guess I understand why you don't like him. His dad more or less threatened us and he ignored you while declaring war on me. Exactly. He was so rude, just like his father. Izuku didn't say anything. He didn't know much about Todoroki, but that look he wore, something was off about it. Well, I have to go, Midoriya. You can call me Izuku. Almost everyone does. I prefer it. Sure thing, Izuku. You have to call me Inasa then. Izuku hummed again before Inasa said goodbye and hung up. Nai-san. Izuku looked down to see Eri with tears in her eyes looking at him confused. Hey, it's okay, Eri. I'm here, I got you. Izuku pulled both of the kids closer and held them as she calmed down. Kauta didn't wake up, but Izuku could tell by the shaking that he wasn't sleeping well either. I got you, Kauta. I'm not leaving. Izuku was under Aizawa's desk again as the teachers went through forms and any paperwork left. He was listening to some songs that Present Mike said he would like, and trying to relax a little. He had heard that there was going to be another teacher coming in and Izuku was worried. He already knew the staff here and trusted them enough to not worry about being weak in front of them. He heard the door open and had already heard the two pairs of footsteps walking down the hall, so he wasn't surprised. He was surprised by the voice though. I am here, as the new teacher. Izuku jumped a little and hit his head, making Aizawa look under the desk with a raised eyebrow. I need to get out of here, he signed, looking determined and scared. Aizawa looked with wide eyes but nodded his head and got up, walking over to Present Mike. Kid needs a distraction to leave. Present Mike nodded his head. With a smirk he stood up and screamed with his quirk activated at a low volume. AILLMMMIIGGGHHHTTT. Everyone covered their ears and squeezed their eyes shut except Nezu, Aizawa, Present Mike, and Izuku, who stood up and slipped out of the room without being noticed by the large hero. Nezu looked curiously at the teen that left. He already knew what was happening when he heard the thud from Aizawa's desk, but he also loved to see a little chaos. Aizawa, don't you think it's time All Might meets the children? After all, they'll be around a lot and we wouldn't want them to be shocked or scared about seeing him, Nezu said with a glint in his eyes. Aizawa glared at the mammal, who only looked on innocently while All Might looked confused. Sorry to interrupt, but what children? Besides the students, of course. All Might asked, looking nervous. We have 3 children staying with us, though only one of them is old enough to attend UA and will be in 1A. Nezu explained. I don't think it will be the best idea, Nezu. Aizawa spoke through gritted teeth. Of course Nezu would notice Izuku's reaction. After all, he might scare the youngest. Doesn't matter who he is. Aizawa was now glaring at All Might. He had never liked the number 1 hero after all. Well, with their brother there, I'm sure they'll be fine. Nezu began leading All Might to where he knew the 3 would be, while Aizawa followed, ready to make them leave if needed. Why would I scare them? Usually children love to meet me. Aizawa only glared at the bigger man more. Oh yes, usually, but Aizawa, why don't you explain? Aizawa wished murder was legal. The oldest was kidnapped by villains at a young age and grew up surrounded by those people and was tortured. The other 2 were also brought in at a young age, but the oldest was there to care for them. They don't do well with adults or people in power. All Might looked horrified, and Aizawa was glad, especially since Izuku seemed so scared of the number 1 that Aizawa wanted to know what was wrong now. They finally made it to the room labeled nap room. There was soft music coming from the room with the sounds of 2 kids giggling while sounding like they were playing. All Might almost looked sad that they were going to interrupt them when Nezu knocked on the door before opening. When they opened the door, there was 2 children fighting on the floor and a teenager sitting on a couch looking at them with wide eyes. Ah, Izuku, Eri, Kauta, this is All Might. He'll be a new teacher here, Nezu explained. Aizawa watched all 3 of them closely. He saw Izuku get more on edge while the two kids looked scared and almost gravitated towards their older brother. "It is nice to meet you, young Midoriya." All Might offered his hand to the teenager, but he only glared at it before bringing his eyes to the hero. Izuku started moving his hands, with Aizawa translating since All Might didn't know sign. He says likewise, and that he doesn't like people touching him unless he trusts them. All Might took a step back closer to the door to give the three room to breathe. "Ah yes, of course. It was nice to meet you all." Nezu and him walked out, with Aizawa staying in the room and turning to the three, who seemed to calm down. "What's wrong?" he asked, getting close to the ground, making himself smaller to seem less threatening to the three. One of the villains that kept us was called All For One. It gives off the same power as All Might," Izuku explained, taking a few gulps of air to calm down more. "Is he the villain?" Aizawa didn't want to believe it, but he would if his kid told him so. No, just similar power." Aizawa nodded his head, sitting down on the couch next to Izuku, with Kauta and Eri climbing onto their brother's lap as Izuku leaned onto Aizawa. "Get some sleep." Through the week, Izuku dodged All Might like the plague. Eri and Kauta had seemed to relax around the man, but Izuku didn't seem to want to. Sure, he still would sleep under Aizawa's desk and his usual routine, but he would just nod at All Might before going off somewhere else. Aizawa didn't blame him either. The man reminded the boy of one of his captors and didn't want to talk to the man, so he didn't push it. Katsuki couldn't come to the school anymore, seeing as if he did it could be counted as an unfair advantage, so the two just went with texting each other. The big three would still visit and hang out with the three though. When it came for school to actually start though, the three had a few issues. Kauta and Eri were going to be with Nezu all day. Then the three would stay in one of the rooms that UA had made for teachers to stay the night in case they needed to. The only issue was that Izuku would be far enough away from them with large groups of people. He didn't know that it was making him more anxious than he already would be. He didn't like wearing the blazer either. He kept telling them it was too constricting, so they left him alone. Instead, they settled for him to wear a vest similar to the school blazer, that way he wouldn't be out of uniform. And if anyone asked him, he would just tell them it was due to his quirk and that he could overheat. He had his sleeves rolled up with his gloves on, the tie, vest, and the rest of the uniform, but he still felt weird. He ignored it though as he walked into the classroom. He expected it to be empty, but found Todoroki, Momo, and someone he recognized as an it. He didn't even glance at them as he walked over to where he knew his seat was and sat down, pulling out his phone. "Hello, my name is Idatenya. What is your name?" Izuku looked at the boy a little shocked but hid it. "Midoriya Izuku," he answered, still a little on edge. "Ah, another recommendation student. Well, it is nice to meet you and I hope we can be friends." Ida bowed, making Izuku look confused. "Why are you bowing?" "It's polite, and I wish to build a good reputation with my classmates." Izuku nodded his head with a small smile. "It's fine, you don't need to bow." The door was more or less slammed open and the two looked over, seeing Katsuki glaring tiredly, but he walked over and sat in the desk in front of Izuku and put his feet on the top. Some other people began to come in at that moment. "Good to see you, Kaken." "Same to you, nerd." "Excuse me, it is impolite to put your feet on the desk," Ada said, waving his arms like a robot. Izuku just stared as the two seemed to start yelling at each other. His second quirk didn't help with the volume and only made it worse. He put his head down, feeling a headache already come when someone tapped on his shoulder. He looked up and saw a girl with brown hair looking at him worriedly. "Sorry, are you okay?" she asked, trying not to be too loud. "It's no worries, I just have a headache from the noise." She nodded her head in understanding. "My name's Uraraka Achako, what's yours?" "Midoriya Izuku." The girl smiled before looking to Katsuki with a gasp. "Wait, you're the one that saved me from the 0-pointer. Thank you so much." She bowed, shocking the three before Katsuki snapped out of it. "It's fine or whatever." Uraraka smiled but jumped when someone spoke above everyone else. "If you're here to make friends, then leave." They all turned to see what looked like a yellow caterpillar on the ground until they stood up and walked up to the front of the room. "It took you 8 seconds to get under control. This is the hero course. There's no time to waste." He hit a button on a remote, making cases appear. "Put these on and meet me outside." Izuku waited a minute before grabbing his and Katsuki's, letting the two get changed before everyone else. He still wasn't comfortable changing in front of people, so he went into a stall and changed before walking out with Katsuki next to him. "So how is the brat and princess?" Katsuki asked as they waited for the others to arrive. "They're doing okay. They're with Nezu, but with a bunch of new people and you being far away from them, it's making you go into protective mode," Katsuki stated simply, with Izuku nodding his head. The others soon arrived, a little shocked to already see the other two out there. "You all need to be quicker, no wasting time. We're doing a test, one you can use your quirks on." At hearing that, almost everyone began cheering. "This is gonna be so fun." Someone cheered, making Aizawa smirk. "Fun ho. You're training to face villains and you think this is fun? Fine then, whoever gets last will be expelled." The class gasped and grew quiet, not wanting to be expelled on the first day. "But you can't do that," a small boy with stuff on his head yelled. "Oh, I can. UA is very different with their teaching and I can teach however I want, plus ultra." Bakugo. The blonde looked up at their teacher stand in the circle and throw the ball. What was your score in middle school? About 67 meters. Try it with your quirk. Katsuki nodded as he caught the ball and walked up to the circle. He brought his arm back before throwing it and shouting die. He walked back to the group with Aizawa showing them the score and talking, but Izuku ignored him, smiling at his friend. Die. The tests went about the same, with Izuku keeping track of the scores. He already knew he wouldn't get last, but it was an old habit of his he hadn't gotten rid of yet. Right now he was third, right above Katsuki, with Momo and Todoroki above him, and the invisible girl was last at the moment, almost tied with the guy from before. Izuku hoped it was the purple guy since he saw how he was looking at some of the girls. Izuku hadn't used his quirk that much during the test except for the standing jump and 50-meter dash. His quirk didn't really help with any of them. Well, his first quirk. His second was almost always running and continued to give him boosts throughout the test. When it came to the endurance run, he knew he was either getting second or first. He lowered his temperature with his quirk so he wouldn't overheat. He already had enough training to last hours running with blood leaking out of him and at bad health, so running with good health and uninjured was simple to him. It ended up only being him and the Momo girl left, as everyone had already dropped out, but neither of them seemed tired. She had made a scooter and was just riding it around the track while he ran about as fast as he normally did, which if it was someone normal they would have tired out already. The two kept going until Aizawa finally stopped them. Okay, that's it. We need to move on to the other tests. Izuku slowed down and finally stopped running and walked back over to Katsuki, who put his hand on his arm. Bring your temperature back up. Izuku nodded and slowly raised it until it was back to normal, and they continued with the other tests. When it came to the ball throwing test, Izuku walked up looking at the ball before setting it on fire, making it look like a normal flame and no ball. He looked to Aizawa, receiving a nod before he threw the ball as hard as he could. Since his quirk let him control all fire, all he had to do was make sure it stayed on course. It didn't matter if it went somewhere with no oxygen, as it would just begin to take oxygen from around him to keep the fire lit. He stopped once he felt more oxygen get eaten away than needed and looked to Aizawa, who showed an infinity sign on the screen. He calmly walked back over to the group and waited for the next person to go as everyone stared at him in shock. Change your clothes and head back to the classroom for your next lessons. Everyone walked back to the changing rooms before heading to the classroom. After Aizawa had revealed that no one was being expelled, they all seemed exhausted and hoped their next classes would be easier. Luckily they were, though, and they didn't do much, but some students had noticed that the teachers seemed to know Izuku. Once lunch rolled around, Katsuki and Izuku sat with each other at a table quietly until two people walked up to the table. Hey, are these seats taken? Izuku shook his head no, letting Ada sit next to him and Uraraka next to Katsuki. Thanks. The lunchroom can be chaotic. Izuku nodded in understanding as he continued eating silently, with Ida and Uraraka talking to Katsuki, who was shouting back. They finished lunch and headed back to the classroom to wait for their next teacher to show up. In the meantime, they all talked. So Midoriya, you're a recommendation student? Uraraka asked. Izuku looked at her for a moment before nodding. So you're like crazy strong then? She asked, looking over the boy. Kinda. I know how to fight and I've trained with and without my quirk a lot. Uraraka gasped and started bouncing excitedly. You have to teach me some time. She squealed. Sure, as long as Aizawa-sensei is okay with it. Just then the door opened, revealing said teacher. What am I agreeing to? He asked, tiredly getting the class's attention. For me to teach Uraraka how to fight. Aizawa looked at the two for a moment before nodding his head that he was okay with it, making Uraraka squeal. Now that you've had lunch, you're going into fundamental hero studies and your teacher will be. Aizawa was cut off as the door busted open. I am here, coming through the door like a normal person. Aizawa rolled his eyes and stepped out of the way, going more towards where Izuku sat. All Might explained what they were doing, then gave them the cases for their hero costumes and let them get changed again. Izuku honestly didn't know what his hero costume looked like. He let his little siblings and the teachers make it since he was used to only wearing button-ups and vests. He was pleasantly surprised when he opened the case. The first thing he noticed was a gray metal face mask, then a dark green short-sleeved tight shirt with black lines going over it and the same design for his pants. Black gloves with metal knuckles built into them that went to his elbow, steel bottom shoes that were black, and a hood on the back of his shirt. It was a pretty simple outfit, but then he saw the weapons. He had a container of throwing knives with holsters for them on his thighs and arms, a few smoke bombs along with flash and ones that actually exploded. Luckily they were color-coded for him, and finally a knife that went on the holster that sat on the back of his waist. There was also a cloak that could turn small enough to fit into one of the pockets on the suit. When he walked out, no one had noticed him yet as he pulled the mask and hood up before walking over to Katsuki. Your costume looks flashy, he commented, making the other boy jump. Jesus Sachin, he shouted, making the others look at him. Wow, Midoriya, you look cool, Uraraka said, walking up to the two. So do you, Uraraka, though you don't look too comfortable, Izuku commented, seeing her shift when he mentioned it. Why yeah, I didn't think it'd be so skin tight. Izuku nodded in understanding before reaching into his pocket. If you want, I have a cloak you could use. Uraraka shook her head no while waving her arms. No, Midoriya, it's fine really. I need to get used to it anyway, it's not that bad. Izuku nodded again and turned to see Minta looking at one of the girls again. And of course it was Momo. He shook his head and walked over, taking the cloak out of his pocket and draping it over her while glaring at Minta until he walked away scared. Sorry, Yaoyorozu. I can take it back if you want, but you looked a little uncomfortable. Some of the students looked shocked at him, but Momo smiled. Thank you, Midoriya. Is it okay if I do use it though? Izuku nodded his head before walking back over to Katsuki and Uraraka. Wow, Midoriya, you're like a big brother. Izuku blushed a little at that and rubbed the back of his neck. Sorry, it's just instinct, I guess. No, don't be sorry. It's really sweet. I'm sure everyone thinks it's cute. Izuku blushed again, but luckily it was hidden with the metal mask. Soon Ida joined them too while they waited for All Might. Midoriya, I must say that what you did was very heroic. Izuku thanked him, and just as he did, All Might and Aizawa both walked in, getting their attention. You all look fantastic. All Might shouted, making Aizawa roll his eyes again before stepping up. Today you're going to be partnered up and going against each other as heroes and villains. All Might nodded before stepping next to him. Correct. The people playing the villains will be hiding a fake bomb on any of the floors in the fake buildings. All Might Sensei, how will the teams be chosen? Ida asked while waving his arms in the air. We will be doing lotteries. Since most heroes don't get to choose who they work with, it will force you to work together in situations no matter who you're working with. They began explaining the more in-depth parts of the exercise before they grouped everyone up. Team A is Midoriya and Minta. Team B is Todoroki and Yaoyorozu. Team C is Ida and Shoji. Team D is Ashido and Aoyama. Team E is Sato and Kota. Team F is Kaminari and Gyro. Team G is Bakugo and Uraraka. Team H is Tokoyami and Asui. Team I is Ojiro and Hagakure. And finally Team J is Kirishima and Siro. All Might finished with a smile. The people grouped together walked to stand by their partner. When Minta walked over scared, Izuku glared at him before looking back to the teachers. Now for the first round we have Team as villains and Team B as heroes. When All Might announced that Izuku and Minta were villains, Aizawa shot a glance to Izuku to make sure he was okay. Izuku took a few breaths and nodded, letting the adult know he was okay with it. After all, who wouldn't be okay with being the one thing that made your life hell for almost 10 years? The villain team walked into the building to look everywhere and to place the bomb. They decided to place the bomb in the middle of the building. Izuku tried to think of what the two would do and he came to an idea. Since Todoroki only used his ice side, then he would likely freeze the building, but Izuku could get them out. Hero team may now enter. And just as Izuku predicted, the building was almost encased in ice. All he had to do was raise his body temperature a little, making it melt. He then walked over to Minta and did the same. You go down and look for them and distract them. I'll take the bomb and move it to the top of the building. Minta nodded nervously and rushed out of the room while Izuku picked the bomb up and moved to the top floor. He closed his eyes and listened closer to the sounds happening in the building. He was glad that his other quirk was coming in handy. Minta, where's the bomb? That was Todoroki. Todoroki, are you sure that we should do this? It might actually hurt him. Momo, then, what was going on? It's on the top FL floor. By the sound of it, Todoroki had frozen him. He stopped listening and took out two of his knives and stuck them in the walls in front of the door. He then wrapped tape around them so that it was in front of the door and that anyone that ran through it would get wrapped in it. He then slid under the tap and walked to where he heard their footsteps. He stood in the hall, a turn away from them, and waited. Make this easy, Midoriya, and let us capture you, Todoroki said with frost covering his cheek. That's not how this works, hero. He kept his answers short and cold with a blank look and calm stance. Then I'll have to freeze you. Izuku felt the ice coming more than he saw it. He simply raised his temperature again and melted the ice without even flinching or moving. How did you do that? Izuku didn't answer and only kept his eyes on them. He could tell that Momo seemed like she had an idea on what to do, but he wouldn't let her speak. Instead, he pulled out a pair of knives that were tied together by the capture tape and threw both of them, making them spread out almost like a net. He smirked when Todoroki dodged and let Momo take the hit, meaning she was captured. Yaoyorozu has been captured. Todoroki glared and turned almost violently to Izuku, who only went back to a calm position. Watch your partner, hero. He then turned around with a small smirk and waved before taking off down the hall, heading towards the bomb. He heard Todoroki running after him and he smiled more. Once he was a little more ahead and close to the door, he threw one of the smoke bombs so that the door was covered. He then slid under the tap again and waited on the other side for Todoroki. You really think some smoke will stop me? Izuku then watched as Todoroki ran into the capture tap and fell to the ground. Todoroki has been captured. Villains win. Izuku breathed out before going more relaxed and walked over to Todoroki, unwrapping the tap so he could get up. Watch where you go and don't run in blindly. You could have won if you listened to your partner, Todoroki. He smiled a little as he helped the other teen up. Doesn't matter. He shouldered Izuku out of the way, walking out of the room. Izuku only looked at him walking away before following and letting Momo and Minta out of the tap as well. Who can tell me who did what wrong? Aizawa asked, looking bored. Oh, Minta shouldn't have given Midoriya's position away. Uraraka answered, jumping up and down. Todoroki shouldn't have ignored his partner and run in blindly with only one plan. Ada said. Yaoyorozu should have spoken up more about her plan. Takoyami finished. And what about Midoriya? Aizawa asked, watching with a quirked eyebrow when the class went silent. Everyone looked at each other, not having anything to say. So then young Midoriya is also the MVP. He fit into the role without revealing too much, and showed quick thinking skills as well as leadership. Everyone clapped except Todoroki and Minta, who both only looked at the boy, whose eyes seemed to go sad at mentioning the role of playing villain. Next, teams go. Aizawa turned to the four. You all have something to work on just like everyone else. Are any of you hurt? The boys all shook their heads no, but Momo just looked down. Midoriya, take Yaoyorozu to Recovery Girl's office. Izuku nodded and waited for Momo to show she was ready to leave. Once they were down the hall, Izuku turned to her slightly. Is it because you got cut on one of my knives? He asked a little worriedly. No, but when I fell against the wall I hit my head on the ice. Izuku's eyes narrowed and he slowed down to look at the back of Momo's head and saw a little blood as she stumbled a bit. He caught her by her arm and he looked at her for a moment. Get on my back. I can carry you there so you don't get hurt more. Momo was about to protest, but she saw the seriously look in Izuku's eyes and only nodded her head. Izuku lifted her onto his back easily and began walking to Recovery Girl's office. As they walked, they got a few weird looks, but Izuku ignored it. When they were at the door, Izuku could hear both of his siblings in the room asking Recovery Girl questions as she talked about first aid. He rolled his eyes playfully and opened the door. "Ah, Midoriya, good to see you. Who's this?" Both Kauta and Eri turned around and smiled, running up to him but not jumping on him as they noticed the girl on his back. "Nai-san, who's this?" Eri asked, looking at Momo, who smiled and waved. "She's one of my classmates." He set her on one of the beds before turning to Recovery Girl. She hit her head pretty hard on some ice and is bleeding. Recovery Girl nodded her head as she began asking the girl questions. Kauta got Izuku's attention, making him squat to get to eye level. "Is she gonna be okay, Izuku?" Kauta may seem like a brat, but he's always worried about people getting hurt. "She'll be fine, Kauta. After all, Recover Girl will fix her up right." Izuku knew they always had confidence in heroes, so they would never doubt them or him. "Right." They both shouted with big smiles. Izuku smiled himself and ruffled their hair. "Midoriya." Izuku stood up and turned to Momo. "If you don't mind me asking, are those two your brother and sister?" At that question, both walked over and sat on either side of her. "Yep, my name's Eri and this is my brother Kauta. Nai-san takes care of us all the time." "Are you a friend of Nai-san's?" "I am." She looked to Izuku, who stared for a minute then nodded his head. "Yes, though we aren't that close. We met at the recommendation exam." She explained, smiling at them. "Does that mean you're our sister?" Eri asked excitedly while Kauta rolled his eyes. "If you want me to be, I wouldn't mind taking up the role," she said excitedly, making Izuku smile a little. He liked Momo. She was calm, smart, and apparently great with kids. "So I'll call you One-isama." Momo looked like she was about to cry but then hugged Eri close to her. "Thank you, Eri." She then turned to Kauta and smiled before ruffling his hair. "And you too, Kauta." The boy blushed a little but hugged the girl's side anyway. "Midoriya, can you stay here with Miss Yaoyorozu to make sure she doesn't pass out?" Izuku nodded his head and sat on the other bed, letting Recovery Girl leave to do other work she needed. After a minute or two, both of the kids fell asleep on Momo, leaving her to smile at them, with Izuku doing the same. "Midoriya." He looked up to meet her eyes, letting her continue. "I meant what I said before. I would like to be your friend if you would let me, or as your other sister, since you've been a brother to me." Izuku was shocked for a second. "I am not sure. Eri and Kauta like you, and I wouldn't mind another sister. They already have 2 older brothers anyway." "Really? Who's the other?" Izuku chuckled. "Kaken, but you know him as Bakugo." "Really? I didn't see him getting along with Kid." She shouted as to not wake up the 2 kids asleep on her. "Oh, he's not. Him and Kauta fight a lot and he treats Eri like a princess. But he's not the best at it." Both laughed for a minute before Izuku started telling more stories of the group being silly. Easy to say. Momo liked the idea of being a sister. At the end of the day, Izuku walked Momo back to class since she was feeling better and her head was fixed by Recovery Girl. "You can call me Izuku, by the way." Momo looked at him a little shocked. "I prefer it." "Oh, well then you can call me Momo." Izuku smiled and nodded his head before opening the door and letting her enter first. "Oh my gosh, Yaoyorozu, you're okay." A girl with pink skin yelled, dragging the girl into a hug. "Oh, yes, I'm quiet, all right," she said as she patted the other girl's back. The others checked on the girl, letting Izuku slip back into the classroom unnoticed to them and walked back over to where his seat and Katsuki were. "Why'd you leave?" "You missed me winning," Katsuki bragged, making Izuku roll his eyes. "I'm sure it was a great fight, Kaken, but I needed to make sure Momo was okay after the fight. She had a small concussion." Katsuki looked at him weirdly before asking him a question. "You mean Ponytail?" Izuku looked at him with a disappointed but not surprised look before answering. Yes, the girl with the ponytail. Get used to her though, since Yuri and Kauta have adopted her as their sister and I'm her brother now, he said, sitting down while Katsuki sat in his chair backwards to still face him. Damn, whatever, she's not as annoying as some extras here, he said, gesturing to the group that was still talking to Momo. Oh, you made friends while I was gone? Izuku asked teasingly, making Katsuki blush and yell at him while Izuku laughed at him. Quiet down and leave, it's the end of the day, Aizawa said, tiredly getting up and walking out of the room. Everyone looked at the door for a minute before getting their stuff around to leave. Izuku did it a little slower, waiting for other people to leave first. See you tomorrow, Zuchin, Katsuki said, walking out with a group of people following after him as he yelled at them. Izuku finished putting his stuff away and started walking down to the nurse's office. He opened the door and saw Yuri and Kauta both drawing. Walking up, he crouched down and looked at the papers. What are you two drawing? Both jumped, not seeing him there at first, but both smiled. We're drawing our family, Yuri declared, showing him her almost finished picture. He picked up hers and Kauta's drawing and looked at them. He could already tell who was who by the names she and Kauta had given them. They even had an Asan there as an Asan, but he laughed a little when he saw what they had. Aizawa. Why don't we go show these to the other teachers? Izuku asked, getting an excited yes from them. He picked them both up, heading to the teacher's lounge, knowing most of them would be there. He was glad when he didn't see All Might there, though Aizawa was asleep. Izuku smirked and put the two down and whispered in their ears before they ran over to where Aizawa was laying. What's that about Green Bean? He turned a little to see Midnight and Present Mike standing there with a few of the other teachers listening. Yuri and Kauta drew a picture of their family. Oh, are we in it? Midnight asked excitedly. Yeah, it's the usual with Momo and Inasa added, but they put Aizawa as something else. He smirked, waiting to see Aizawa's react to the name they gave him. What did they put him as? Present Mike excitedly. Dad. Just as Izuku said that, Aizawa's eyes went wide and he crouched down to the ground looking like he had just died. It was the next day after Aizawa's gift from the brother and sister, and Izuku was living for it. They had started calling him Dad now, and anytime they did, he would hide in his capture weapon and glare at them. But they didn't react and only smiled at him. Izuku simply watched from the sidelines and would smile softly. He would never admit it, but he loved the fact that his once small family was growing again. But he felt like it was going to blow up in his face for some reason, so he didn't say anything to Aizawa. How come you don't call him Dad now? Katsuki asked as they walked down the hall to the classroom. Izuku had been in the nap room and Aizawa had told him to wake up Izuku. I don't know. Izuku looked down at the ground while Katsuki side-eyed him. There was something that Izuku wasn't telling him. Don't sweat it, nerd. I doubt anyone will notice anything different. They walked into the classroom and saw a few of their peers sitting around and waiting for class to start. When the two sat down, almost immediately Momo, Ida, Uraraka, and 4 people Izuku didn't know stood around them. Hi there. My name's Mina Ashido, but you can call me Mina. This is Kirishima Ijiro, Kaminari Denki, and Shiro Hanta. The pink girl introduced. Izuku looked at all of them for a moment before speaking. Midoriya Izuku. They all smiled at him before beginning to bother Katsuki. Making Izuku smile, he was glad he had other friends. How was your morning, Izuku? Momo asked, sitting down at one of the desks nearby. It was fine. Kaken had to wake me up though since I fell asleep again. Uraraka and Ida looked confused at the interaction but didn't say anything. Everyone sit down. We have something important to do, Aizawa said, walking into the classroom tiredly. Everyone looked panicked at the sentence but stayed quiet. Today we'll be choosing the class president. Everyone got loud again, calling out who should be president. Everyone please. Why don't we vote? That way we'll know who really deserves it. Ida yelled, getting everyone's attention. You have your hand up to Ida, Kirishima pointed out, making Izuku laugh quietly. Yeah, and want people just vote for themselves? Kaminari asked, looking around the room. Maybe so, but the people with more than one vote will be proven the most responsible and correct to serve, Ida said, looking to Aizawa for confirmation. I don't care how you do it, just get it done before you go to lunch. And with that, everyone began talking before voting on who they thought they should be president. Katsuki is a good leader, but people seem scared of him. Uraraka is too nice and a little all over the place. Ida seems a little pushy. I'm voting Momo, Izuku thought as he wrote down his vote and followed everyone else, putting them in the box. At the end, when the votes were tallied, Izuku was surprised seeing that he had 4 votes and Momo had 2, making them president and vice president. The two walked to the front of the class and shook hands. Aizawa stood up and saw who it was and was also a little shocked but didn't say anything. Good, now that you're done, let's get to the lesson. Who voted for me? Izuku asked once everyone was sat at the table. Though Katsuki was sitting with the group that had now dubbed themselves the Baku Squad, even though it was the first week of school. I did. You are a very calm person and look out for others even if you're against them, Momo explained with a proud smile on her face. I voted for you too. You're so caring and you're like the class's big brother, Uraraka declared. I voted for you as well. If I don't choose myself, you seem like the next best person, Ida said, though looking a little sad. Then who was the other person? he asked. There was only ever those 3 sitting with him now. I did, Kiro. They all looked over, seeing a girl with frog-like features. She sat down next to Uraraka, who looked more than happy to let her. My name's Tsuyu Asui, but call me Tsu. I've seen you interact with people in the classroom and you seem like one of the few level-headed people here and you treat everyone kindly. Izuku blushed a little with all the praise but nodded his head and sat down, finally taking a breath. He didn't like not knowing who was in his corner, but he didn't know how to feel about a lot of people supporting him now. They all ate calmly until a blaring sound started. They all jumped up to see what was happening, and Izuku felt like he was going into overdrive. All he knew was that he needed to make sure that everyone was out of harm's way, and now he didn't worry too much about Eri and Kauta at the moment since he knew they were with Aizawa, but not everyone was. One of the 3rd years said it's an intruder alarm. There's a place we need to go, follow the crowd. Momo yelled, getting the 1st year's attention. Izuku joined her and made sure everyone was out before he followed after them. But before he did, he looked out the window and what he saw made him want to scream. Red eyes looked into his and smiled. But it wasn't the same as before. It looked deadly. They then disappeared into the crowd, letting a bunch of reporters in. Izuku turned around and saw the wave of people all crowding and almost trampling each other. Izuku looked around for someone and saw Ada and Shoji trying to control the crowd. He went through the crowd and got to them and saw Uraraka nearby. Shoji, help Ada get over to Uraraka and let her use her quirk on you, Ada. Then get everyone's attention and tell them that it's just the press and to calm down. They both nodded their heads and acted out the plan. Once everyone had calmed down and went to an orderly fashion, Shoji turned to Izuku and looked at him for a second. Are you okay, Midoriya? Shoji asked. Izuku jumped a little at the name. He hadn't realized he was lost in his mind. Sorry, I'm fine, he didn't finish his sentence as he almost fell, making Shoji catch him. Midoriya, he asked a little quieter, not wanting to get the other people's attention. Sorry, can you take me to Recovery Girl's office? And don't call me Midoriya, please. Shoji nodded his head, helping Izuku up and carrying him to Recovery Girl's office a different way so no one would notice. Once they got there, Shoji opened the door and set Izuku on one of the beds and waited for Recovery Girl. Do you wish to talk about it? I'm aware we didn't talk before this, but some people want that, Shoji said as he pulled up a chair next to the bed. 2 didn't exactly grow up the best, and I thought I saw someone I knew, and then there were so many people and it was so loud it's like he got louder before quieting down, realizing he was almost shouting at that point. He stopped and fell back onto the bed a little with his hands over his face. Shoji wasn't quite sure what to do. He had to admit he wasn't the best, but maybe he could try something. Izuku. The boy tilted his head slightly, letting the other know he was listening. I'm going to hug you, okay? He had read somewhere that if someone was panicking or having a flashback that you should help ground them and bring them back to reality, but to warn them in case they reacted violently. Shoji then wrapped his pairs of arms around the boy, who was still covering his face. He felt the other teen slowly relax against him. The 2 sat there with Shoji simply letting Izuku fall against him. After a minute or 2, Shoji let Izuku lean back up and onto the bed. Thanks, Shoji, Izuku said, seeming calmer than before. It's no issue, my Izuku. I have been told I give good hugs. Izuku laughed at that before getting up. We should probably head to class though. They might be worried about us. Shoji nodded his head and followed the other out of the room, only to be stopped by 2 small bodies running into them. Nai-san, we heard you might be hurt. Are you okay? Eri asked, with Kauta already looking over their brother. I'm okay, Eri. You too, Kauta. He picked up Kauta to make him stop searching him before setting him back down onto the ground. Now why are you 2 here? He asked, making it sound like he was scolding them, even though he wasn't, while Kauta and Eri giggled. We were going to surprise you before you came to class, but then we saw Wanisama and she said you weren't here, so we came here, Eri explained. Well, I'm alright, just relaxing for a minute is all. Izuku and Shoji were making their way back to the classroom when Izuku began speaking. Thank you for the help, Shoji, and for not telling my little siblings. Shoji nodded his head in understanding. It's no issue, Izuku, I understand, we're friends after all. Izuku's eyes widened and he looked shocked at Shoji before he turned his head and looked at the ground. Still, thank you. The 2 finally made it to the classroom and opened the door. The class didn't seem to be there, but Aizawa was at the desk looking pissed. What are you 2 doing here? You should be with the others. He didn't even look up as Shoji went to his seat, sitting down while Izuku walked up to the desk. We made sure everyone got out of the room. There was an issue and he took me to Recovery Girl. Aizawa immediately looked up, almost scared like. Are you okay? What happened? Panic attack. I'll explain everything later, but when the others come I have to tell them something. Aizawa looked at him a little longer before nodding his head. Everyone made it back, with Katsuki quickly sitting down and turning to Izuku. Where are you? What happened? Izuku smiled at his friend's worry. It's okay. Just got caught up with making sure everyone was out and just went back to the classroom. Katsuki looked him up and down before nodding his head and turning back to the front. Aizawa pointed at Izuku. He stood up and walked to the front. I don't think I should be president. I think Ada or Momo should be president. Izuku walked off and sat back down as if everyone wasn't looking at him. It was silent until everyone broke into shouts. What? Why would you want but you? Everyone be quiet. Aizawa yelled while activating his quirk. Everyone quickly quieted down. Okay, Midoriya has made his choice. Now Ada and Yaoyorozu, you get to choose what you want. I think Ada should be president. Once school was over with and everyone was leaving, Aizawa told Izuku to stay after so the others wouldn't think them talking was weird. Izuku, kid, what happened while I was with Eri and Kauta? Aizawa asked, looking like a worried parent. Izuku could have smiled at the care, but he couldn't now with what was bothering him. When I was with them, there was another person besides Kauta, Eri, Dabai, and Me wasn't much older than me and he was constantly scared, so me and Dabai always kept him company. But one day he was taken to Sensei, and when he came back he was different. He had light blue hair instead of black and he seemed crazy and he hated heroes and anything related to them. He tried to convince us like the others to join Sensei's cause, but we always refused, said it was going to hurt them, so two jumped in front of them. Izuku moved his shirt, showing a large scar going from his shoulder to part of his chest. Kid, his name is Shigaraki Tamura, or at least what he goes by now. After everything, was the one who did that to the gate, and he's planning something. We need to prepare. Izuku was walking back to the teacher's lounge. He wasn't paying attention, seeing as he was reliving something he wasn't fond of, so it was no surprise when he ran into someone. He fell back and rubbed his head where he had hit the person. Sorry about that, you okay? He looked up to see a taller man with purple hair. He nodded his head as he stood up with the other's help. When he didn't vocally respond, the other seemed a little annoyed. Look, I'm not gonna mind control you. I'm not a villain. Izuku quirked an eyebrow. Why would I think you're a villain? I just was sorta zoned out. Didn't mean to run into you. Izuku defended. He knew when he ran into a villain, this wasn't one. Right, sorry, just a bad day. The teen quickly left, confusing Izuku even more. He watched as the boy walked away, still a little confused. He then turned around and continued on his walk. It was quiet as almost everyone was gone except for the teachers. Young Midoriya, may I speak with you? He froze at the voice but turned to face the blonde man. He nodded his head, letting the man catch up. I'm sorry to keep you, but I have a question. I've been informed of your past and I wanted to know. Was one of the villains named All for One? Izuku's eyes widened and he grabbed onto All Might's shirt and dragged him into one of the empty classrooms. If you know that name, then you can deflate. You're wasting your energy. The man looked shocked but turned into the skeleton form. How do you know about that? I had talked to him before. He talked about an injury and how if we wanted revenge it was going to be time soon to take it. All Might looked panicked. He's still alive. I realize, my boy. Are you aware of where he is? All Might asked, more serious now. No, it was mostly over screen or teleportation. I'm sorry I've been avoiding you, but with your powers being similar in presence I couldn't. Don't worry, I understand. You've helped me so much, and I am sorry that we couldn't save you till now. Izuku looked at the ground and sighed. Shimura Tenko, remember that name? All Might looked shocked but didn't say anything as Izuku walked out of the room and ran down the hall. He couldn't go back to Eri and Kauta. He needed to get out and do something before it killed him. One thing that a lot of the teachers didn't know was that the three all had their own rooms in the school. They all needed a code to get in, but the three preferred sleeping together either in Izuku's room or the nap room. He ran to his room, entering the code. Knowing the two wouldn't be there since they didn't know the code, he walked in and locked the door. Going to the closet, he opened it, grabbing black jeans, a black shirt with a black jacket, and a face mask. He changed clothes before grabbing his phone, headphones, and some money and leaving the school. He knew at some point they would want to know where he was, so he made sure to keep his phone on. He walked around the city not looking at anyone. He didn't want someone seeing him or recognizing him possibly. It was a quiet night after all. He was listening to quiet music. It was his favorite at the moment. All the Kids Are Depressed by Jeremy Zucker. It was pretty sad, but he needed that right now. He knew that he wouldn't get the emotions he needed out without the song. It was getting darker. He was surprised he hadn't been texted yet, but he had to guess that Eri and Kauta were already asleep and they must think that he's in his room. Get back here, brat. You need to pay for that. He jumped at the voice thinking that they were talking to him, but when he saw someone running past him it was clear they were yelling at them. It was a little strange seeing it was a girl and a boy. He was going to ignore it until he saw the red hair and blue eyes look at him before they continued running. Taoya? He asked quietly. He was about to follow when he noticed the man running after them. He had a large knife with him. Izuku followed after the group until they ran into a dead end. The man began walking closer with the knife raised. Izuku's eyes widened. He needed to act now. He pulled out some money before walking up to the man and tapping on his shoulder, getting his attention. What the hell do you want? Izuku didn't jump. He knew better than that. He pointed at the food they seemed to have taken, then held out the money. The man looked at him with a glare before taking the money and leaving the alley. The two stared at him before the girl ran up with a smile. Thank you so much. That was amazing. You're my hero. What's your name? We should be friends. Izuku was caught off guard by the excitement of the girl. He was about to answer when Talia interrupted him. Why the hell did you help us? You must know we can't pay you back. He seemed angry and it almost scared Izuku. He brought his hand up to his face mask and slowly pulled it down. Sorry Talia, didn't know it'd make you angry. The boy's eyes widened and his eyes became shiny with unshed tears. Izuku, is that you? The boy nodded. Talia pulled him into a hug and held him close. I'm so sorry, I'm sorry. Izuku was shocked by the apologies, but he just hugged the other back. Group hug. The girl yelled as she jumped onto the two joining the hug. Toga, you brat. Get off. The two began to play fight as Izuku watched on in shock. He watched them for another moment before he began laughing. The two looked over in shock and just stared at him. He calmed down a little and blushed seeing them look at him. Sorry, just you two are silly, he said, taking a few breaths. Oh, we're keeping him, Toga declared, tackling the boy into a hug, making him jump a little. He was stiff but slowly relaxed into the hug. Wait Izuku, if you're out here, what happened to the others? Izuku smiled. We got out 2 years ago. Some heroes ran into us and have been helping us ever since, but we haven't been able to get Tenko yet and he's still. It's okay Izuku, I know. Toga gripped onto him tighter, seeming to sense his distress. He actually attacked UA recently and I think he's planning something. Talia nodded in understanding while Toga seemed confused. Let's stop with the sad stuff. My name's Himiko Toga, but call me Himiko, it's cuter, she said, smiling down at him. Midoriya Izuku, but call me Izuku please. Himiko nodded her head with a large smile. Talia smiled at the two interacting. Izuku, what are you doing out here anyway? I'm glad you helped us, but shouldn't you be with Eri and Kauta? He asked, looking almost worried. I didn't want to be there right now. I grabbed my phone and some money before leaving. They haven't texted me yet, so I assumed they fell asleep and then Aizawa went to bed with them and Yamada. Wait, who's Yamada and Aizawa? Talia asked with worry and protectiveness in his voice. Present Mike and Eraserhead. They're really nice, everyone at the school is, and I've made friends. He cheered with a smile. He didn't remember the last time he felt like this, with no worries about his younger sibling. None of the people watching him. His friends safe at home. Maybe it was better if he never went back. They were better off without him. Hey, I know that face. They obviously care about you, okay? I bet they're worried right now, Talia said with an encouraging smile. Don't think they're worried about where I am. They probably think I'm in my room asleep or something. He smiled again to calm Talia down a little. Exactly, so do you want to head back? Or hang with your best big brother? Izuku laughed a little. Let's hang out for a few. The three had hung out almost all night. He learned more about Himiko and why she was on the street with Talia and what happened to get her there. She didn't ask about what happened to him since she heard most of it from Talia. They were all walking down the sidewalk when Izuku asked them the question. You two should come back with me. They stopped walking, looking shocked at Izuku. They would let you stay there and it would be nice to have you both around. Your brother is there too, he said, pointing at Talia. I'm sure Eri and Kauta miss you too. And they would love to meet you to Himiko. You'd get along with Eri really well. Izuku, have built something great, and of course I miss Shadow, but we're doing fine on our own, so how about this? Whenever you want to hang out, just text us. He took Izuku's phone, entering 2 number. We both have small-time jobs and we're doing fine by ourselves. Tell Eri and Kauta I said hi, okay? And next time you visit, bring my brother. Izuku looked shocked but understood. He knew Talia thought that he failed the 4 by leaving twice and that this was his way of trying to reconnect in a way. Right, I'll make sure to come back soon, and next time have a good night. He hugged them both before leaving and going back to the school. He's gonna convince us to go with him one day, isn't he? Himiko asked with a smile. He's stubborn when it comes to people he wants to protect. We'll end up there in a week or 2 probably. Izuku made it back to the school around 4 in the morning. He snuck back into his room and laid down on the large bed in the room. He plugged in his phone and put on some music, letting him take a few breaths before choked sob escaped his mouth. He put a hand over his mouth as to not make noise. He could already feel the tears rolling down his face as he turned to his side. Damn it, Izuku, he whispered as he took a few breaths. He remembered some of the exercises that Aizawa and Tamaki had taught him. He tried to calm himself down with them, but they didn't seem to be working at all. Hey Izuku, Aizawa said. He heard a voice, but it sounded so muffled like it was underwater. Next thing he knew, there was a presence next to him. He panicked and ended up pinning the person to the ground by their throat. Izuku, breath, it's okay, it's me, Mirio, remember. Izuku blinked some of the tears away and saw the blonde still smiling at him even though Izuku could have killed him. He jumped back and hit the wall before almost curling into a ball. I'm sorry, it's all my fault, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. He kept repeating it even as the presence returned. Hey, it's okay. See, I'm not hurt. You didn't do anything wrong, okay? Izuku took a few breaths trying to catch the air he lost. Do you need me to get Aizawa? He froze and shook his head no violently. Okay. No, Aizawa, what do you need me to do? Izuku thought about it for a second. Hold. Mirio nodded his head in understanding and practically scooped the boy into his arms, holding him close. After that, it wasn't long till Izuku finally calmed down and stood up with the help of Mirio. "Sorry about that," he said, gesturing with his hands a little. "Don't worry about it. What are older brother for after all?" Izuku chuckled a little and shoved the older teen. "What time is it now?" "Well, it's around 6:30. I was here early to check on you three and Aizawa said you should be in your room. I came here around 6:10 or so." Izuku looked down at his hands. He had been like that for almost 2 hours then. "Right, I'm better now though, thanks Mirio." "No problem, Izuku. Just know I'm always here for you, okay?" Izuku nodded his head as Mirio walked out of the room with a wave. Izuku waved back before turning around and changing his clothes. It had only been a week of school and Izuku was already emotionally exhausted. He liked his class, sure, but they were always full of energy and it was emotionally exhausting to be around them sometimes. He was in his room relaxing for a few, just looking at his ceiling until he felt his phone start going off. He turned and looked at the screen, seeing Inasa. "Ah, Izuku, wasn't sure if you were going to answer. What are you doing?" "Nothing, why what's up?" He was already standing to change into his normal clothes that mostly consisted of sweatshirts and jeans. He grabbed one of the white ones and black jeans. "Wanted to see if we could hang out. It's been a while." "Sure, sounds good. Where do you want to meet?" Izuku was a little nervous. Him and Inasa had hung out plenty of times, but it had been a while. He had warned Aizawa that he would be outin' with a friend before he left, which made Aizawa question him for a solid minute. He was leaning against a wall now, looking at his phone, not really doing anything. "Izuku, hey." He turned a little to see Inasa running up excitedly and waving his hand. "Good to see you, Inasa." He pushed himself off the wall and met the other halfway. Inasa panted before answering. "Same to you. Shall we?" Izuku smiled and nodded his head and followed the other as they walked to a nearby cat cafe. When Katsuki agreed to go out and hang with the group, he didn't expect it to be as fun. Kirishima had invited him to go out with them on the weekend. He expected Kaminari, Shiro, and Mina to be there too, but he was surprised to see Momo and Gyro there too. He had originally planned on seeing if Izuku wanted to spend more time together, but Izuku had pestered him on making friends with the group. They had been at the arcade for a while now, and Katsuki and Kaminari had been beating everyone at the games except each other. It almost always ended in a tie. "Okay, we're leaving before they kick us out." Kirishima mostly joked as they began leaving the arcade, with Kaminari and Katsuki arguing about who the best was at the games. "Bring it back, you bitch," Kaminari yelled as Katsuki began chasing him around the area while the others laughed. After a moment, Katsuki calmed down and was mostly being silent as they all walked around the area looking for something else to do. "Wait, is that Midoriya?" Mina asked, looking over. The rest looked over too, seeing Izuku walking with a bigger man next to him who was talking wildly. "Who's that though?" Shiro asked with a smirk. The class didn't know much about him, but they didn't think he knew anyone outside of school. "Oh, maybe it's his boyfriend," Mina teased, wiggling her eyebrows. Katsuki rolled his eyes at them with a huff. "Oh please, the nerd doesn't have a boyfriend," Katsuki said, throwing one of his hands at the two. "I don't know, Bakugo. They seem pretty close," Kaminari pointed out, resting his arm on Katsuki's shoulder. "Oh, that's Urashi. He was a recommendation student with Izuku, Todoroki, and he made it in but declined the offer," she explained, making the others look shocked. "Whoa, so they're both like crazy strong then?" Shiro asked, looking impressed. "Correct. They both actually got first place in the exam. They did seem pretty friendly after the exam though," she said with a small smirk. If that was his boyfriend, she was proud of her friend. "Still, I doubt they're dating," Katsuki said with another eye roll. Someone's jealous. Katsuki began chasing Kaminari, Mina, and Shiro around again while Kirishima tried to calm him down. Izuku watched the group after hearing their conversation, a little confused. "What's wrong, Izuku?" Inasa asked, noticing his friend looking at the group. "I know them from my school and they think you're my boyfriend." "What's that?" Izuku asked, turning to Inasa, who looked a little shocked. "You don't know what that is?" Izuku shook his head. "No." "Can you explain it?" Izuku didn't need to explain why he didn't know, since Inasa had already found out a little about his past. Well, it's when you date someone." Inasa looked to Izuku, who still looked confused. "If you really like someone or love them and they feel the same, you tend to start dating them in hopes of staying with them." Inasa tried to explain as Izuku nodded his head. "So like parents?" Inasa nodded his head with a wide smile. "Wait, why do they think we're dating then?" Izuku asked, even more confused now. He liked Inasa, just not like that. Inasa was his brother. It was weird. "Not sure, though it might have to do with the fact that some people might consider this a date." Izuku turned to look at the still shouting group. "But no offense, Izuku, I see you as more of a brother." "It's fine, it would be weird. You're a brother to me too." "Fantastic. If you're so sure that they aren't dating, why don't you go over there then?" Mina asked with a smirk. Katsuki huffed and stood up since the group had sat down for a minute. "Fine, raccoon eyes." He walked over, already knowing that Izuku had heard them the entire time. "Suchin." Izuku smiled over to him and stood up. "Hi, Kaken." The other boy hugged him, with Izuku doing the same. "And no, we aren't dating. We met a while back and are just friends," Izuku explained, already knowing. Hello, it is a pleasure to meet another one of Izuku's friends. I have heard about you, Inasa said, offering his hand. Katsuki looked at before shaking his hand. I haven't heard much about you though. Yes you have, Izuku explained with a sigh. He's the one you always call Windy. Izuku smiled as realization hit his friend. You're the loud talkative one then. Inasa laughed, hitting Katsuki on the back. So you have heard of me. Katsuki huffed, not really liking the guy all that much, but he wasn't terrible. You should probably get back to the others. They think Inasa hates you for some reason. Izuku explained since he was listening to the others talk still. We should go greet them. It would be interesting to meet more of your friends, Izuku. Izuku could only be dragged along as Inasa guided him to the group. Hello. You must be more of Izuku's friends. Izuku only sighed as the group smirked, seeing that Inasa hadn't let go of Izuku yet. Inasa, the boy looked to Izuku, who pointed to Inasa still holding onto his wrist. Inasa smiled and nodded, letting his hand go but still keeping close. Izuku turned to the group with a sigh after hearing Mina whisper about his boyfriend. Sorry, but we aren't dating, he stated blankly. Really, but you two seemed so close, Momo pointed out, seeing as Inasa was now resting his arm on Izuku's shoulder. Ah yeah, Urazu, good to see you again. But that's only because Izuku likes physical contact with people he's close with. Izuku immediately blushed and punched Inasa in the side, making him go down for a moment. Izuku glared at the others, but it didn't stop them as they only awed more. Can we go now? Izuku asked, turning to Inasa more. The other teen only smiled and nodded his head. Pleasure to meet you all. We must go now. The two walked away with Inasa smiling and Izuku still blushing. I told you they weren't dating, Katsuki said with the smirk almost on his voice. Yeah, but that also means he's available. Kaminari cheered to the surprise of the others. This time it was Momo though that stopped Katsuki from Kaminari talking about his brother like that, even though she waned to punch him a little too. Really, Kaminari? Didn't think he was your type, Mina said with a shocked look still on her face. Are you kidding? He's strong, mysterious, caring, kind, and apparently loves affection. How can't this be more perfect? He asked. Momo was tempted to let Katsuki go at this point. Other than the fact we know nothing about him, he seems to avoid us and doesn't talk absolutely nothing, Shiro said with sarcasm dripping from his voice. Once they left the group, Inasa got them lost before Izuku figured out where they needed to go and lead them there. Sorry Izuku, I didn't think I'd get lost. Izuku only smiled and let out a small chuckle as they walked into the cafe. It was luckily pretty empty besides one other person that simply sat in the corner on their phone with a cat. Izuku looked at him for a moment, seeming to remember the face. Hello, how long will you be here? The woman asked at the front desk. Izuku and Inasa looked to each other before Inasa spoke. 1 hour please. The two sat down with Izuku having a water and Inasa having tea. The two were sitting in one of the small cubbies with a group of cats simply laying all over Izuku and a few with Inasa. Wow Izuku, how do you have so many cats? Inasa asked, amazing seeing one of the cats move to Izuku's shoulders. It's probably my quirk. Cats and animals tend to like warmer areas to sleep. Inasa nodded his head along in understanding. It was silent until Izuku looked over to the other person and was finally able to pinpoint where he had seen him. Is he another one of your friends? Inasa asked, already ready to invite the other to sit with them. No, I ran into him and when I didn't respond verbally he mentioned how he wasn't a villain. It was a little weird. Inasa nodded his head before looking to the person again and smiling wider. You there, with the purple hair? The boy looked over scared for a moment before going blank. Would you like to sit with us? The boy seemed surprised before looking around. Yes, you. Come join us. The boy sighed and picked up the cat that was with him and walked over, sitting next to Izuku. Why did you want me over here exactly? The guy asked, sounding tired. Though Izuku didn't blame him, he looked tired. Izuku said he knew you, so I wished to meet more of his friends. The guy looked at Izuku, who met his eyes before turning away and petting one of the cats. I've never talked to him before. We ran into each other in the hall though. Perfect. Then we can all be friends now. My name's Urashi Inasa. Izuku rolled his eyes. Midoriya Izuku. Shinsu Hitashiwi, do you have so many cats? Shinsu asked, looking almost jealous. Izuku smirked before putting some of the cats on him. My quirk makes it so I'm hotter than an average person, so they like me I guess. Shinsu nodded his head happily, accepting the cats into his lap. It was mostly silent except Inasa talking with Shinsu and Izuku speaking every now and again. It appears I must leave. Goodbye Shinsu. Bye Izuku. Inasa picked Izuku up and hugged him, making Izuku chuckle before they waved goodbye. Haze. Chaotic. Yep. Izuku turned back to Shinsu. I know we don't really know each other, but did you say you weren't a villain when we first met? Izuku asked, a little confused and curious. Yeah, some people call me a villain because of my quirk. If someone responds verbally to a question, then I can control them. Izuku looked at the boy, a little surprised. Ask me a question. What? Shinsu asked, shocked. Izuku took a deep breath before continuing. Ask me a question now. You can use your quirk or you want, but ask me a question. The boy looked shocked before trying to speak. Why or how did you run into me the other day? I was having flashbacks, it wasn't good, and I was trying to avoid one of the teachers since I thought he was going to ask more questions and I wasn't ready. Izuku explained, quickly looking at the ground as he spoke. He knew the other didn't use his quirk. I promise I didn't use my quirk. Izuku looked up again with a lopsided smile. I know, you're not a villain because of your quirk. I've met villains with healing quirks. It's how you use the quirk. I think you'd make a great hero for what it's worth. The other boy looked shocked before speaking again. Can we be friends? Izuku was caught a little off guard but nodded his head, fishing his phone out of his pocket. Sure, put your phone number here. It had been a while since the hero class did anything super crazy and it made Izuku feel off. Something was up but he couldn't put his finger on it. He had been quiet most of the day since class hadn't started yet, but the others could tell something was off with him. Midoriya, what's wrong? Uraraka asked, seeing the boy glare out the window. He turned to her before answering. I'm not sure, something seems off though. Uraraka nodded her head in understanding. I get what you mean. Maybe there's a surprise or something. Uraraka asked, sounding hopeful. Izuku smiled and nodded his head. Yeah, maybe. It turned out the class was going to some place called the USJ where they were going to work on disaster training. Uraraka tried to reason with him that maybe he was just nervous for the training, but that didn't seem to be it. Midoriya, he turned to Tsuyu. I tend to speak my mind about a lot of things, so sorry if this is forward, but what exactly is your quirk? Izuku looked at her for a moment before looking to Aizawa, who nodded his head. Pyrokinesis. I can control and create fire. He lifted one of his hands and allowed a flame to appear. I can do a lot of things with it. Some of the group looked in amazement. Wait, can we touch it? Uraraka asked, looking excited. Izuku stared at the flame before nodding his head. Uraraka slowly put her hand where the flame was and saw it dance around her hand without burning her. That's so cool. A lot better than my quirk. I can only harden my skin. Kirishima said with a sigh but still smiling. I actually think it's an amazing quirk. Kirishima lifted his head and looked shocked at Izuku. It's very versatile and an amazing defense. Combined with your friendly personality and unwillingness to give up, you'll be a great hero. The others looked at Izuku a little amazed while Kirishima looked like he was about to cry. You're so manly, Kirishima yelled with his fist in the air. Wow, Midoriya, that's pretty awesome of you. You got a good point too. Izuku looked a little confused at Kaminari. Well, you, Bakugo, and Todoroki are the class's strongest. Todoroki is closed off but has the looks, and we've only known Bakugo a little while and his personality is a flaming pile of trash. Say that to my fucking face, Katsuki yelled, standing up and out of his seat. Everyone be quiet, we're here. They all stood up and got off the bus, walking into the building. Izuku felt the bad feeling again, and it was like someone had punched him. Aizawa saw him look almost in pain and walked next to him with everyone else far enough in front of them that they couldn't really hear it. Kid, talk to me. Izuku jumped a little, not realizing he was there till now. Bad feeling, something's gonna happen. Aizawa nodded his head. He trusted the kid's instincts. Keep me posted. If you notice anything, come to me right away. Izuku nodded his head as Aizawa stayed near them. When they entered the building, Izuku had activated infrared and listened for anything as much as he could. It was in the middle of 13 talking that he slowly pulled out one of his throwing knives and stared in the middle of the area. He saw flashes of body heat and a dark cold mass seeming to be small but slowly growing. Momo and Katsuki saw what he was doing and looked in the area, seeing nothing. Izuku, what's wrong? Momo asked loud enough for the others to hear and the teachers. When Aizawa saw the knife and the look, he turned to 13 quickly. Be prepared to get the kids out of here as fast as possible. 13 nodded, already knowing to trust Izuku. He drew his arm back and pivoted his foot before launching the knife to where he saw the mass. The class watched confused as the knife got to the center. It vanished. Izuku's eyes widened and he automatically began pulling his mask on and hood up. Kurogiri, he whispered, turning to Aizawa, we need to get out of here now. The class was confused, but 13 and Aizawa acted quickly. Aizawa put his goggles on and got into a fighting stance while 13 began leading the students away. The class was still confused but listened as 13 spoke to them quickly. Izuku hadn't moved from his spot as he continued to look around for something else. He froze in his spot as he saw who came out of the portal first. Tenko. Izuku stopped zoning out once Aizawa jumped down to fight the people and buy the others time. He turned around running to the group but saw the cold mass again. He ran faster and jumped, activating his quirk on his left arm before yelling, "Move!" The class moved quick enough for Izuku to hit the mist back some with his fire. He didn't extinguish the flame as he got lower to the ground. My, it seems we have an unforeseen issue. Izuku growled and glared, seeing Kurogiri block the exit. I must apologize, but you can't leave. And why the hell is that? Katsuki asked, taking a step forward ready to fight. Izuku shot his arm out, blocking Katsuki from moving anymore. We came here for a reason, now where is All Might? We were told he would be here today. Izuku felt the flames on his arm getting hotter as they turned blue. Well, if he isn't here, it's no issue. Maybe he will show up if we kill you all. Izuku's eyes widened, and he felt the flames slowly start to spread to his shoulder until he felt wind and moved out of the way. Not on my watch. 13 was using their quirk to suck up the mist. You all need to get out now. They made it to the door, but it would barely move. We can't have you warning others now, can we? Kurogiri opened a portal behind the hero using their quirk against them. Izuku growled again and went over to the door. Shoji, Kirishima on the right, Sato, help me on the left. The three nodded as they were able to pry the door open. It wasn't long-lived though, as Kurogiri appeared again, making Izuku let go and having to distract him. Izuku pulled the knife out from his back holster and began aiming it at the metal around the mist. Izuku's distracting him, but we can't do this long. Ada, the boy turned to the group. You need to run to the school and get help. Shoji grunted out. I can't leave you all here. You aren't. It's your duty as class president to help us. So help us and get help. Ada stared for a moment before nodding and running out the door using his quirk. The other three let the door go, making it slam shut. What a shame. We won't have long then. Kurogiri dodged Izuku's knife again, but wasn't able to dodge the flaming foot that kicked him to the ground, making him grunt. Let's finish this then. Kurogiri then expanded the portal, making a lot of the students go to different areas in the USJ. Izuku felt like screaming watching them all slowly disappear, only missing a few students. He lunged at Kurogiri again with the knife and himself having blue flames dance around them like smoke. Kurogiri turned quickly, teleporting Izuku as he spoke. Shigaraki will want to meet you. Izuku fell on his back without making a sound. He quickly jumped up and dodged a fist that was coming at him before grabbing the person's wrist and flipping them over his shoulder. He twisted the arm, hearing it dislocate, and the person scream before letting go and looking around where he was. He could see Aizawa fighting some of the villains while Tsuyu, Mainta, and Aoyama were at the shipwreck scene dealing with their own villains. He saw a villain getting close to Aizawa from behind, and the hero hadn't seemed to notice yet. He ran over as fast as he could and leapt into the air before hitting the villain and landing behind Aizawa. Kid, what are you doing here? You need to go back with the rest of your classmates. The two were back to back now, taking down villain after villain. The class got spread out. I was dealing with Kurogiri and he sent me here. He left out the part about Shigaraki. Then stay behind me. I can't let them get to you. Izuku's eyes widened as he felt a tear slip down his face slightly before turning into steam as his quirk began activating. We won't let them get to you, Izuku. We can't let them. He quickly jumped over Aizawa, knocking two villains down before he felt the blue flames on his arms again. He turned to Aizawa, who looked shocked. I'm not standing by this time. Izuku swung his leg again, hitting two villains down before he jumped out the way of another punch. He punched the person in the nose, making them go down quickly. He looked over and saw Aizawa doing fine on his own, if not only a little overwhelmed. He went back to his own fights until he heard someone counting. 19.10. He looked to where he heard it and saw 10 Shigaraki standing there before the man began running at Aizawa. Izuku tried to ignore it for a second until he realized what the counting was for. It was the seconds Aizawa's quirk worked. He began running and saw the man's outstretched hand reaching for Aizawa's chest. Izuku saw that he was about to block with his arm, but it wouldn't end well. He reached the two just in time to block Aizawa from his quirk. Shigaraki smiled under the hand, watching his skin begin to flake off of Izuku's forearm. Izuku gritted his teeth until he was able to push away Shigaraki and lower his arm. You know, Eraser, using a student as a shield is low. Izuku growled out as he got into a low fighting stance. Attacking my students is low too. Izuku already knew that Aizawa wasn't using him. Izuku lifted his hand and put it over the wound before lighting it on fire, cauterizing it with his own flames. Oh, this student reminds me of someone too. Let's find out, shall we? Izuku was nervous as he took a slight step back, feeling Aizawa next to him. Namu, get Eraserhead. Izuku's eyes widened as he pushed Aizawa out of the way as soon as a monster was above them. It landed on Izuku, crushing him a little. He felt his own ribs begin to hurt as he tried to breathe. What he didn't notice though was that it made his hood fall and mask crack. The Namu stood up and ran over to Aizawa and pinned him too quickly for the hero to react. Izuku stood up quickly even though it was hard to breathe. He felt blood run down his face, making him shut one of his eyes for a moment. So I was right, it's good to see you, Izuku. The boy jumped back, almost gasping for breath. Why so jumpy? I thought you'd be happy to see me again. Izuku felt another tear run down his face, mixing with the blood. You're not him, Izuku said, running forward, throwing a punch at the other. Shigaraki laughed before grabbing his arm and making more skin disappear as Izuku jumped back and cauterized the wound again. Oh, but I am. I just realized the truth. He directed Izuku's gaze to where Aizawa was pinned with blood leaking from his head and a broken arm. Soon to be another heroes are nothing. Izuku ignored Shigaraki as he felt burning. It hurt so much, but he ignored it and ran as fast as he could. He lit his hands of fire along with small parts all over his body before he threw the Namu off of Aizawa and crouched low to the ground, protecting the hero. "K kid?" Aizawa asked, looking up slightly. He was shocked at what he saw. Izuku had blood running down his face with tears turning to steam. But it wasn't that. It was the dark gray wings now laying at his side with blue fire dancing around Izuku's body and wings. Izuku didn't look down though. He laid a hand near Aizawa. "Are you okay?" Aizawa looked up again, seeing Izuku still glaring at the other two. "What? Are you okay?" Aizawa slowly began to get up, but Izuku stopped him and moved his arms so that they were under Aizawa. "I'm gonna move you. Sorry if it hurts." He slowly lifted Aizawa into his arms where Izuku held him in a bridal carry. He stretched out his wings before he took off into the air. It wasn't long till they landed though, and Izuku put him down next to 13. "Check his wounds and see if you can stop the bleeding." Izuku stretched his wings again and took off. "Kid." Aizawa tried sitting up but was stopped by his own injuries and Uraraka. "Aizawa, please stay down." He looked to her and saw tears streaming down her face. He slowly laid back down even though he didn't want to. "Right, sorry Uraraka." He looked to her before reaching into his belt and pulling out a few medical supplies. "Use these to treat 13's wounds. I can walk you through it." Izuku landed in the center once again. He folded his wings behind his back as he started taking steps, leaving blue flames behind him. "Oh, you returned. I thought our game was done," Izuku snarled, showing his teeth. He slowly began picking up his pace until he was sprinting at Shigaraki. He swung his leg up, almost hitting the other in the chest. But the man grabbed onto his leg, making the clothing and skin flake away until he lit his leg on fire, burning the wound and making the other let go and fall slightly. Izuku took the chance and pinned the other to the ground with his hands above his head. The hand on Shigaraki's face fell off, showing a shocked-looking male with red eyes and blue hair. He smirked, making Izuku frown. "So you got me now, hero. Now what? Turn me in and I tell them everything about you." Shigaraki couldn't see Izuku's face. He was silent until he felt something wet hit his face. "I don't care what you tell him." Izuku's wings flared out to both sides of him. "I just want Tenko back." Izuku now met the other's eyes. Shigaraki stared for a moment, but Izuku noticed his hair turned darker for a moment and his eyes became brighter. Izuku was shocked but didn't last long as something grabbed onto his wings and threw him off Tenko. He screamed slightly but kicked the person and pushed off of them, landing a little ways away. He saw Kurogiri and the Namu standing near Tenko. "Are you all right, Shigaraki?" The other male jumped a little but went back to normal and picked the hand up, putting it back on. "Fine, go back to the kids at the top. I don't want any more getting out." Kurogiri nodded his head before disappearing. "Namu, capture him. I want him to see this." Izuku flew up as the creature jumped at him, only to be dragged to the ground. He yanked up his arms before spinning and then throwing the Namu to the ground. He panted as he landed near the monster. He didn't get a moment to breathe as Shigaraki put his hand between Izuku's wings and held it there so he couldn't move away from the hand. Izuku cried out as it all flaked away until he was able to get away. He fell to the ground a little before jumping out of the way from the Namu again. He wasn't paying attention until he heard a gasp from behind him. He turned quickly, seeing Katsuki, Kirishima, and Todoroki standing there shocked. He folded his wings covering his back, and he turned back around, dodging the Namu once again. This time he landed next to the three who still looked at him in shock. "Todoroki, freeze them both to the ground." Todoroki snapped out of it and did as he was told, freezing both to the ground. "You three need to leave. It's not safe here," Izuku said, finally able to catch his breath. "Midoriya, we can't leave you here. You'll pass out from blood loss," Kirishima pointed out, seeing the blood drip down his uniform. Izuku saw it and brought his temperature low, slowing down the bleeding before lighting his wings on fire, stopping the wound. "You need to get out of here," he warned again, even though the three didn't seem like they were going to be moving anytime soon. They heard the ice break. "Namu, get them." Izuku turned, slamming his hands onto the ground, making a wall of fire appear. "Move." This time he pushed them out of the way, letting the Namu grab onto him and squeeze him. "Izuku." He heard Katsuki yell, but all he could do was cough up blood. He wheezed as the creature tightened its grip on him. "Oh, Izuku, are these your friends? Maybe I should tell them about our time together." Izuku glared but could barely move. "Don't you fucking..." Izuku screamed again as the creature tightened its grip even more. "You know what? You're right. You were a good friend after all. Very protective. Too bad you can't protect them now." Izuku's eyes widened and HSS body moved on its own. He grabbed another one of his knives, heating one of his blades, cutting the creature's hand off, and flew in front of the group. He grabbed Shigaraki's arm and twisted it behind his back, pinning him to the ground. "I am here." Izuku looked up, finally seeing All Might arrive, but it was short-lived as Shigaraki pushed him off and a portal opened, taking him and the Namu away from them. He stood up and watched as All Might began fighting the Namu, while Shigaraki and Kurogiri stood off to the side watching as well. His vision blurred for a moment, making him stumble a little, his wings soon disappearing as he fell. "Izuku." He felt someone catch him, making him jump and squirm a little. "It's me, Kakanoke." He stopped moving and blinked a couple of times before finally seeing he blonde again. He heard shouting and stood up with Katsuki following after. Todoroki and Kirishima weren't far. He looked around, seeing the Namu half frozen and falling apart. "Kirishima, Kaken, get Kurogiri while he's distracted. They can't leave if he's not there." The two nodded their head immediately and went to the mist and pinned him down. Todoroki stood close to Izuku, almost watching to see if he would fall. Can you stand? Izuku turned his head a little shocked but nodded. Can you freeze the Namo again? Todoroki nodded, sending a wave and freezing the creature, allowing All Might some breathing room. It was another moment before All Might flung the thing out of the USJ. I should have left the job for myself. Izuku looked with wide eyes as Shigaraki ran towards All Might with his hands out. Izuku ran before punching Shigaraki in the jaw, sending him to the ground, clutching his jaw. He stood up ready to attack again, but a gunshot was heard before it embedded itself into his shoulder. It wasn't long till they all began leaving through a portal. We'll see you again, Izuku, he glared as they finally left. Izuku turned, seeing that All Might looked moderately okay besides his deflated form. Young Midoriya was all he heard before he saw black and fell to the ground. Izuku slowly felt himself come back to life. He felt two people laying next to him with another person somewhere in the room not moving. He slowly opened his eyes and looked, seeing Eri and Kauta curled up on his chest with someone else he didn't recognize on the other bed. He looked at himself, seeing his chest and back wrapped to hell and back with gauze. His right arm and left both sported similar wraps along with his leg. He shifted slightly, making the two on him wake up. Nai-san, Eri cried with tears already streaming down her face, while Kauta could only stare at him like he didn't believe he was alive. Are you two okay? Where's Dad? Is everyone else okay? Izuku asked quickly, not even noticing his slip-up. They're all fine, but you. Kauta spoke through a broken voice before punching Izuku in his chest. Kauta, no, you don't get to do that. You almost died. Kauta cried, still not meeting Izuku's eyes. Izuku let Kauta get his anger out before slowly grabbing onto Kauta and pushing his head against his chest. Let go of me. Kauta, the other boy, froze hearing the tone. It wasn't that he was scared, just surprised at the cracking of it. Listen, me heart still beating. As long as it does that, I'm not leaving you. Kauta was silent before hugging his brother tightly and crying silently. After a moment, the two seemed a little better. Where's Dad though? Izuku asked, now standing up with the two clinging to him like bears. I sent Aizawa away to the nap room. He hadn't slept in over a day, Recovery Girl answered as she walked into the room. He only had a broken arm, a head wound. Poor fool wouldn't sleep until midnight made him. Izuku nodded his head before carrying the two down the hall and where he knew the room was. He opened the door, seeing Aizawa laying on the bed in there with a blanket over him. He smiled half-heartedly and set the two down onto the bed. Can you two wake Dad up for me while I change cloths? The two nodded, giving small salutes before quietly walking over to the bed. He walked out of the room into his own room and unlocked it. He kept it unlocked knowing Aizawa was gonna run in. He opened his closet, pulling out black joggers and a white sweatshirt. He sat down on his own bed just as the door burst open, revealing Eri and Kauta looking worried with Aizawa panting. Daddy, he's okay, see? Kauta said, pointing to Izuku, who looked equally as exhausted as Aizawa. He moved out of the doorway and tackled Izuku into a hug, almost making him fall onto the bed. The two youngest followed suit and sat on either side of Izuku while looking to Aizawa. You had me so fucking worried. I thought you were dead when I saw you collapse. Izuku gripped tighter around Aizawa. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. He repeated over and over again. Eri and Kauta looked like they were going to cry just listening to him apologize over and over again. Aizawa shifted them and slowly laid them both down with Eri and Kauta cuddling in between them. I didn't want to lose you, Dad. I couldn't lose another parent. I'm sorry. Aizawa was caught off guard by the dad but held the teenager closer. I couldn't let it happen. I'm sorry. Kauta and Eri cuddled closer and quietly cried as they held on to him. I know, kid. You aren't gonna lose me too. He combed his hands through the boy's hair, trying to calm him down a little. Izuku held on tighter as he continued to apologize. At this point, Kauta and Eri had fallen asleep holding on to Izuku. I got you. Go to sleep. I got you. Izuku continued to mumble but otherwise was drifting off. Izuku. The 10-year-old looked over to the teenager. Do you think when we get out we can be heroes? Izuku thought about it for a minute. If we can, I want to be a hero duo with Kaken. Then you could be like our mentor. Izuku cheered, hugging Tenko. Yeah, then Taoya could be my partner, right? Taoya looked up and smiled, hugging the two. Yeah, we'll be the best heroes ever. There was a loud screech of metal against metal. The three quickly separated from each other and looked down. My boys, we aren't your boys, Taoya yelled. He got blasted across the room. The two ran over to him. The man walked closer, making Izuku stand in front of them, both lighting up with blue fire and spreading his wings out. Now, Izuku, can't have that. The man grabbed Izuku by his hair and pulling him up off the ground. Now how about you calm down a little? Izuku struggled and thrashed around in the man's hand. Now wake up. Izuku shot up, panting and clutching his hair with tears streaming down his face. He looked, seeing Aizawa, Eri, and Kauta all still asleep. He slowly moved off the bed without waking them and grabbed a hat and mask from his closet. He turned to look at the three before he opened the window and jumped out. He landed and quickly scaled the gate and ran towards a collection of alleys. He turned down another alley and pulled out his phone, hitting the call button. Izuku, what's up? I need you Talia, something's happening. Aizawa had woken up to Izuku moving slightly. Almost in panic, he looked to the kid, seeing tears streaming down his face. He wanted to wake him up, but he didn't get the chance as he shot up. Aizawa quickly closed his eyes and slowed his heart rate to make it seem like he was sleeping. He felt the kid stand up and heard him moving around. He planned on getting up until he heard the window open. It was silent again until he climbed out, shut the window, then jumped. Aizawa bolted up, grabbing his capture weapon, and watched him leave the area before he followed after. He was a little surprised when the kid went into an alleyway and called someone. He couldn't hear the other person, but he heard Izuku. I need you Talia, something's happening. He recognized the name as someone Izuku had been in the place with. He then hung up the phone and started walking somewhere. Aizawa trailed behind until they got to an old apartment building. Izuku knocked on the door. It didn't take long till the door opened and he was dragged into a hug by Himiko. Izuku, I missed you. He hugged her back and pulled down his mask. Hi Himiko, is Talia inside? Yep. She lead him in and closed the door behind him. When they got into the living room, Izuku tackled Talia into a hug. Wow Izuku, what's up? Izuku clung tighter to the now adult and cried silently, making Talia worry. Hey, I'm right here, what happened? You heard about the USJ, right? He asked through silent sobs. Talia nodded his head as Himiko sat down next to them and comforted Izuku. He was there and he's. That man did something to him. He snapped out of it for a moment but he did it again. Talia's eyes hardened. Izuku, what did he do? Izuku stood up and slowly took his sweatshirt off. He then took off the bandages, revealing almost spider web-like scars on his arms, chest, and the largest on his back. It almost covered it minus 2 spots where his wings would appear. Both of them gasped at the large scars. He did the same with the one of his leg. A lot of these are from that place, aren't they? Izuku looked surprised at Himiko's question, but he nodded his head. Yeah, they are. But the new ones are from Tenko. I didn't know what he was doing. Talia, he's still in there fighting. Talia reached his hand out, running his fingers over one of the scars before pulling Izuku into a tight hug, both with tears. We'll save him. I promise Izuku, we'll save him. Izuku hugged him back. Himiko looked at them both before pulling them both into a hug. Aizawa was surprised at what he was seeing. He hadn't seen the lasting damage from the USJ and he understood why Izuku was upset about it. He also hadn't seen him be this close to people. Sure, there was Bakugo and Inasa along with Eri and Kauta, but otherwise there weren't that many that had seen him vulnerable. He was also surprised that Talia or Dabai had been able to stay alive this long and even had someone else with him. They were both pretty young, so it would be better if they were at UA, though he knew they would come when they were ready. Izuku didn't stay longer after their cry session since it was getting close to 5 in the morning, and while he didn't have school, he had seen calls and texts from Inasa, Katsuki, Momo, and Shinsu. They were all for different reasons though. Inasa wanted to make sure he was okay after seeing what was on the news. Katsuki wanted to check up on him and ask questions after everything. Momo wanted to make sure he was okay and how he was doing. And Shinsu had just wanted to hang out, really, likely not hearing the news. He was making his way around town a little bored since he didn't feel like going to the school when he felt someone watching him. He turned on infrared vision and looked around, but not noticeably when he saw someone on one of the roofs. Already knowing who it was, he turned to look at the person and pulled out his phone, sending a text. He watched as the person slowly came down from the roof and stood in front of Izuku. You're out pretty late. Why'd you leave? Aizawa asked. He didn't like pushing the kid's walls, but he needed to now. Since you know I left, you probably followed me. But I needed to talk to Talia. He's one of the few people that can relate to what happened. Aizawa stared at Izuku before pulling the kid into a hug. I don't expect to understand, kid, but I'm always here for you whenever you need me. Izuku was shocked but hugged back either way. Thanks, Dad. Izuku almost immediately blushed and was about to pull back before Aizawa stopped him and pet his hair. No problem, kid. Izuku was walking around again, except this time he was with Momo and Katsuki. They had decided to go get food then head back to the school so that Izuku could explain everything to them. They were back at the school in Izuku's room, all simply eating and drinking. I don't want to push you, Zachin, but I want answers. I would have to agree with Bakugo. I know you and I haven't known each other for long, but I still care about you. Izuku sighed and looked at the ground before looking back up at them. I know, I'll tell you everything. He took a breath before starting. I was almost 5 when we were kidnapped. I don't remember exactly what happened, but I remember Mom and Dad screaming in some pain. I woke up in a room with barred doors. They were still knocked out, but I was awake. There was a lot of screaming, but I never saw someone else for a while. He slowly took off the gloves that were covering his hands, hearing them both gasp. They used to torture me if I didn't use my quirk like they wanted. They wanted a weapon, but I didn't want to kill anyone. Once they realized hurting me wasn't doing anything, they decided it was better to hurt them. He kept his gloves off and put his hands in his lap. Mom and Dad kept me away from the people the longest they could, but they always got to me. There was one night where they wanted me to kill a man, but I wouldn't. They then threw me into a room and pumped it full of gas. That was when I got my wings. They were testing something that was supposed to advance my quirk, and it did. A little after that, they took my parents and killed them in front of me. At this point, the other two stood up and sat next to him, holding him as he continued. He didn't even realize he was crying. Not long after, they brought in two boys named Tauya Todoroki and Tenko Shimura. We were all really close. They always tried to make me fight Tauya, but we never really did. Then one day they took Tenko and did something to him. When he came back, his hair was a light blue and his eyes were darker. He was completely different. He used his quirk on me since I tried to protect us. He wanted us to join the villains, but we didn't. Tauya got out around the time I was 10. I was left alone for a while with no one else. Tenko would show up, but he was just wanting to try and convince me. They couldn't kill me either since they needed me. The two held him tighter and he leaned into them. Then at some point they brought in Eri. They wanted me to be her caretaker since they needed her quirk. About a week later they brought in Kauta to use against me. Now all they had to do was use those two and I would do almost anything. They had to use quirk suppressants though. They would put it in my food and then take me away. He laughed a little at the end. Eri and Kauta were always so scared. I always promised to come back, but I never knew if I would. Then when I was about 13-14 we were able to escape and Aizawa found us along with Midnight. And now we're here. He finished. There wasn't much else other than him and the others getting better. Izuku, you've gone through so much. You're so amazing and brave. Momo whispered through her own tears. Zuchin, Uncle and Auntie would be proud of you. He hugged them both close as he cried silently. At some point they ended up laying down on the bed with Momo at his front and Katsuki at his back. Aizawa was going into Izuku's room to check on him since he hadn't heard from him in a few hours. He opened the door but stopped seeing two of his other students laying down with his son. He pulled out his phone, taking a picture before closing the door and leaving them. Izuku woke up seeing it was almost 6 at night. He tried to sit up but was stopped by two sets of arms wrapped around his waist. He looked around a little more, seeing that he was laying his head between Momo's shoulder and neck. He looked behind him, seeing Katsuki right next to his own face and in a similar situation. He blushed a little, not used to the contact from anyone other than Eri, Kauta, and Aizawa. Momo, Kaken. The two woke up blinking a couple times before sitting up. What time is it? Katsuki asked, rubbing his eyes. It's 6:30. Momo screeched a little, seeing they had been asleep for almost 3 hours. What? Fuck, I gotta go. Love you, Zuchin. Katsuki hugged Izuku and waved bye to Momo while she did the same. He smiled as they left. When the door closed he felt his phone ring and answered it. Hello. He had forgotten to see who it was. Fantastic. You aren't dead. He laughed a little, hearing Inasa. No, I'm not. But what can I do for you? Inasa hummed a little. Well, after seeing the USJ incident on the news, I was worried since you hadn't been answering me. Then my friends noticed and thought something happened, which it did, but she didn't know. And when I explained everything, she demanded that she meet you. Okay, are you free tomorrow? Izuku wasn't sure what day it was since his schedule was a little mixed up. Oh, yes, of course, same place as before. I'm a little surprised you said yes though. Izuku hummed in understanding. Yeah, same place works. How about 2? Does that work? Of course, Izuku. I'll see you then. Goodbye. Bye, Inasa. Izuku hung up before standing up and stretching. He heard a few pops, but that was all. He unlocked his room and started walking to the nap room, figuring Aizawa, Eri, and Kauta were there. He opened the door, surprised to see All Might sitting on the floor telling a story to Eri and Kauta while Aizawa napped in Present Mike's lap. Oh hey, Green Bean. Glad to see you woke up. The others turned to Izuku and smiled while Eri and Kauta tackled him to the ground. Nice-an. Uncle Yagi has been telling us stories of his fights. Yeah, they're really cool. All Might blushed at being called Uncle Yagi, but Izuku just laughed before picking them up and sitting them in front of the hero again. Really? Well, I'm sure Uncle Yagi would love to tell you more. He smirked in the hero's direction before walking over to present Mike and Aizawa. I think you killed him. Hizashi joked. Maybe. It was the next day and Izuku was walking around with a tight black long-sleeved shirt with gray cargo pants. He was almost at the meeting spot when he saw Inasa and a girl walking around aimlessly. He smirked slightly, already knowing that they somehow got lost even though they were almost there. How did you get us lost? You literally picked the spot. The girl wheezed out as she doubled over laughing. He gets lost a lot, Izuku said, making them both jump, seeing as they hadn't seen or heard him come up. Inasa smiled widely before grabbing Izuku and lifted him into the air. Izuku, it's good to see you. Izuku smiled and nodded his head as Inasa let him down. The girl looked a little surprised but smiled at him. Nice to meet you, Midoriya. Name's Kami. She offered her hand up like a wave, confusing Izuku a little. High five, she explained with a quirked eyebrow. He nodded and returned it, realizing what it was. Let's head inside. The rest of the day went a little like that, with Izuku getting a little confused on some of the stuff Kami said, but Inasa explaining it. The class was finally back in school. All mostly healed up by now, considering it was only Izuku and Aizawa who got hurt. Izuku still had a few bandages on but otherwise was fine while Aizawa looked like a mummy. Now that we're back, we need to talk about the sports festival. As soon as he said that, almost the entire class erupted into shouts of excitement. This is gonna be so cool. We're gonna do great. The rest of the class time was spent with Aizawa trying to quiet them down and continuing on with normal classes until it was their free period. What's the sports festival? Izuku asked, looking to the others in the classroom a little confused. Have you been living under a rock? The sports festival is the biggest event in Japan. It's when all the classes in every year go against each other to see who's the best, Kaminari explained, though he received a glare from Momo and Katsuki. The groups went back to talking as Izuku looked to Uraraka. Uraraka, are you okay? Ada asked, seeing her look intense. She turned to everyone and shouted, everyone do your best. Izuku giggled at his friend but nodded his head anyway while everyone else seemed a little worried. Hey, why is everyone blocking the door? Kaminari yelled when they opened the door to leave, but a huge group of people were blocking the door. It's obvious. They want to get a look at the competition, Katsuki said, throwing his bag over his shoulder. Move out of the way, extras. Bakugo, you can't call other students extras. Ada yelled while chopping his hands. Izuku just watched his friend. He's right, came to get a look at the competition, but not really much from what I can see. Izuku froze a little at the voice and looked to see Shinsu glaring at Katsuki. You're the guys that faced villains. Not really impressed. Izuku knew what Shinsu was doing, but apparently no one else did. Whatever. Katsuki pushed past him, making the crowd disperse slightly. Hey, you think you're better than us? One of the people from Class B shouted. Yeah, Katsuki continued while some of the others followed. The group dispersed, but before Shinsu could walk away, Izuku tugged on his sleeve, making him turn. Midoriya. Izuku nodded his head. So we aren't impressive, huh? Izuku teased the other boy, making him jump a little. No, I mean yes, Izuku laughed quietly as he saw his friend panic. It's fine, Shinsu. I knew what you were doing. It's a good tactic. Shinsu rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Right. Mind telling me who the people are that are staring at me? Shinsu asked, pointing to Ada, Uraraka, Tsu, and Momo, who were watching the two. Right. He guided Shinsu over to the four. This is Shinsu Hitoshi. We met not too long ago. I see. Well, mister, what are your intentions with our big brother? Uraraka asked with a teasing smile. Yes, you did seem a little rude when speaking of our class. Ada chopped his hands while the other two agreed. It was more of to see what would get you riled up. I didn't know anyone in this class, or I didn't think I did, Shinsu explained, still rubbing the back of his neck. It's all right, I'm Yaoyorozu Momo, but most people call me Yamomo. She offered her hand. He looked at it for a moment before taking it. Right, my name is Uraraka Ochako. Ida Tenya, pleasure to meet you. Tsuyu Asui, but call me Tsu. Shinsu nodded. Shinsu Hitoshi, should we go to lunch? Izuku offered, seeing Shinsu a little out of his element. As they all sat around, they all talked quietly about what they thought the festival would be like. When Izuku felt something getting close to his head, he lifted his hand and stopped it. He turned to see a blonde who looked a little shocked. You okay, Izuku? Momo asked, a little shocked herself. He nodded and turned back to the blonde, letting his arm go. Sorry, didn't see you there. Thought you were trash. Izuku just stared him down. Hey, that isn't very nice. Apologize. The others agreed while the blonde just smirked. Why would I apologize to Wanatra? He was cut off as the girl chopped the back of his neck, making him fall. She caught him inside. Sorry about Monoma. He can get a little intense. My name's Kendo. I heard you talking about the sports festival. I heard it was supposed to be robots. She left soon after that, dragging Monoma behind her. Do you really think it'll be robots? Uraraka asked. No, they would likely change it. The teachers may have even spread the rumor themselves. Izuku explained now that he was thinking about it. I would have to agree with Izuku. It wouldn't make sense if it was just the robots. Momo said, nodding along. Mai-san, you gotta get up. Izuku cracked his eyes open, seeing Eri and Kauta smiling at him. I'm up, Eri. He sat up, almost making them fall before he caught them. Careful. He smiled down at them before standing up and going over to his closet. There was a knock on the door before someone spoke. Kid, you awake? Yeah. The door opened, revealing a bandaged Aizawa with one arm in a cast. Good, you need to get ready for the sports festival. Everyone waited in the locker room for the doors to open so they could go out to the area. Midoriya. Izuku turned to Todoroki from a quirk standpoint. We're almost evenly matched. Izuku nodded his head, but I will still beat you. Aw, come on Todoroki, we're all friends here. Kirishima tried to reason, laying a hand on the other teen's shoulder, but Todoroki just shrugged it off. I'm not here to make friends. Consider this a declaration of war, Midoriya. Izuku was a little shocked. Hey, half and half, why don't you declare war on me, huh? Todoroki simply pushed past Katsuki, making him even angrier. Kakin, stop. Katsuki glared but calmed down nonetheless. Our first round will be an obstacle course. Izuku smirked a little. He'd done the obstacle course to get in. This would be simple. On your mark, get set, go. The doors open, letting them into the tunnel. It's similar to the end tunnel. He saw everyone pushing themselves to try and get through to the end. He used thermal vision and saw Todoroki quickly getting ahead of everyone. He slowly moved to the wall and got past everyone, ending up right next to Todoroki. They made it to the bots and Todoroki froze them, giving them both the chance to get past them for the most part, though parts of the bots began to fall towards them. Watch out! Izuku pushed them both out of the way and used his fire to melt some of the metal so it missed them. And Midoriya Izuku has saved himself and his classmate. Both are now in the lead. Izuku stood up and offered a hand to Todoroki, who glared at it before standing up. I'm not here to make friends. Izuku watched him before following after to continue the race. He made it to the next obstacle as some people finally began to catch up. He looked at the wire before jumping. And Midoriya jumps. Will he make it to the next landing? Izuku knew he wasn't going to. As he fell, he grabbed onto the wire and flung himself past a few of the landings before landing in the middle. He fell but used it to his advantage. What are you teaching them, Eraser? Present Mike asked, a little shocked. I didn't teach them that. Izuku cracked a smile before doing the same thing again. He made it to the minefield and saw Todoroki already halfway through. He used his infrared to spot where the mines were as he ran. He could hear Katsuki getting closer to him. While still running, he sent heat through the ground, setting off a wall of mines, making Todoroki stop in his tracks. He smirked as he took off running, not hitting any other mines as he jumped through the wall of smoke with a smile thrown over his shoulder to Todoroki, who glared. The two became neck and neck as Todoroki finally snapped out of his shock, with Katsuki not far behind them, and Midoriya and Todoroki are neck and neck, with Bakugo catching up to them. Who will win? The difference between the three running was that Katsuki and Todoroki had to look out for the mines, while all Izuku had to do was step around them since he could see them. They were still neck and neck. Todoroki and Katsuki kept fighting while Izuku would dodge them. He smirked again as he came to an area cluttered with mines. As the two were busy fighting, he jumped on them, making them explode and giving him a boost. He was thrown ahead of them as they all made it to the end. And the winner is Midoriya Izuku. Izuku took a breath and tried to calm down as he felt someone punch him in the shoulder. See, you got a few tricks, you fucking nerd. He smiled at Katsuki, nudging him slightly. Todoroki caught his eye as he glared and began to walk away. What's going through that head of yours? Katsuki asked, following his eye line. Izuku didn't remove his eyes from Todoroki as he answered. Something happened to him. Katsuki gave him a look telling him to continue. He's got something burning in his eyes. It reminds me. Izuku's eyes widened. My father isn't a good person. I ended up here cause I ran away. I wanted to take my siblings with me to get out of that hellhole. Guess I'm glad I didn't. Never mind. Let's wait for the others. Katsuki nodded but didn't seem to believe him. Izuku had forgotten. He had forgotten the first place Tauya was in. Now that we have the 42 students chosen, let's get to the next round. And it will be a cavalry battle. After Midnight explained the rules and points, people split off. Even when everyone had looked at him like animals, he just kept a straight face. Hey Midoriya. He looked over and smiled at Uraraka. I know we aren't super duper close, but can I be on your team? She asked with a nervous smile. Of course, Uraraka, and you can call me Izuku. I prefer it. Uraraka looked a little shocked. Well, then you have to either call me Ochako or a nickname, she declared with a finger pointed at him. He laughed a little. Okay, Yura, any ideas for who else should be on our team? Uraraka thought about it for a moment before looking happy. How about Ida? He's our friend too. Izuku looked to where Ida was. He was talking with Todoroki and had likely joined the team. He is ... but I think he's trying to fight me too, see? He pointed over there and she looked a little dejected. Well, that's okay. Let's look. Uraraka was cut off by a speeding ball of pink. Mr. 1 mil, let me on your team. Uraraka jumped while Izuku just looked at her. Who are you? Uraraka, being the more talkative out of the two. Hatsume Mei, future CEO of Hatsume Industries, at your service. I want you to use my babies. Both looked shocked at that until Izuku saw the machines. Do you have anything that works with zero gravity and fire? Hatsume beamed and began listing things they could use. We need one more person though. Uraraka looked deep in thought while Izuku turned and smiled. Do you want to join our team? I'm glad you chose me, Midoriya. I will do my best, Takoyami said as Izuku tied the headband on. I'm happy you decided to join us, Takoyami, and please call me Izuku. That goes for you to Hatsume. The two nodded as they got ready for the timer to go down. Remember, as soon as that timer goes down, everyone's going after us. We need to get up and out of the way. Uraraka and Hatsume's machines will give us a boost. My fire can make them back away, but I don't want to use it too much because it'll weaken Dark Shadow. How did you? I noticed during our training. He's weaker when you get closer to me or Kaken. Izuku smiled calmly at him. 3.2.1. All the teams set off towards Izuku's team. Up. They had been staying in the air successfully. Izuku, I need a break. Uraraka groaned out. Of course, let's get down and get ready to dodge. Once they landed on the ground, a few teams got close to them, but they were able to dodge and even grab a few headbands. Izuku. He looked at Hatsume. Since they had breathing room, why are we grabbing headbands if we have the mill? We don't know if someone will get lucky. Better to be prepared for a backup. She nodded in understanding as they got ready to dodge a few more teams. We need up again. I don't think we'll be able to dodge them all. Uraraka called as she got ready to go up. Careful, Minda got you on one of Boots. Izuku yelled as he dodged another attack. Crap, we need to get out of here fast. Hatsume yelled back as she looked for an exit. Izuku looked at Takoyami and nodded. I need you all to trust me for a second. If something feels off, get my attention. Izuku explained as he lifted his hands while his pupils became red. Izuku, what do you? Uraraka was cut off as a ring of fire shot out from around Izuku and pushed the teams to run from them. The three under Izuku shrieked as the fire hit them. But it didn't have any heat. The fire wasn't burning them. Once the ring disappeared, the teams had left. What was that? Hatsume exclaimed in glee. I can make my fire not burn. We needed them away but couldn't leave. Last resort thing. Hope you can do it again. We got incoming from Team Todoroki. Izuku looked at them and saw them getting closer as a wall of ice surrounded them. It won't work on them. Todoroki can put it out. Izuku focused as the team started talking. Please don't let this go to waste, Todoroki. Izuku's eyes widened as he saw more heat build up into the engines. I need you to run behind them. You'll know when. Izuku put a hand on Takoyami's shoulder, who looked shocked. The other team came speeding past them as Izuku used Takoyami as a brace and jumped over him. That's the signal, I think. Todoroki and Izuku came face to face. As Izuku got close enough, he saw a fire lighting up on the boy's arm. He smirked and used his quirk to snuff it out before grabbing onto Todoroki's headband while the other did the same, even though he was in shock while looking at his arm. Wow, Izuku, that was amazing. Uraraka cheered. He wasn't paying attention though as he saw Todoroki still in shock. Sorry, I lost the headband, but I grabbed his too. The three were about to defend him, but someone started yelling. Zuchin. Izuku smirked as he made eye contact with Katsuki as he pointed to Todoroki. The other teen understood and started heading for Todoroki while Izuku's team did the same. In time's up. Midoriya. Izuku looked away from his group and to Todoroki. I need to talk to you in private. Izuku nodded and was about to follow when Kirishima stopped him. You sure, Mido? You don't have to. Izuku smiled and nodded his head as he followed Todoroki. The two were silent as they stood in the tunnel. You made me use my left side. Izuku could already tell where this was going, but he knew the other had to get it out of his system. Do you know what quirk marriages are? It was silent again once Todoroki had finished. Izuku felt a smile come to his lips. You're a lot like him. The other teen snarled. Don't compare me to. I wasn't. Todoroki stopped yelling. You remind me of your brother, Tauya. Izuku pushed himself off the wall and turned to him with a smile. I helped him use his quirk. I'll do the same for you. Now that our break is over, time for our 1v1. On the left side we have Midoriya Izuku, the big brother of Wana and the person who has had everyone's attention since the beginning. People in the crowd cheered. And on the right side we have Shinsu Hitoshi of 1 degree Celsius, who hasn't gotten much attention and we haven't seen much either. Begin. The two stood across from each other, both with a glare. Izuku already knew what his quirk was and didn't plan on responding, though it was nice for Ajiro to give him a heads up. Looks like we'll be facing each other. Of course they put us against each other, just helps boost your ego. Izuku softened a little and that seemed to catch the other off guard. But I guess it doesn't matter. You're going to win anyway with a powerful quirk like that. He saw Izuku flinch a little, then again. Your life must have been amazing with a quirk like that. Everything handed to you, so of course you took pity on a villain like me. Izuku's eyes widened and he took a few steps forward. Shinsu, I didn't. Izuku felt a fog come over him when he answered. Thanks, now be a hero and walk out of bounds. Izuku felt himself move even though he tried to stop it. Come on, I need to break out. He tried fighting against it, but it seemed to only get worse. He struggled more until he heard someone whispering. Who's there? It was like shouting into a void. It's okay to be afraid. He looked around again, still confused. Now break out. As soon as that person spoke, he felt all of his fire go out in a ripple effect before disappearing. He whipped around and looked to Shinsu, who also seemed shocked that he was able to break out of the control. And Midoriya seems to have broken out of the trance. Once he was out of his shock, he began running at Shinsu. How did you? He didn't get to finish his sentence as Izuku punched him in the stomach. Izuku took a step back, getting into a fighting position. Once Shinsu was standing again, Izuku swept his legs out from under him. They went back and forth with Shinsu trying to get a response while Izuku would try to get him down until Shinsu was finally out of bounds on the ground. And Midoriya wins. Shinsu grunted and was about to get up until Izuku offered a hand. Need some help? Shinsu tried to stay mad, but it didn't work very well seeing as he was smirking now. Sure. Izuku was walking back towards the watching area for Class 1 when he saw Endeavor. You, I need to talk to you. Izuku stopped walking and looked up to the hero. You have an impressive quirk. When this is all over, you'll be interning under me. Izuku glared as the hero spoke. I'm not interested. He pushed past the hero before speaking again. He's not you, neither of them are. He kept walking. Izuku, you're back. Todoroki and Shiro will be up next, Momo explained as she moved slightly to give Izuku a space to sit. He sat down listening as everyone talked around him. He had been drowning everything out until someone tapped him on the shoulder. He jumped a little but saw it was just Kirishima. Hey man, you okay? Izuku nodded. But it didn't seem like it. You're a terrible liar. Izuku jumped a little. What? It's in your eyes. You said you were okay, but your eyes look darker. I know we aren't close, but you can talk to me. Izuku smiled before looking back to where Todoroki and Shiro were walking out. I'm worried about some people. Kirishima nodded his head. Family seems a little more serious than friends. Yeah, family, but I have a plan to fix it. Kirishima smiled and nudged him. Good. It was silent minus people cheering as Shiro seemed to be winning. But Izuku saw the ice before the others. Watch out. The glacier flew at them as Izuku pushed Kirishima back while trying to melt the ice. Everyone panicked for a moment until Todoroki was declared the winner. Is everyone okay? He received the chorus of people calling back that they were all okay. It took a while for the next round to go since they had to get rid of the glacier with the help from the heroes with fire quirks, including Todoroki and Izuku. Once it was ready though, everyone sat down to watch the next fights. It was interesting to say the least, especially Hatsume against Ida. When it was almost time for Katsuki's fight against Uraraka, Izuku looked to the blonde and sent a smile before going to Uraraka. Surely he'll hold back against a girl. Ida tried to reason. No, he won't. It would be an insult if he did. He turned to the nervous girl and smiled. Yura, you can do this, okay? She smiled and nodded as the two left and headed to the stands to watch. Izuku hung back a minute and saw Katsuki. He jogged over to the other before hugging him. Win, okay. Katsuki was a little shocked but smiled and hugged the other back. Got it, I'll see Zuchin. The two separated as Izuku went to watch and Katsuki went to fight. At the end of the fight, Izuku was surprised to say the least. It was a good fight, but Uraraka didn't know Katsuki could do a blast that big. He knew Uraraka would want to be left alone, but he also knew she needed someone at the moment. He walked down and saw Ida leaving the room, a little surprised to see Izuku. Oh, Midoriya. Uraraka said she wanted to be alone. Izuku walked past the other. I know, trust me on this. He walked into the room to see Uraraka crying silently. Oh, Izuku. Sorry, he ignored her as he pulled her into a hug. It's okay to be upset. You did amazing. She paused before sobbing into Izuku's shoulder as he tried to calm her down. It wasn't long until it was Izuku's fight with Todoroki. He wasn't nervous. He was worried. If he wasn't able to reach the youngest Todoroki, then Tauya may never see him again or worse. He waited until they were told to walk out onto the platform. They stood across from each other in silence. And now, we have 1A's big brother, with an amazing win streak and full of surprises. Midoriya Izuku versus 1A's cold winner, Todoroki Shoto. The crowd cheered as the two stared at each other fight. Once it started, Todoroki sent a wave of ice like before that came running at Izuku. Izuku brought his fist back as fire danced on his arm. Once it was in front of him, he threw the punch, melting and breaking the ice. The hit was powerful as it even sent a shock wave, sending Todoroki back a little. Whoa, he broke the ice with a punch and isn't injured. Izuku ignored what he said, because yes, he was injured. He sprained his wrist and his knuckles were bruised now. Another wave of ice was sent, but this time Izuku jumped up dodging it and rolled into a crouch when he landed. He didn't get time though as another wave was sent. Not being able to dodge it, he took the same hand and did the same as before, breaking the ice and sending the other back more. Taking the chance, he ran at the other and punched him in the stomach. Todoroki took the chance and froze his arm as he went back. The two stepped away from each other as Izuku melted the ice and Todoroki tried to breathe. Quirks affect us. They affect us physically too. You're shivering, Todoroki. Izuku pointed out after breaking another ice wave. So what? You plan to make this a game of endurance. You're going to break yourself, Todoroki said, pointing to his bruised and bloody knuckles that now peeked out from the fabric of the gloves he was wearing. I told you. He dodged more ice, getting closer to the other. I would. He punched the other again. Help you. Izuku could feel the rage building up. He understood what the other wanted. But it was stupid. Everyone is giving their all. You're half-assing this. Izuku could feel the burning again but tried to push it down. I'm half-assing this. I saw you during the USJ. Izuku stepped back, dodging a kick from the other before he tried to freeze him to the ground. Izuku quickly melted it and jumped back. You're right. He felt the burning come back full force as the crowd began to gasp. I was holding back. He stretched his wings out. Get ready. Before Todoroki could even see the other move, he was being lifted into the air and thrown to the ground. He used his ice to help the impact as he slid down it like a slide. Izuku felt tears prick his eyes. He always hated using his quirk deep down. I hate using my quirk, Todoroki. The other looked shocked as he cried. My quirk is the reason people are dead. It's my parents' quirk, but it's mine. He got in front of the other again and punched him again. And it's not his. It's yours, Todoroki. It's your quirk. The other stood shocked as Izuku breathed and more flames appeared on his arms. Midoriya. The other looked up and smiled as he saw the fire building up on Todoroki. You're crazy. The fire seemed to almost explode around them. The two smiled at each other as some of the teachers began to panic. Izuku began running at the other with his wings giving him more force behind it as he readied to actually fight the other. Todoroki lifted his hand as the fire got brighter. Thank you. As the two met and broke through the concrete, it was like an explosion happened, pushing both of them back as it all broke apart and a bright light came. Who won? Are they all right? It seemed like forever as the class and pros looked at the arena. It was silent as the dust cleared, showing both still standing. The only difference was that Izuku had gone over the line just a bit while Todoroki had stopped himself just before the line. And the winner is Todoroki Shadow. Both stood in shock looking at each other still as the crowd cheered. Midor the boy stopped when he saw the other begin to stagger slightly and picked up the pace as he began to fall. Midoriya. Todoroki caught him before he fell. Izuku stood up slightly using Todoroki as support. Thanks. Todoroki nodded as he helped the other to be a little more stable. Are you okay? Todoroki watched as the other stretched his wings a little before groaning and shaking his head. Can you take me to Recovery Girl? Todoroki nodded as he helped the other walk. Wow, both being such good sportsmen. Please enjoy the break while we rebuild the area. Recovery Girl looked over Izuku's injuries once she had looked over Todoroki, Izuku still being stubborn when it came to others. Izuku, can you take your shirt off? I need to see if there's anything major, or if your previous wounds were aggravated. Sadly, his injuries from the USJ were still a little fresh. He looked to Todoroki a little worried before he unzipped his jacket and carefully tried to not aggravate his injured wings. He saw the shock on Todoroki's face from the scars. It looks like your injuries are a little worse. I'll have to rewrap them again. Let me see your hands. Izuku paused again before peeling them off, showing more scars. Your knuckles are incredibly injured, and it looks like you sprained your wrist too. Izuku nodded his head along blankly. He didn't know how Todoroki was reacting. It looks like your wings got injured too. We'll want you to be careful. She walked away writing stuff down as Izuku continued to look to the ground. You mentioned me older brother. How did you? The question trailed off, but Izuku knew what he was asking. Some stuff happened in my past. If you want, I can take you to him this weekend. He'd like to see you. Izuku smiled up at the other while Todoroki tried to process it. Right, here. He grabbed a piece of paper and wrote something on it before handing it to the other. Just text me, and Midoriya. Izuku, you can call me Izuku. I prefer it. Todoroki nodded. You can call me Shadow, and thanks Izuku. He nodded before the other left the room. Izuku. He looked to Recovery Girl. Will have to do surgery on your hands to fix the damage. It will also give me a chance to fully fix your hands from the injuries in the past. Your wings should be fine after a few days though, but I suggest you keep them out so they can heal properly. Izuku nodded as she got him ready for surgery. Katsuki sat in his chair with his leg bouncing as the group all sat down to relax during the break. Bakugo, he'll be fine. Momo tried to calm the other down, but it didn't seem to be working, at least until they felt small bodies run into them. Is nice-san okay? Where's Izuku? The class, minus Shoji, all looked shocked seeing the two kids. It's okay, Izuku's perfectly fine. Recovery Girl will take care of him, okay? Momo reassured them as she picked up Kauta while Katsuki picked up Eri. She's right, don't worry princess, you either brat. Katsuki ruffled the girl's hair making her giggle. The class looked so confused at what they were witnessing. I'm sorry, but is Bakugo being nice? Kaminari asked in a teasing tone as Katsuki glared at him. What are you talking about? Katsunai is always nice, Eri declared as she hugged the blonde tighter. Hell yeah I am. Kauta punched the boy in the shoulder with a glare. Izuku said to not cuss around us. Katsuki and him then had a glaring contest as Momo rolled her eyes. Shoji walked over and began playing with the two while Katsuki and Momo were left to answer questions. Wait, so Mito's their brother? Kirishima asked. Looking at the two, the class could tell that they didn't all look similar at all. Yeah, he's taken care of them for most of their lives. Momo had a small smile on her lips as she watched the two play. What about their parents? Mina asked. She hoped they weren't neglected. Both the teens jumped. They both knew what happened to the three's parents. They didn't know how to answer the question. Hell if we know, doesn't matter anyway. The rest of the rounds had gone on as Izuku was asleep, but like most times he woke up before he should have. He sat up and remembered that he didn't have a shirt, no gloves, and that his wings were still out. He folded them so they covered his back at least. Luckily the rest he was worried about was covered in bandages. He slowly stood up and moved the curtain out of the way, a little surprised to see Kirishima and Shinsu both there. You're awake, Shinsu said, sounding a little shocked. What are you two doing here? He asked, looking between them both. I had my fight with Bikubro. It was crazy, but Recovery Girl just made sure I was okay. Izuku nodded and looked at Shinsu. Yeah, I don't have an excuse. After your fight with Todoroki, I was a little worried, so once she let me, I was gonna wait until you woke up to make sure you were okay. Izuku smiled at them both, making them both blush but smile back. Oh yeah, we saw your little brother and sister. Izuku looked at him a little confused and panicked. Don't worry, they were just worried about you. So yeah, Momo and Bakubro calmed them down. I think they're still with the class too. Izuku calmed down and nodded his head. That's good. Sorry about them. They get nervous when they see me fighting. The two looked at each other and back at Izuku and nodded. Do you want to head back to the sitting area? Sure, got nothing better to do. Hell yeah, I want to see who's winning. The three headed to the viewing area even though Shinsu wasn't in that class. As they were walking back to the class, the two boys noticed Izuku looking nervously at the non-covered parts of his arms. You okay, Izuku? Shinsu asked. The other jumped slightly. Yeah, no, I forgot that not all of my arms were covered. The two immediately were drawn to the scars that littered his arms and shoulders, along with one that was more hidden behind his wings. Here, Shinsu handed him his jacket since he had a shirt on under it. Before he handed it though, he ripped parts of it so it wouldn't cover his wings. That should work. Izuku blushed as he put it on carefully. Thanks. The three made it back to the sitting area. Once they entered, everyone was watching the fight going on and didn't notice the three entering, except for Eri and Kauta, who noticed Izuku right away. Izuku, nice-an. The two ran up and jumped to him. He caught them both even if it hurt a little to do so. Hey you two, hope you didn't cause trouble. The two giggled but noticed the bandages in his wings. Nice-an, why are your wings out? Kauta noticed too and they both began to panic. Whoa, it's okay. They just got a little banged up. They'll be gone once they're healed. The two nodded and hugged him as he sat down with the other two on either side of him. Who's up next? Izuku asked Momo. It should be Bakugo against Todoroki. Izuku's eyes widened as he saw the two walk out. You okay? Kirishima asked this time. Yeah, just worried about them. Apparently Izuku had a good reason to be worried. Todoroki still hadn't used his fire and it was making Katsuki pissed beyond belief. He could see Kauta and Eri looking scared in the corner of his eye. He pulled them a little closer knowing that it was okay and no one would be heavily injured, though he wasn't very convincing since he had been heavily injured. He moved the two on his lap to the two next to him before he yelled, Todoroki, don't lose. Once he shouted, fire began to dance around the other teen, but it went out quickly as Todoroki seemed to lose his fight. Damn, he's still trapped. He whispered so only Shoji and Gyro might have heard him. The festival was almost finished, with only the ending ceremony left where they would hand out the medals to the winners. He saw the three emerge and as soon as his eyes settled on Katsuki he covered Ers and Kauta's eyes quickly as he drew a breath. Both the boys next to him and Momo noticed it. Once she noticed, her eyes widened and she stood up making sure no one noticed them. Here, I'll take them. Izuku nodded and made sure they couldn't see anything until Momo took them out to the hall, likely to find Aizawa or another teacher. Izuku? Shinsu asked, seeing the panic in his eyes and the slight shake he had. Shoji turned and noticed too. Izuku, let's go. He covered his line of sight from the scene and moved him out into the hall with Shinsu's and Kirishima's help. What's going on? Izuku didn't seem like he was there at the moment. We need to ground him. Is it okay if we touch you? 1 tap for yes, 2 taps for no, Shinsu said, getting Izuku to notice more around him. He tapped once and all three of them held him in some way. Can you tell us what happened? Kirishima asked, more worried than before. When I was .55. I was kidnapped by villains. He slowly began to be able to breathe more as he spoke. I was held there with ... with other people ... for almost a decade. The three were shocked but let him keep talking. The way they have Kaken chained up ... He stopped being able to talk as he started hyperventilating again. Hey, it's okay, Izuku. No one's gonna hurt him or anyone else here. Kirishima spoke, shocking the other two with the way he was acting. After a while, Izuku finally calmed down and stood up with the help of the three. Sorry about that. He gestured with his hand as a small chuckle escaped his mouth. Don't worry about it. We all have our moments. Kirishima patted his shoulder, still watching for his wings. I'm glad you trusted us with this information. I assume Bakugo and Yamomo know as well. Izuku nodded his head. I should probably explain more later. Izuku looked awkwardly around as the three smiled. It's fine, Izuku. We should probably look for Yamomo, along with your siblings, Shinsu pointed out. Crap, yeah, you three can go if you want. I'll be okay. The three thought about it for a second before they went back while he went looking for his siblings. After the sports festival was over, Izuku was sitting in the break area since he had to wait for Aizawa to finish. He was a little surprised though to see Shinsu. Hey, are you okay? Shinsu asked. Izuku nodded his head. He was honestly not expecting them to care this much. You sure? You seemed pretty torn up about ... hat. Shinsu pointed out, trying not to name what happened exactly, making Izuku laugh a little. Yeah, I'm okay. It had just been a while since I was reminded of that like that. Shinsu nodded, though he didn't quite understand it. Okay, well, you know you can call if you ever need me. Izuku nodded his head as Shinsu stood up and said goodbye, though Aizawa soon appeared ready to go. You okay, kid? Izuku nodded his head again. Yeah, can you tell me where Endeavor lives? That's how Izuku found himself outside someone's window. He was wearing black jeans and a hoodie with the back torn up so his wings could fit without needing to make them disappear. He leaned over the window and knocked on it, knowing the person was awake. The window opened and revealed a very confused Todoroki. Shoto, the other boy, jumped at the voice but called down, seeing Izuku. You want to meet him? The boy seemed to think about it for a second. Yes, Izuku offered his before pulling the other boy on top of the roof. Izuku helped him climb down the house without making a noise. The two walked quietly down the street before Todoroki broke the silence. Izuku, the boy turned his head to look at the other. How do you know my brother? I know you said something about your past, but why didn't he come back? Izuku was not expecting that. He'll be able to explain it more than I would. It'll be easier to explain it too. Todoroki nodded, accepting the answer for now. When they finally made it to the apartment, Izuku had Todoroki stand a little off to the side so he could warn the older first. Izuku, what are you doing here? Himiko asked as she hugged the boy tightly. A visit, is Tauya there? Himiko nodded before calling back to the other. Hey kid, what do you need? Before Izuku could even say anything, Todoroki stepped out and tackled Tauya into a hug. Someone wanted to see you. Tauya stood in shock before returning the hug. Shoto, I'm so sorry. The younger hugged him tighter and shook his head. I don't care, you're alive. That didn't really shock the other three since they expected some kind of cover-up. Let's sit down, okay? Shoto finally let go and followed them as they all sat in the living room. Wait, Izuku, why are your wings out? Izuku had almost forgotten they were there. He ruffled them a little and showed the bandages. During our fight they got a little injured is all. Tauya nodded his head before looking at Shoto. What do you want to know? After the explanation and full stories from both Tauya and Izuku, Shoto was left in shock. It actually explained a lot though. He turned to Izuku. I thought Aizawa-sensei was your dad, or Hawk's secret love child caused the wings. All three looked at him before laughing, though Izuku was more quiet than them. What? It's a sound theory. That made them laugh even harder. Okay, Hawks I get. Maybe, but why Aizawa? Tauya asked through gasps of air. He had heard a lot about the teacher from Izuku. Well, he treats Izuku differently than the rest of us and seems like a father to him. Shoto explained with a shrug of his shoulders. You're not technically wrong. That got Shoto's attention. We aren't related biologically. But after I left, he was one of the first people to find me and take care of me. Plus I do call him dad. I knew it, Shoto shouted, though it just made the others laugh again. Once they all calmed down a little and relaxed, Shoto broke the silence again. Why don't you come back? Tauya looked at him for a moment. Not back with Endeavor, but back to the school. They would let you stay, wouldn't they? Izuku nodded his head. Please Tauya, we want you there. He saw Himiko shrink a little. Both of you. It wouldn't be the same if you weren't there, Himiko. The girl smiled before pulling Izuku into a hug. They're right, Tauya. We should go. It would be safer too. Tauya looked at the three before sighing. Fine. All three cheered, but only if it's okay with the school. Izuku nodded and pulled out his phone, making a call. Well, Izuku, what do I owe the pleasure? Nedzu asked on the other side of the phone. You remember one of the other people I was with? There was a hum on the other side. I want them and another person to live at the school with us. It was silent for a moment besides the clicking of a keyboard. Sounds wonderful. Tell Tauya, Todoroki, and Himiko Toga that they are welcome to the school, though we have to ask some questions, but only when they're ready. Izuku nodded his head, already knowing they would have too. Thank you, Principal Nedzu. We'll be back at the school soon. Of course, have a good night. You too. He hung up and turned to the shocked three that heard the conversation get ready to leave. Tauya and Himiko had packed up what little they had before they left. Shoto had left with the promise to see them again and explained everything to Natsuo and Fayumi. When they got into the school, Izuku explained a few things to them, like the teachers, places only accessible to them and the staff, and anything else he could think of. He knew that Kauta, Eri, Aizawa, and Hisashi were asleep in the nap room. He didn't want to panic them, so he was going to have the two sleep in his room for now, at least until their room or rooms were done. When they all laid down, Himiko fell asleep cuddling up to the two fire users. Tauya was the next to fall asleep and Izuku followed closely after. The next morning, Izuku woke to a gasp. He jolted up a little and saw Kauta, Eri, Aizawa, and Hisashi standing there in shock and confusion before the two younger slowly walked up to Izuku. Nai-san, who are they? Izuku was shocked that they didn't remember Tauya, but he did look a little different. He saw the two were still asleep. He also noticed that he was covering their bodies with his wings, making it even harder to see them. Remember Tauya? The two looked shocked and looked at the boy under his right wing, before smiling wide and jumping onto him when Izuku moved his wings. Tauya. That woke them both up. Luckily, Izuku moved his wings fast enough so he didn't hit one of them. You rascals. Tauya cheered and hugged them once he realized who it was, while Himiko looked at the group with a smile. Izuku felt a tug and looked to Himiko before smirking and wrapping one of his wings around her like a blanket hug. Izuku. He looked up and saw the two still looking confused. Who are they? Himiko Toga. He nodded his head to the girl who smiled wide and waved Taya Todoroki. The other was too distracted to even hear what Izuku was saying. Realization dawned on the two at the second name. Well, hello. I'm Present Mike, but you can call me either Hisashi or Yamada. Do either of you have preferred names? Himiko nodded. Yep, I prefer Himiko and he prefers Talia. Himiko explained with a smile. The two nodded. Hey Dad, Aizawa looked to Izuku. They're staying with us, and Shadow already knows. Same with Nenzu. Aizawa nodded his head. Okay kid, I assume they'll need clothes, so Kayama can take you all while the pussycats take Yuri and Kauta. He looked to Izuku. You'll also need to get some new clothes too. That way you can keep your wings out. Izuku blushed and was about to say something when Aizawa smirked. You and I both know you like them out, so just accept it. Izuku blushed more. We have to leave, Yuri asked in a sad voice from her spot on Talia's lap. Aizawa walked over to them and patted them both on the head. Only for today. You'll be able to see them whenever. Okay. The two nodded excitedly before waving goodbye while following after the two pro heroes. So your wings have gotten bigger, Talia said, touching one of the wings. Izuku rolled his eyes at Talia's attempt at conversation. That was sad to watch Talia. Himiko teased as she laughed. Shut up. Izuku laughed as he stood up, figuring he should probably change into different clothes. He didn't worry about hiding though since his wings covered everything. He put on maroon jeans and a black button-up, but not before fixing the back so he could wear it with his wings out. Once he was done, he turned around again. He saw the two still messing around on the bed. He laughed a little louder, getting the other two's attention, who stopped and looked at him in shock. Sorry, he gasped out, trying to catch his breath a little. Talia just smiled before standing up and putting him in a headlock and digging his fist into the boy's head. You think it's funny, huh? After a second they stopped and all sat on the bed. Oh Izuku, can I put your hair in a ponytail? Himiko asked, seeing as it wasn't super long, but it was long enough to have a small ponytail. Sure. She smiled wide and pulled out a brush, though the others didn't know where she got it, and sat behind Izuku while he moved his wings a little so they weren't in the way. That's how Kayama found Himiko finishing Izuku's hair while Talia detangled some of his feathers. Well, good to see you're all having fun, she joked, leaning against the doorway. All three jumped since they didn't even notice her. Hi Kayama, sorry we got a little distracted. Kayama just smiled at the three. No worries, sweetie. She directed her look to the other two. It's nice to meet you both. I'm Kayama, or Midnight is my hero name. Himiko finished Izuku's hair before waving wildly. I'm Himiko. Talia. Kayama smiled again. Well, you three, ready to go do some shopping? Himiko seemed more excited about the shopping than the other two, but they were all happy about it. I have a surprise actually. Talia reached into his pocket and pulled out a credit card. I'll cover it. All three looked at him as Himiko began laughing so hard she was crying. Is that Endeavor's credit card? Izuku asked, starting to laugh. Talia smirked and nodded his head. Soon they were all laughing, even though Kayama should have stopped them from using it. The four were now walking around the mall looking through clothing shops. They had noticed that Talia went for darker colors but mostly black, while Himiko went for reds and pinks or anything pastel. They hadn't gone to the stores for Izuku yet since it would take a little longer. This one's cute, Himiko, Izuku pointed out. He handed the girl a red skirt that went to the knees and above the waist. The back had black strings holding it together like a corset. Oh, I'm gonna go try it on. Kayama followed after her to help in case she needed it. So why are you keeping your wings out? Talia asked. To someone else it might have sounded rude, but Izuku knew what he meant. They are a part of me. My mom and dad would have wanted me to love every part of myself. Talia smiled and nodded his head as the girls came back. Looks good, Brad, Talia called, making the others smirk and glare. They were finally heading to where Izuku could get his new shirts and jackets when the other two had finished. Himiko ended up with 5 skirts, not including the red corset one she was wearing at the moment, 7 t-shirts including the pink pastel one she had on, 2 pairs of shorts, and a pair of black and white Vans. Talia had gotten 7 shirts with the black one he was wearing included, 5 pairs of jeans with the black ripped ones included, 2 pairs of joggers, and a pair of black combat boots. He had also gotten a bottle of black hair dye for later. So Izuku, any preferences? Kayama asked as they all looked around the store. I would prefer something that doesn't leave my back that exposed. Izuku rubbed his arm a little awkwardly since it had been a while since he actually thought about clothes. Well, for shirts the back will have to be exposed. Izuku made a whimper noise. He didn't mind some people seeing the scars on him, but not everyone. But we can get a few jackets that can cover it. Izuku calmed down a little and Kayama patted his head. Now, any colors you want. Izuku had to think about it for a moment. Most things he wore were either black, white, or red. He shrugged his shoulders. Okay, we'll try to go with colors that mix well with your wings and hair then. They all began looking around. They had mostly found black, white, and light blue shirts that Izuku liked. Each color had a plain t-shirt and one button-up, all with the backs missing. When they went looking for jackets, they found a black leather one where the fabric between the wings could clasp and unclasp easily, a white jacket that did the same, and a dark brown one where it unfolded so let the wings in and out. He decided to wear the plain white t-shirt with the black leather jacket out of the store. We all look so cool. Himeko cheered. Wait, we have to get a picture. Himeko pulled out her phone. It was an older model but still pretty nice. She handed it to Kayama as they all got into a pose. Wait, how am I supposed to pose? Izuku asked, a little confused. Himeko guided him into a crouch and made him throw up a peace sign while the other hand rested on a knee. Perfect. Kayama took the picture and then took one of her own and sent it to the teacher's chat. 12 in the morning, image.png. 12 in the morning, look at them. They're all so cute. Loud, AWWW. I'm saving that. Y'all might. Who are the other children? Tired. Those would be Himeko, Toga, and Taoya Todoroki. Izuku knew Taoya from the place and he met Himeko thanks to Taoya. Y'all might. Well, I'm glad they seem to be having fun. Kayama closed the chat as she saw the three laughing again while looking at the phone. You three ready to leave? She asked, getting their attention. Yes, Mom. All three called. Though Izuku and Taoya froze at the realization while Himeko just smiled. Kayama was close to tears. She pulled the three into a suffocating hug. The two boys blushed while Himeko just hugged back. Once they made it back to the school, Aizawa stopped Taoya while the other two went to the nap room. Taoya, I'm aware your situation is less than ideal. Taoya huffed a laugh at that, but your siblings are always allowed here. You can also visit your mother whenever. Just tell either me, Kayama, or Hisashi and we'll take you. Taoya's eyes widened. Can I go now? Aizawa smiled and nodded his head. Of course, let's go. Izuku had heard the conversation and smiled. He was happy he was able to help two Todorokis. Once the weekend was over, everyone was excited for the next part, though most were surprised to see Izuku sitting with his head resting on his arms with his wings out. Oh my gosh. He jumped and turned to see most of the girls and a couple of the boys looking at his wings. Izuku, they're so pretty. Uraraka pointed out. I would have to agree. They are quite beautiful, Izuku. Momo said, making the boy blush. Yeah, can we feel them? Toru asked with her jumping excitedly. He blushed more before stretching his right wing out for them to feel. A lot of the class looked amazed at the wings. At one point, one of the girls accidentally touched one of the new scars on the wing, making him tense up for a second. Sorry, are you okay? Mina asked a little worriedly. Yeah, just not used to having them out a lot, or people touching them. The group nodded in understanding, though they were a little more gentle this time. Why does Midoriya get all the girls? Mineta cried out. Because he's not a fucking perv-ass hat. Katsuki retorted before going to his seat, keeping him out. Izuku nodded his head as Aizawa came in. The group quickly sat down and let Izuku fold his wings back up. Izuku, go to the support course room. Izuku stood up and walked out of the room while Aizawa had them do a study hall till he got back. He was a little confused as to why he needed to go there till he remembered that since he was keeping his wings out he would need to change his costume a little. When he arrived, he heard someone yelling while someone else was laughing. He opened the door and caught a wrench before it hit him in the face. He looked down at it in confusion before looking at the class, who all looked shocked. Izuku. He was grabbed by Hatsume, who looked like she had gone crazy. Perfect timing. I've been working on something for your wings ever since I saw them. She dragged him over to a workbench and picked up two large rings of metal. What are they? He asked, touching them for a moment. They, my good sir, are for your wings. Now turn around and stretch them a little for me. He did as he was told and jumped a little when cold metal wrapped around the base of his wings. Now what? He ruffled his wings again, looking back at her. Now take this. She handed him a choker. He looked at it for a moment before slipping it on. It wasn't tight at all really, so he didn't panic and then tapped the blue button. He tapped it and jumped when he felt metal encase his part of his neck and the cartilage of his wings. It wasn't tight though and even felt comforting in a weird way. Yes, it worked. He stretched his wings and looked at them. It looked like the metal had almost wrapped itself around the wings but not the feathers before going into a point at the end. What is this? He was honestly shocked and amazed. It's armor. It covers the solid points of your wings so they're protected and they go into a point so you can use them to attack. Izuku's eyes lit up. It felt and looked amazing. Honestly, now tap the button again. He did and it all retracted into the choker and the rings on it as base. Whoa, this is amazing, Hatsume. He folded his wings again and pulled the girl into a hug. Thank you so much. She hugged him back with a smile. Of course. Now, we need to see how your costume fits. She dragged him again over to where Power Loader was. Good to see you, Izuku. Go ahead and try this on. He handed the teen a bundle of clothes before showing him a changing room. He put the clothes on and made sure everything was strapped correctly before stepping out. Hatsume had stars in her eyes as they looked at him. He was wearing a loose-fitting black shirt, a thicker black leather jacket with a hood, gloves with metal knuckles, a metal mask with a respirator built in, black metal sole combat boots. and a pair of padded jeans with a thigh holster for a knife and utility belt for smoke bombs, etc. He pushed the button to get the full effect though. Whoa, you look amazing, Izuku. We did good. Hatsume offered a high five to Power Loader, who accepted. Okay, now get back into your uniform and head back to class. What about the wing armor? Izuku asked, since he would need help getting it off. Keep that on, it's not dangerous, just be careful. Izuku walked back to and opened the door to see the class all talking. How'd it go, Izuku? Shoji asked as he went back to his seat. Fine, they just needed to change my hero costume because of the wings. Shoji nodded in understanding. Okay, now that everyone is here today, we'll be picking hero names, and to help with that is me, Kayama called as she burst through the door with a smile. Wait, why aren't you helping Aizawa-sensei? Uraraka asked, a little confused. Hero names aren't my thing. Izuku smiled. He had heard how Aizawa got his hero name from Kayama and Yamada enough to know the teacher was a little embarrassed about the story. Now, everyone take one and pass the rest back. The class all passed the whiteboard and markers back to everyone. You'll write the hero name you want and come to the front to show everyone. And then I'll either give you the go-ahead, make you change it, or edit it a little. Everyone either began writing on the board or trying to come up with ideas. Waizachin. Izuku looked to Katsuki, who was leaning back in his chair. You remember the name we came up with for me? Izuku had to think about it for a minute. I think it was Ground Zero. Katsuki hummed. Though it was King Explosion Murder. Izuku chuckled a little. Kakin, that was the one you came up with. Katsuki smirked as he leaned back up. I don't care, I'm using it. Izuku laughed quietly again. He noticed he was doing that a lot more. He kinda liked it. Katsuki went to the front and presented his idea, which ended with him being turned down and Kirishima poking a little fun at him. Told you it wasn't a good idea. Katsuki smirked and shoved Izuku playfully, making the boy laugh again. Shut up. The rest of the time went on like that, with people going up and presenting names, with some being good while others had to be changed. Once it got to the end, Katsuki gave in and chose Ground Zero. When he sat back down, Izuku stood up and presented his own name. Seraph. I would have thought Phoenix. Izuku isn't sure who said it, but he flinched slightly and saw Katsuki, Momo, Aizawa, and Kayama glared for a second before Kayama smiled again. Good name. Short and has meaning. Izuku nodded his head and sat back down. You chose hero names because you'll be interning with heroes for a week. Aizawa showed them the amount of offers everyone got. Izuku was a little shocked to see that he had a good amount of them. Who do you think you'll pick? Shoto asked, looking at Izuku's list of heroes. I think I might go for Hawks. He fights with wings, so maybe he can help me with mine. Izuku explained. What about you? Shoto looked at his own paper for a moment. I think I might intern under my father. Izuku turned to him a little shocked. I've just started using my fire. He may be able to help me control it more. Izuku stared at him for a moment. As long as you think it's safe. School was ending and Izuku was staying behind. He had noticed Katsuki and Shoto doing the same, though they were both glaring at each other. What's half and half here? Katsuki asked. He was still a little angry about the sports festival. Izuku rolled his eyes and nudged Katsuki. He's here because he wants to see his brother. Remember me telling you about Talia? Izuku asked. Katsuki's eyes seemed to light up with understanding and looked at the other boy with a softer glare. Fine, let's go then. The three made it to the nap room and Shoto seemed confused at the noise he was hearing while Katsuki rolled his eyes and Izuku laughed a little. They opened the door to find Talia pretending to be dead, Himiko in the corner trying to cover her laughing, and Kauta and Eri in the middle, both with fake swords and cheering. The dragon has been killed. You're a safe princess, Kauta yelled, walking over to Himiko. Thank you, my knights. She was still trying not to laugh. No worries, ma'am. Eri turned and saw the three and gasped. You must be the kings of this city. No need to thank us for saving your princess. Izuku laughed a little as him and Katsuki walked forward, both picking up one of the kids. Thank you, knights, you're our heroes, Izuku stated, giving Kauta a kiss on the head. But there's another dragon, Katsuki joked, turning to Shoto. He's the evil dragon's brother and he wants revenge. Shoto looked confused and looked to Izuku for help. He set Kauta down and whispered in the other boy's ear, pretend to be a dragon. Shoto was still a little confused but nodded his head. RAWR. Katsuki and Himiko doubled over laughed while Kauta and Eri seemed to light up and run to his legs. Evil dragon, what do you have to say for your crimes? Kauta shouted, pointing the sword at him. He saw Talia give him a thumbs up from the floor. Sorry. The two children looked at him for a moment. Mock, you are forgiven. Eri hugged his legs, shocking him even more. Hi. My name is Eri. Are you a friend of Nyai-san? Shoto looked confused again, but this time Talia saved him. He's my little brother, you two, so play nice. The two looked between Talia and Shoto. My name's Kauta, I'm the king here, Kauta declared, making Katsuki smirk. Oh, you think so, brat? Wanna test that? The two then began to play fight while Izuku explained everything. This is Eri and Kauta. They were the kids we were with and Kakin knew me before I was there. Shoto nodded his head as he sat down on the floor next to his brother and Himiko. I'll be right back. Izuku stood up and walked to his room and unlocked the door and closed it before he went to his closet and pulled out a plain black shirt, dark brown leather jacket, and black jeans. He was putting the jacket on when there was a knock on the door and someone walked in. "Hey Izuku," Aizawa-sensei said. Izuku froze for a second as Shinsu walked through the door. "Sorry, I didn't." Izuku snapped out of it. No, you're fine. Can you actually help me for a second?" Shinsu nodded and walked over and snapped the last 2 clips into place on the back of the jacket. "Thanks, I'm not used to that yet, but what did you need?" Shinsu rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, I was looking for you and Aizawa said you should be here." He drifted off a little and looked around the room, which makes sense since it is your room, I guess. "But I was seeing how you were doing after the sports festival. Last time I saw you, you were a little banged up." Izuku smiled at the boy. "I'm doing better. Recovery girl says my hands should be better now, and since I'm keeping my wings out, it's actually making parts of my body stronger since the extra weight." Shinsu nodded his head. "Nice. I should probably leave." Izuku chuckled a little and stopped the boy. "If you want me, my siblings and a friend are all relaxing, you could come and join us," Izuku offered. Shinsu looked to the side for a moment but nodded his head. "Yeah, sure, sounds fun." They walked silently back to the nap room where they heard laughing before they opened the door. "Holy fuck, half and half. I can't breathe." Katsuki was on the ground holding his stomach. "You're telling me you don't see the resemblance?" Izuku rolled his eyes, not even wanting to know what they were talking about at this point. "I'm back. This is Shinsu Hitoshi." "Shinsu, this is Taoya, Himiko, Kaken, Eri, Kauta, and Shaoto," Izuku explained. "Sup, I begs. See, you're really creative," Kaken Shinsu teased, making the other jump and glare. "Oi, fucking watch it." After that, they all seemed to calm down a little and Izuku sat next to Katsuki with the blonde linking an arm around his arm. Izuku was packing a messenger bag with his clothes while the 4 all laid on his bed. "Do you have to go for a week, Izuku? Can't we come with you?" Kauta asked from his spot on Taoya's lap. "Please, Nai-san. What if you get hurt?" Eri begged while Himiko did her hair. "I'm sorry, but you can't come with me. And I'll be fine, okay? I'm interning with the number 3 hero. And I'll call every night, okay?" He hugged them both before turning to Taoya and Himiko. "Thank you for playing with them while I'm gone." "Of course, Izuku," Himiko cheered while hugging him. "It's the least we could do." Taoya got a faraway look in his eyes before Himiko dragged him into the hug too. "So you chose the hero manual?" Uraraka asked Ida as they all stood at the train station. "Yes, I believe it will be a fantastic learning opportunity." Izuku stared at him for a moment. The entire class knew what happened to his brother at this point. "Ada," the 2 turned to him. "I know we aren't super close, but you're one of my friends. Call me if something's wrong, okay? You should never go through anything alone." The 2 looked at him shocked. "Oh, thank you, Mido Izuku." "Thank you, Izuku, but I'll be okay. Have a good internship." He waved goodbye as he got on his train. Izuku looked after him with a blank expression while Uraraka looked worried. "Will he be okay?" Uraraka asked Izuku after a couple seconds. "Hopefully." Izuku walked the street looking for the address. He could see a few people staring at him. Some people even stopped him and congratulated him about the sports festival. He was a little lost at this point, until he heard someone. "Hey." He looked up in time to see Hawks landing in front of him with a wide smile. "Your Midori, you're right." He nodded his head, still a little shocked. "Fantastic. My place is over here." Izuku followed him while looking around. "So Midoriya, what do you like?" "Oh, I like music. Hanging out with my siblings and friends." Izuku didn't really know what he liked all that much. "How many siblings you have?" I have my little brother Kauta and my little sister Eri. And some of my classmates and friends are my siblings too. And I have Mirio, Tamaki, and Nijiria's siblings, and Taoya and Himiko who are my older siblings." Hawks looked a little amazed. "Wow, that's a lot of siblings you got. How many are blood related?" "None. My dad calls us the found family sometimes though." Hawks hummed and nodded. "Welp, we're here. Let's go get you changed and we'll start right away." Izuku changed into his hero outfit and walked out to the gym area where Hawks was. "Nice. Love the look, kid. Now what weapons do you use, if any?" Izuku pulled out the knife on his thigh holster. "Usually just this, but..." He clicked the button on the side of his neck, making the blades on his wings appear again. "I just got this from a friend, but I haven't tried it out yet." "Holy shit." Hawks jumped back a little in shock as the blades seemed to just appear. Izuku looked at him a little worried. "Sorry, just scared me." He laughed it off while Izuku just nodded his head. "And I chose you since I figured you could help me learn to fight with my wings since I don't really use them all that often," Izuku explained. Hawks hummed as he walked around Izuku and stood behind him. "Can you stretch them out?" Izuku nodded before opening them. Hawks looked at them for a moment. "Okay. Fly up and hover next to me." Both of them flew up and hovered close to the ceiling, though Izuku had to flap his wings a little to stay there. "So you can fly. Great, and it looks like the blades don't bother you, so that's good too." Hawks laid down in the air for a second. "Well, I saw your fighting style during the sports festival and I don't think we need to worry about it, but you want to add your wings to that, right?" Izuku nodded his head. Okay, let's start with something simple. Have you ever used your wings to protect someone before? If you have, show me how. Izuku nodded his head before they both landed back on the ground. I used them once to protect someone from a gun. Hawks looked shocked as Izuku moved his wings in front of him like a cocoon, and there was the USJ. Izuku moved a little and got into a low defensive position like he was crouched over someone and spread his wings out, but that's about it. He stood up and folded his wings behind him again. You definitely have the right idea. Have you ever used them to attack before? Izuku shook his head. Okay, that I can help on. So let's do a spar and only use your wings. Izuku nodded and got into a fighting position. Hawks used one of his larger feathers as a sword and got ready. They both stood there looking at each other before Hawks sent smaller feathers forward to distract Izuku, who used one of his wings to push them away before Hawks bolted forward and swung at him. Izuku dodged before pushing against it with his other wing. You're a pretty good fighter, kid. I don't think I've fought someone like that in a while. Both were out of breath and now taking a break. Thank you. Hawks smiled before ruffling his hair. Of course. Now why don't we go on a patrol? It was the third day of the internships and Izuku had improved a lot. He was able to use his wings and support items like second nature, and was able to make them appear and disappear with ease. You've been doing really well, kid. I think you're ready for anything at this point. Izuku smiled and bowed slightly to Hawks. Thanks, I'm glad you were willing to teach me. Hawks smiled and pulled Izuku into a headlock and rubbed his head. Don't sweat it. He let Izuku go, who was smiling more now. I think we're gonna patrol near Hasu. Since the hero killer was spotted there, they want to see if we can get him. At the mention of the hero killer, he got a sad look in his eyes and thought about Ida. Do they know how Ingenium is doing? Hawks looked a little surprised but shook his head. No, not really. Haven't heard anything. Aren't you friends with his brother? Izuku nodded his head. Yes, but he's been more distant. He's also interning with someone from Hasu. And you think he's gonna go after the hero killer himself, right? Izuku nodded his head and Hawks smiled. Don't worry about it. We'll be heading there tonight. If we run into them, we can check on your friend. Izuku smiled. Thank you, Hawks. You can just call me Keigo. It's easier. He nodded his head. You can call me Izuku then. Most people do. Hawks smiled brightly and playfully pushed Izuku. Well then, Izuku, get ready so we can head out. The two decided to fly to Hasu since they wanted to check Izuku's stamina for flying. Luckily, he was keeping up just fine. Okay, so while we're here, keep an eye out for anything that might seem suspicious. Got it? If you see anything and I'm busy helping some, assume you have permission to use your quirk. Izuku nodded. Hawks had to scream since the wind rushing past them was loud. They were flying near a train car when they noticed someone being thrown into the train with a creature attacking them. Izuku's eyes widened. Keigo, that's a Namu. Hawks nodded as the two dived down to see the damage. The hero there seemed to be okay and fighting off the creature while another hero guided the people to safety. There's more of these things in the city. The two flew as fast as they could to the city where they could see fires breaking out. They both landed and ran trying to help civilians when Izuku saw something in an alley not far from them. It was 3 bodies off in an alley with nothing else, no fire or anything. He turned to where Hawks was helping people. Hawks caught his eyes and realized what he was trying to say. Go. You and anyone you run into is given permission to use their quirks in self-defense by the number 3 hero Hawks. Izuku nodded his head as he took off to where he saw the 3. Izuku was running with his wings away so they wouldn't slow him down. He turned a corner and heard people yelling. No matter what, you're the criminal that hurt my brother. His eyes widened before he made his wings appear and flew a little above where he heard the voices. When he saw the hero killer raised his sword above Ida, he let himself fall and swing his wings at the hero killer, who jumped back and away from the knives while Izuku crouched over Ida with an arm near the other's head. Are you okay, Tenya? The other teen seemed frozen under Izuku in shock while the hero killer steadied himself. He didn't let his eyes leave the hero killer though. You're the kid. Izuku tensed a little from Shigaraki's pictures. Izuku glared even more and let out a small growl, though it was muffled by his mask. I can't move my body, Ida finally answered. Izuku spared a small glance at him. Ever since he cut me, I think it's his quirk. Izuku nodded and slowly stood up with his arms lighting up with blue fire. Your friend came to save you. Izuku watched the hero killer with careful eyes. That's a good line, isn't it? But I have a duty to kill him. If we clash, of course, the weaker will be killed. Now what will you do? Izuku didn't flinch as he felt the bloodlust from the hero killer. He stood up more with his wings spread out and small fires on him. I'm going to protect my friend, whether or not I die. Stain looked shocked as Izuku charged forward with his knife in hand. He was close to Stain and saw he was going to aim for his wings. He quickly made them disappear as he got closer. Stain smirked and Izuku saw he was pulling another knife out. Watch out, he's going to cut you. Izuku blocked the knife as he slid under the killer's legs. Stain slashed down where Izuku was previously, but was shocked when he didn't see the teen there. He looked up, seeing Izuku above him with his wings out again, aimed at the hero killer, who dodged as Izuku slid back in front of Ida on his knees and one hand. The hero killer smirked as he readied another attack while it seemed like Izuku was down. Izuku smirked under his mask and stood up feeling heat. He jumped and twisted in the air as a stream of fire was shot at the hero killer and pushed him away from the two. A lot of people are getting in my way. Stain growled out as Todoroki stood there with his left side burning and holding a phone in the other. You almost made me late, Izuku. You aren't one to send cryptic messages. Izuku kept his eyes on the hero killer as Todoroki spoke. I assume it was a call for help, right? He used his ice to lift the downed hero in the corner before using more fire and aiming it at Stain. The heroes will be here soon. Izuku nodded as he stood up and made his wings disappear, ready to fight. Some of the ice melted as Izuku jumped over and grabbed onto the hero and helped him over to where Ada was still on the ground while Todoroki covered him. We won't let you kill anyone else, hero killer, Todoroki declared with his arm on fire. Izuku set the hero down and turned just as Stain jumped with a knife. You have good friends in Genium. He swung the knife at Todoroki only for Izuku to block it with his own and his back against Todoroki's right side. He seemed shocked before they all drew their attention to the sword now in the air. Izuku pulled Todoroki back as Stain tried to lick a cut on his cheek. Izuku swung his own knife at the killer with fire following, forcing him back. He's strong. Todoroki sent a small wave of ice to try and send him back more, but Stain simply cut through it. He sent more waves of ice as Izuku tracked his movements through infrared. Stain cut through all the waves to block your own view against an opponent faster than you. Izuku watched him and searched for anything that could come flying at them. That's a foolish plan. He got closer to Todoroki, ready to protect the other. I wonder about that. Izuku saw the knives coming for Todoroki's arm. He pulled the other over while he dove in front of them, the knives embedding themselves into Izuku's arm. You're pretty good too. Izuku saw him change and charge for the three heroes now on the ground. He made his wings appear again and blocked his swords. With the distraction, Izuku was able to grab onto him and fly slightly and drag him against the wall before Stain kicked him, making them both fall. Izuku, Todoroki yelled as he sent more ice as Izuku flew up and out of the way. He made his wings disappear as he landed next to the other team before they both turned back to the hero killer. Stop. Leave. This is my fight, Ada shouted. Izuku held his knife in front of him before charging at the hero killer. Stain dodged and tried to swing at him only for ice to appear and block the sword. Todoroki used his flames to fire at Stain while Izuku controlled them slightly so they wouldn't hit anyone else. If this is your fight, then get up. The Ingenium I know would never wear a face like that. Stain jumped out of the way and slashed over Izuku's chest and licked the blood, forcing Izuku to stop moving. As he saw Stain fly over to him, he noticed that he was acting more erratic than before. Todoroki used his fire again and pushed the hero killer away from Izuku. He focused his attacks on Todoroki now, after breaking the ice, and got closer to the other teen as Todoroki lit up his body. No one's ever told you. Izuku's eyes widened as he felt his own fire begin to appear on him. You're too focused on your quirk. You're being careless. Izuku tried to move as Stain dodged the flames and ice and got close enough to almost cut his arm off. Shouto, Izuku yelled, still trying to get up. Ada flew across the alley and broke the blade with his kick before using his other leg to kick Stain away from Todoroki. He almost hit the wall as he skid to a stop. Tenya, Izuku yelled with relief. You got free? Todoroki asked, looking at the panting teen. Izuku, Todoroki, I have to apologize. This has nothing to do with you two. Izuku felt slight tears leave his eyes, so please, leave while you can. Out of the question, Stain yelled as he sped forward while Todoroki shot more fire at him. He dodged and jumped to the ground as Todoroki sent waves of ice. Izuku noticed his pattern faltering. He was trying to speed things up, trying to kill Ida and the other pro before help arrived. You're in the way. He threw a knife at Todoroki only for Ida to become a shield for Todoroki. Tenya, Izuku felt himself move and froze for a second. Ida took another blade. Todoroki, I need you to freeze my leg without clogging my engines. Todoroki looked shocked but did as he was told. Izuku slowly stood up but was having trouble with the still bleeding wounds. Ada took off with a burst as Izuku did the same with his non-injured arm covered in blue fire. They both hit him at the same time, successfully knocking him out. All three landed on the ground with Izuku stumbling a little as his wings disappeared before Todoroki caught him and steadied him. Are you okay? He nodded his head even though it was obviously a lie. He pushed off Todoroki a little and approached the hero killer. Do any of you have rope? He asked. The once down pro hero nodded his head and finally stood up. Here, good job, but you'll all be in trouble for illegal quirk usage. Izuku glared as he took the rope. No, he won't. He took his phone out and hit a few things before a clip played. It was Hawks telling him he had permission to use his quirk and that anyone else he ran into could do the same. He put his phone away before disarming the killer and tying him up. They dragged him out of the alley while Izuku looked over the other heroes and wrapping any wounds he could at the moment. Izuku, you need. Todoroki was cut off as a group of pro heroes ran over to them, including Hawks, Endeavor, and Manuel. Hey, Izuku, we got. Is that the hero killer? Hawks shouted at seeing the tied up man. I found him trying to kill Native and Todoroki and Ida helped me take him down. The three behind him quickly noticed the lie but didn't say anything. Jesus kid, is everyone okay? Another hero asked. Izuku shook his head and began telling the heroes the injuries the other three obviously had. Izuku Ida tried to speak this time since Izuku was ignoring his own injuries in favor of the others. Duck. Before they could all get down, Izuku was grabbed by a flying Namu. All stood in shock trying to think of a way to get him down when Stain jumped up and licked the blood of the Namu off another hero and sent it crashing before he caught Izuku and carefully laid him down. The hero killer turned to the other heroes who had frozen in fear from the mere presence of him. You're all fakes. They all felt the bloodlust and froze as he slowly approached him. The only people I will let capture me are All Might and him. He pointed to Izuku who was trying to stand up. He got closer to them just as Izuku finally stood up. He ran and tackled the hero killer, knocking him out again as the others just stood there in shock. Are you all okay? Izuku asked, trying to breathe since all the movement worsened his injuries. That seemed to snap most of them out as Hawks, Endeavor, Ada, and Todoroki ran over to the two. Izuku's vision swam as he almost fell over before Hawks caught him. He's losing a lot of blood. We need to get him to the hospital now. Hawks picked him up trying not to aggravate his wounds before taking off to a hospital. Izuku woke up in a panic and almost flung himself out of his bed until two people stopped him. It's okay Izuku, calm down. Izuku, we're here, you're safe. He calmed down hearing Todoroki and Ida. Are you two okay? He asked, finally opening his eyes and seeing clearly. We should be asking you that. Ada scolded. Izuku looked them over and saw they were okay and let out a breath of relief until he noticed he was crying. Izuku, you're crying. Todoroki pointed out, making Ada stop mid-rant as they both looked at him in concern. Sorry, I just thought that I might have lost you both ... and if I didn't make it in time. He was cut off as the two other boys pulled him into a hug. You're not getting rid of us. Todoroki spoke, making Izuku laugh a little. Todoroki is correct. We are closer now more than ever. Izuku's quiet laugh turned into loud laughter as the two let him go and looked even more shocked. So sorry, it's just he could speak as he laughed more, making the two join in. Once he calmed down, he spoke again. Thank you both. I'm glad I have friends like you guys. All three smiled before they began talking about their internships and what they had learned. I'm glad you three are okay. The chief of police spoke with Hawks, Endeavor, and Manuel by his side, but there are consequences for acting without a license. Todoroki glared. What? If we hadn't acted, then someone could have died. Mangy mutt. Todoroki whispered the last part under his breath. Yes, but since you didn't get permission, Izuku cut him off this time. Actually, we did. Izuku pulled his phone out and played the same clip as before, making Hawks smirk with pride. So we aren't in trouble since we did have permission and it was in self-defense. The others seemed shocked while Hawks just looked so proud. I see. I wasn't aware. Well then, we don't need to give the credit to someone else then. Congratulations, boys. You've taken down the hero killer. When the chief of police left, Hawks flew over and pulled Izuku into a hug. That's why I have the best intern. Good job, kid. Izuku blushed and thanked the hero quietly. We should probably leave you all to rest. I'm glad all of you are alive. But that the three heroes left the three boys to themselves. Shouto. Did you call the chief of police a mangy mutt? Izuku asked with a small smile on his face. The other smiled and shrugged. Todoroki, it is inappropriate to call a person of authority such names. It was night and none of them seemed to be able to sleep, all of them just either laying in bed, or in Izuku's case, sitting up and looking out the window. Izuku. The boy turned to Ida, who was now sitting up. If I may ask, where did you get all of those scars? Izuku stared at him. He trusted Ida. When I was 5, I was kidnapped by a group of villains. They wanted to use me as a weapon and would torture me and my parents before they killed them. I met other people they wanted as weapons. That's where I met Eri and Kauta. I was supposed to take care of them and they were used against me until I escaped with them. He explained quickly. It was silent. Todoroki already knew everything and all the details. I'm sorry that happened to you, Izuku. Izuku smiled and turned to Ada. I'm sorry we couldn't save your brother. It was finally morning and the three had at least gotten some rest. What'd they say about your arm? Izuku asked once Ada had returned. They said it'll have slight nerve damage. They could possibly fix it. But I don't want to. Not yet, at least. Not until I prove I can be a true hero. Izuku smiled and walked over, showing his own bandaged arm. Now we match. That got a smile out of the other teen at least. Am I cursed? Both looked to Todoroki. What do you mean, Todoroki? Ada asked, looking worried. It just seems whenever I'm involved, people's hands get injured. Am I the hand crusher or something? It was silent until Ada and Izuku broke out into laughter. I'm being serious, guys. The two continued laughing while Todoroki playfully rolled his eyes.